This is Murim. It's a world of superhumans. People who can break mountains and split rivers with a single swing. The power they had was just unreal. It was a world where you'd fight to the death during the day and then drink together like brothers in the evening. But that was a lie. That kind of life was only for the powerful clans with a solid reputation. For a nobody, a mere novice, this world was just a ruthless hell. It was so bad, he actually started to miss his old life back on Earth, where his biggest problems were debt and schoolwork. No, he corrected himself. Compared to this place, his old home was heaven. And in this hell, the only thing that mattered was survival. Every moment was a fight. Enemies would come out of nowhere, trying to take him down. But he had survived like this for 7 years, rolling with every punch the world threw at him. After everything he'd been through, there was no way he was going to die now. He remembered his master, the man who gave him a relic sword. To Il-yang, that sword meant he could finally eat and survive. The master told him to never be intimidated and to only pick solid fights, to live on a knife's edge. Il-yang asked for his teacher's name, wanting to remember him. The master's name was Doghorn, but after all that training, all that survival, his official status was nothing, unranked and untested. It felt like a joke. He felt like he'd only ever gotten away with things by pure luck. It was infuriating. He was locked in a fight with another warrior. A massive blast of energy came right for him, but Il-yang was already moving, dodging it completely. With a determined look, he shot forward like a blur, closing the gap in an instant. A blade appeared out of nowhere, stopping just inches from the man's face. But the warrior reacted just in time, knocking the blade away with a flash of energy. The bald warrior was furious, accusing him of using cheap and despicable tactics. Il-yang's face twisted in anger at the words. Il-yang explained that the blade was just a distraction. His real attack was a hidden technique called amgi, a paralyzing poison. He told the man he wasn't going to die, at least not easily. The warrior was so humiliated, he screamed at Il-yang to just finish him off. But Il-yang just looked disgusted by the whole thing. He'd had enough. He told the man he was leaving and warned him not to follow. As Il-yang leaped away, the warrior was left on the ground, screaming that the heavens would punish him for this. He thought back to when he first fell into the world of Murim. He'd cried out to any god that would listen, but no one ever answered. He was thrown into poverty with nothing. The only way to survive was to pursue strength above all else, because in that world, the powerful ruled everything. In order to survive and become stronger, he did whatever it took, no matter how dirty or painful. Through all that suffering, he finally became a top-ranked warrior. But even reaching the top wasn't enough. The feeling of achievement didn't last long. His skills in martial arts had hit a dead end. He was standing in front of a wall he just couldn't break through. The desire to reach that next level became an obsession, like a drug. That's when he found a secret delivery from a top-class martial artist. Inside were several pills of Bihuandan. He knew it was dangerous, but it was worth the risk. He was sure that if he took them all, he would finally break past the wall that was holding him back. He was sure this was the moment. Today, he would finally reach the top of Murim. But then, a voice cut through the air. An old man appeared out of nowhere, calling him a thief for stealing the clan's secret techniques. Il-yang couldn't believe it. He never even sensed him approaching. The old man just stood there, casually asking him what was wrong. The man continued to mock him, explaining that he didn't need to sneak up. He was so confident in his power that he could finish Il-yang whenever he wanted. Furious, Il-yang drew his sword. He shouted back that he had mastered everything on his own and didn't owe anyone anything for his strength. But the old man just calmly explained that the medicine belonged to the Amifa clan. The moment Il-yang heard that name, his heart sank. He knew he was in serious trouble. The punishment for stealing the clan's elixirs and secret techniques was simple: death. Il-yang braced himself for the end, but nothing happened. He waited to die, but the world around him just felt strange. He was confused. In that final moment, his body went limp. He had been defeated. He fell to the ground, his life fading away. All that fighting, all that suffering, it felt like it was for nothing. He couldn't accept an end like this. He couldn't believe this was really how he was going to die. Then, everything went dark. But then, he suddenly shot up, yelling out loud. He looked around, completely bewildered. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a classroom. An older man, who looked like a professor, called out to him. He asked if he'd suddenly gone crazy. Il-yang's eyes widened. He knew that face. It was Professor Jung-soo. Oh, the impossible thought hit him all at once. Was he back on Earth? Il-yang tried to tell himself it was just a dream, one he'd had before. But the professor's annoyed voice cut through, asking why he was screaming. Everything felt way too vivid to be fake. He got up from his desk and walked right up to the professor. He had to be sure. He called out to him, and the old man just looked back, confused. With tears welling up in his eyes, Il-yang made a crazy request. He begged the professor to hit him with the stick, just to prove this was real. The professor was completely thrown off. He didn't know what to make of the student's bizarre behavior. But then, a thought struck him. Could this be another returnee? Il-yang had no idea what that meant. He just looked back, confused and sweating, and hesitantly agreed. Back in what looked like his room, Il-yang started looking up what a returnee even was. The phone explained it was someone who got sucked through a dimensional rift and then came back to Earth. He realized that must be what happened to him. He kept reading. Turns out, returnees had a high chance of getting a unique class and had a strong connection to something called mana. It all sounded like words from a game, but it was apparently real. He put the phone down. He needed to see what was happening in the world. So he turned on the TV. The first thing on the news was a story about a crystal elixir that just sold for over 300 billion won. It was a real-life potion, like something straight out of a fantasy story. The winning winning bidder was Chairman Lee Kang-ho. Il-yong recognized the name. While he was fighting for scraps just to survive, this man was buying a potion to live forever. He changed the channel, and a flashy ad popped up for an academy that trained knights and wizards. It was all so strange. Modern Korea was full of this stuff now. Every channel had something crazy, magical earmuffs that let you understand any language, and other strange products from another world. It was a lot to take in. He just started laughing. The whole thing was completely ridiculous. He fell back onto his bed, just letting it all sink in. Il-yong lay back, trying to get it all straight. One day, a mysterious portal just opened up, connecting Earth to another dimension. Through that portal came a being from a world called Pangea, a god named Jamoshin. This being appeared all over the world, greeting humanity. Amidst all the shock and confusion, Jamoshin Osiris made an offer. He told them about the monsters in his dimension, Pangea. The deal was simple. If humans hunted them, they could have all the rights to whatever they found. And just like that, the age of adventurers began. Powerful monsters had mana stones inside them, and these stones completely changed Earth's energy industry. Everything from cars to planes started running on this new power source. On top of that, all sorts of magical items started appearing. Healing potions, enchanted weapons, and even elixirs that could bring someone back from the brink of death. This was the start of the Great Adventurer era. Il-yong just sat there, taking it all in. He let out a laugh. It was good to be back on Earth, but he had to wonder, what else had changed? He sat down and tried to focus, searching for the energy he once had. He reached for his old power, but there was nothing there. It was completely gone. A strange feeling hit him. He'd wanted to escape that hell for so long, but now that he was back, he felt empty without his old skills. Just then, his phone started ringing. He looked at the screen and saw a name he hadn't seen in years, Soon Chang Park. He answered the phone, and his friend Soon Chang was on the other end, yelling with excitement. He couldn't believe Il-yong was really back after disappearing for 4 years. Il-yong was confused, telling him it had been 7 years for him. Soon Chang explained that time works differently for returnees, and that he should just be glad he survived. Then he laughed, mentioning he'd already heard the story about Il-yong, asking the professor to beat him up. Il-yong couldn't believe the rumor had spread that fast. His friend explained that news about returnees is a huge deal, especially since they can get a unique class when they awaken. Soon Chang then asked him when he was going to take the awakening test. He told Il-yong he should become an adventurer, calling it a lottery ticket that could change his life. Il-yong stopped him, catching the words. He asked something if Soon Chang was an adventurer. His friend just said that's exactly why he was calling. Soon Chang mentioned that their department had now produced 2 of those rare returnees, counting Il-yong. But Il-yong cut straight to the point and asked if being an adventurer paid well. His friend told him it paid more than he could ever imagine. Next day, he was standing outside the Adventurers Association. It was time to take the test. As Il-yong walked up, he saw a huge crowd of people holding signs and cheering. It felt just like a big college entrance exam day. Families were everywhere, giving their kids last-minute encouragement. They were telling them to aim high and get noticed by one of the major clans. One young woman was getting advice on how to impress the god of magic, determined to become a wizard. Il-yong, on the other hand, was completely alone. He had to give himself his own pep talk. Suddenly, someone in the crowd pointed right at him. A shout went up. It was the returnee. In a second, every single person was staring. Il-yong had no idea what was going on. A mob of reporters was suddenly rushing toward him, all shouting for a story. He was completely caught off guard. His first thought was that he hadn't even practiced his signature yet. A reporter shoved through the crowd, yelling for someone to get out of the way. Il-yong flinched, thinking the guy was shouting at him, but they just pushed past some other guy. They weren't even looking in Il-yong's direction. Turns out, they were all rushing toward a woman with bright red hair. Her name was Hong Hua-yun, and she was the other returnee. Il-yong realized with relief it wasn't him they were after. The reporters swarmed Hua-yun, asking about her famous S-class brother. As she answered their questions, 2 guys nearby wondered out loud where the other returnee was. Il-yong was standing right behind them, completely ignored. After all the chaos outside, Il-yong finally made it into the testing facility. The waiting room was filled with other hopefuls, and the air was heavy with tension. An announcement came over the speakers. The awakening test for prospective adventurers was about to begin, conducted with something called a divine stone. The second the announcement ended, everyone scrambled forward in a rush. Il-yong was surprised by how quickly things were moving. A woman at the front of the room announced it was time to get started with the awakening test. The administrator pulled a cloth off a glowing orb on a pedestal, announcing it was time to begin. He told the first guy in line to put a drop of blood on the stone. The man stepped forward, placing his hand over the glowing orb. He pricked his finger, and a single drop of blood fell onto the orb's surface. The moment it touched, a bright light flared up. The man stumbled back, clutching his head. He yelled out that a god had just spoken to him. The administrator smiled, saying he was lucky. A system window popped up, showing the man's name was Kong Baekchul. He was a level 1 vanguard with incredible strength. Watching from the side, Il-yong thought it felt just like a video game. The woman officially congratulated Kong Baekchul, telling him that Vanguard was a high-level class. He exploded with joy, screaming that his life was set. Everyone else in the room looked on with envy. Il-yong learned that a Vanguard was a rare tanker class, meant to fight on the front lines. He wasn't the only one paying attention. Representatives from all the major clans were watching, already scouting the new talent. As the clans started making their moves, the next adventurer stepped up. His name was Kim Sang-ji. The system window appeared, but his result was completely different. He was just a low-class porter porter, and the disappointment on his face was obvious. The man collapsed in despair. His class, porter, was the lowest possible rank. It was basically a dead end for anyone hoping to be an adventurer. The administrator didn't waste any time and called for the next person, a girl named Jaya. Jaya stepped up and gave her drop of blood. The administrator announced that she was a wizard with unusually high mana. The girl was thrilled, saying now she could be like her dad. Il-yang watched thoughtfully. He knew that unlike physical strength, mana was a natural gift. You either had it or you didn't. The administrator called out the next name, Honghua Yeon. A woman with long red hair stepped forward, and the administrator greeted her like she already knew her. She was told to put a drop of blood on the stone. Without hesitation, she pricked her finger and let the blood fall. The moment it touched the surface, a huge flash of light erupted. This was the Pangea's god system activating. But instead of a simple class window, a vision appeared. It showed a massive, beautiful building with a message from the system. Then the scene changed completely. It showed a group of powerful-looking people, all fighting and yelling at each other, desperate to be first. The vision showed powerful beings fighting over something, desperate to claim it for themselves. From below, a dark, cloaked figure started walking towards them. The fight was so intense that some of them just gave up, completely exhausted. But the cloaked figure, a god holding a massive scythe, declared that the child belonged to him. The vision ended, and Honghua Yeon's status window appeared. The system showed her divine contact was the harvest god. Her mana was a shocking 22, and her intelligence was 18. The administrator announced that Honghua Yeon's class was a witch, a class no one had ever seen before. She congratulated her on being the only one. The crowd couldn't believe it. Honghua Yeon just smiled, thanked the administrator, and walked away. One of the officials wondered if a witch used spells or curses, but he quickly realized it didn't matter. With an initial mana of 22, she was on a completely different level. They all agreed she was a super rookie, a guaranteed #1 pick. With that settled, the administrator called for the next person to step up. As the room buzzed about the girl who went before him, Kim Il-yang stood there, looking unimpressed. He didn't get what all the fuss was about. He felt like things were getting more complicated by the second. Just then, an administrator called his name, asking if he was Kim Il-yang. He calmly said yes. The officials started whispering. They recognized him as the returnee they'd heard about. Even Honghua Yeon peeked out from a doorway, curious about what would happen. The administrator held out a glowing stone. She told him to drip his blood onto it to start the test. Il-yang took a breath, telling himself not to worry. He pricked his finger with a small needle, getting ready. A single drop of blood fell from his fingertip, heading straight for the glowing stone below. The moment it made contact, a jolt of pain shot through his entire body. He let out a sharp grunt, his eyes wide with shock. But instead of a system window, a voice echoed in his mind. It was a cheerful greeting, as if he was an old friend. His vision shifted, and he was suddenly standing before a huge crowd of powerful beings. One of them mocked him, calling him a romantic in a martial arts world. Il-yang was totally lost. He had no idea what a martial arts world even was. Back in the real world, the officials were piecing it together. One of them explained that the martial arts world was just another name for one of the many other dimensions. Inside the vision, the gods started getting excited. A goddess sipping wine pointed out that as a returnee, he had huge potential. She warned the others not to miss out on him this time. That's all it took. The entire hall erupted into a massive fight. Every single god was screaming, determined to claim him for themselves. But then, the goddess froze. She looked completely shocked by something he just communicated. She looked furious, calling him rude. She started pushing her way through the brawling gods, determined to finally meet him. A blue-haired goddess tried to make her way through the crowd, announcing she needed a contractor. But another god just shoved her aside, calling her a dum-dum. She was not happy about that. The insult just made her more determined. She floated into the air, glowing with power. She introduced herself as Hildegreen, the mother of every hero. The other gods looked shocked, suddenly realizing she was after the same kid they were. Hildegreen yelled down at them, but one of the lesser gods wasn't backing down. He shouted that Il-yang belonged to him and that they wouldn't be ignored. That's when one of them snapped and lunged forward to attack. Seeing her power, the other gods started teaming up, planning to take her down together. The whole crowd charged at once, ready to wipe out anyone standing in their way. But Hildegreen just unleashed a massive wave of energy, sending them all flying backwards. Il-yang's head was spinning. He had no idea where he was. Suddenly, a girl with bright blue hair grabbed him, happy to see he was awake. He looked around, completely lost. He realized this must be the legendary power he'd only ever heard about. She explained that they were somewhere between dimensions, in a heavenly land only open for that one day. Il-yang looked at her and asked who she was. She proudly announced that she was Hildegreen, the mother of all heroes. Il-yang's eyes went wide. He was standing in front of the god of heroes herself. Hildegreen smiled, finding him curious. She asked him for his name and for his dream. The question caught Il-yang completely off guard. He knew he couldn't lie to a god of contracts, so he decided to just be honest. He introduced himself as Kim Il-yang and said his dream was to live off his own skills. Hildegreen had no idea what that meant, so Il-yang explained it simply. He wanted to become a landlord and collect rent from other adventurers. For him, that was the best life imaginable. Hildegreen couldn't believe it. She asked if someone chosen by a heroic god was really going to let life just walk all over them. She then explained that there was a catch. Her chosen hero had to come from a world of nothingness, a place without heroes. Il-yang told her that his world had martial arts, but no real heroes. He said by day, he was just a lowly swordsman, but at night, he was a formidable warrior. warrior. She figured out that a lowly swordsman was just a mercenary, and she was relieved. She said even mercenaries could be heroes, but she was still confused about the other part of his life. He explained that it was someone who snuck into rich people's homes to steal their treasures. Hildegreen's face dropped. She shouted that he was just describing a common thief. Il-young grinned and confirmed it, thinking maybe he'd been a little too honest. Hildegreen was furious, asking why he was so proud of being a thief. She started freaking out. Since they had already met, the contract was sealed. She felt like she'd failed, but then she got an idea. She declared that she would make him a hero, even if she had to tear him apart and fix his way of thinking. Il-young was not having it. He yelled back that being a hero didn't sound like it would help him achieve his dream at all. Il-young yelled back at the god. He argued that being a hero was for suckers, and that he'd find his own way to make the contract work for him. He was so frustrated. He complained that he needed a god of martial arts, not some simple transformation god. But Hildegreen was done listening. She screamed that she was offering him the first contract from a high-grade god. She called him an arrogant earthling and told him to go home. Then she blasted him with a wave of energy. Back in the real world, everyone was confused. They just saw Il-young's head snap back like he'd been hit by something. He touched his cheek, realizing just how violent his new god really was. The administrator's voice cut through the confusion. She announced that Kim Il-young's awakening was complete. He pushed himself up from the floor and asked what his class was. She pointed to a floating screen. It showed his stats. He was a level 1 Ronin, contracted to the god of heroes. But the most interesting part was his new title, Foolish and Arrogant Earthling. Il-young just grinned, amused that the little god had gotten the last word. The other adventurers started whispering. They'd never heard of a Ronin class. That's when one of them realized what it meant. It was a unique class, the only one in existence. The crowd couldn't believe it. Another unique class had appeared, but one of them noticed his mana was 0 and wondered how he could possibly use skills. The others just stared, completely stunned by the reveal. The administrator congratulated Il-young on getting a unique class, but she also pointed out that his mana was 0, basically telling him to hang in there. Il-young just looked annoyed. Watching from a doorway, Manhwa thought to herself that returnees were like lottery tickets. She figured Il-young had a winning class, but his mana stat was just terrible. She watched him for another moment, then turned and walked away. Il-young walked off by himself, hoping the 0 mana was some kind of mistake. He desperately pulled up his status window, begging to find just a single active skill, but it was no use. Everything was inactive. His hope was fading until he saw one line at the very bottom, internal work 10. His eyes shot open. He couldn't believe it. A wave of golden energy suddenly flared to life inside his body. He could feel it, the power he had in the other world. A huge grin spread across his face as he realized it was back. He finally understood. This was why his mana was 0. With his confidence restored, he commanded the system to open his skills window. The system window exploded open, flooding his vision with countless blue screens. He could only stare, completely stunned. His shock turned to pure joy. Every famous martial art he had spent his life chasing was right here, listed in front of him. For someone who had nothing, this was like opening the gates to an endless treasure. A wave of golden energy washed over him as his internal power surged back to life. A smirk spread across his face. He thought about everyone who saw his stats and called them trash. They had no idea. He remembered his past, getting kicked around just for trying to learn. But all that time, he was watching. He knew the weaknesses of every one of those martial artists. Those 7 years of hell were not a waste. With his confidence fully restored, he was ready for whatever came next. But then he realized he was still in the waiting room. He was just sitting on the floor, glowing, while everyone else stared at him, completely confused about what was going on. The people around him had no idea what was going on. They just saw him sitting on the floor and asked if he needed to use the bathroom. But Il-young was focused on a system message. His skill proficiency had gone up, but only by a tiny amount. He wasn't disappointed. Slow progress was still progress. He realized he needed a better inner core method, and leveling up was probably the only way to get it. This just made him more determined to master all the skills he'd only ever dreamed of. The scene shifted to a lounge where the new adventurers were taking a break. It didn't take long for clan representatives to show up, offering drinks and asking about everyone's future plans. Manhwa was clearly the main prize. All the major clans were swarming her, making unbeatable offers. The other adventurers could only watch from the sidelines, completely jealous. One woman approached her, saying she'd heard that Manhwa's unique class came with special perks for leveling up. She couldn't hide her envy. Meanwhile, Il-young stood off to the side, just watching everyone. He overheard the talk about special privileges for unique classes, which was news to him. The whole vibe in the room just felt off. He looked around, completely unimpressed. In this mad rush for talent, even officials from powerful clans were getting shut down. Suddenly, an announcement cut through the noise. The break was over. All prospective adventurers told to report to the clearing. The next phase, aptitude training, was about to begin. A man stood before the group, explaining that this test was a chance for clan leaders to see their potential. He introduced himself as Do-yoon Lee, their instructor from the Adventurers Association. He looked over the crowd of new adventurers. He made a joke about one of them being an A-lister, saying he could smell the sunshine coming from them. The instructor then told them that from this point on, it was just them, the adventurers. Il-yang just smirked at the comment. Do-yoon Lee told everyone to put on their adventurer bracelets. He explained it was proof of their identity, allowing them to translate languages and look up info on others. He warned that anyone without one was likely an outsider or a killer. He continued, telling them to be careful because these killers weren't monsters. They were human hunters. Then he added that the bracelet also had a divine stone inside, giving them a chance to talk to their gods. Immediately, some of the adventurers started trying to contact their gods, shouting their thanks and asking for help. Il-yang just watched them, wondering if they actually heard anything. Il-yang's bracelet remained silent. The instructor, looking annoyed by the lack of divine responses, decided to move on. He announced the aptitude training was officially starting, and their first task was to find a weapon. Do-yoon Lee told them to choose carefully, calling a weapon an adventurer's best friend. As the others looked over the selection, Il-yang focused on one thing, finding a sword that felt right in his hand. He picked up a sword, testing its balance. It wasn't perfect, but he knew he'd have to make do with what was available. Lose it, and, more importantly, not to give it to him. The official told him not to lose it, and, more importantly, not to give up. With everyone armed, the instructor suddenly yelled at the group to start running. He warned them that anyone foolish enough to drop their weapon didn't deserve to be an adventurer, so they all started running. Right away, some of them began to complain, especially one guy who yelled that he was a wizard, not a runner. But it wasn't just him. Even Il-yang was gasping for air, thinking he was going to die. His new body was nowhere near as strong as his old one. The instructor kept shouting, telling them that this was how they'd build their future. The moment he mentioned becoming a building owner, something clicked. A huge grin spread across Il-yang's face. That was all he needed to hear. He remembered starting as a beggar. This time, he was going to become a first-class citizen, no matter what. He pushed himself to the absolute limit, screaming out all his frustration. He couldn't understand why just making a living had to be this hard. And that's when a blue window appeared, right in front of him. The system announced that a request had been generated. Il-yang was totally confused. He'd never heard of the system doing that before. The request was called Road to Becoming a Hero, and the difficulty was set to the lowest level possible. The details were simple. Run, do push-ups, and do sit-ups. But the reward was just 75 experience points and a single point in muscle strength. He couldn't believe how small the reward was. On top of the bad reward, he scoffed at the name. A hero? That wasn't his goal at all. He just stared at the massive blue window floating in front of him. He thought the system must be confused. He wasn't some nobleman trying to be a hero. He wasn't sure what to do. The whole thing felt ridiculous. He sighed, wondering why he was being tested like this. But then he figured that even a tiny bit of progress was better than nothing at all. Then he saw the real prize. It wasn't the experience points. It was the single point in muscle strength. He knew that stats were incredibly important. Il-yang groaned. He couldn't believe he had to do this. He thought the goddess giving him these quests was just an annoying brat with a bad temper. He was so annoyed that he decided to just ask what the system really wanted from him. He spoke out loud, calling for someone named Ms. Hildegreen and asking what this was all about. But the bracelet just stayed silent. He figured the goddess was just being stubborn. And just like that, a new request popped up. It was called the second path to becoming a hero, and it was just more running and push-ups. So he started running again, pushing himself so hard he felt like he was going to die. Turns out, even after the first request was done, he just kept going. He didn't know how to rest. His body was so numb that he couldn't even cry out to stop. Finally, a blue window popped up. The system announced that he had completed the 7,000-meter run. He was gasping for air, pushing his body far beyond its limits. But even as he struggled, a new thought started to form in his mind. Back in Murim, martial arts techniques were secrets passed down carefully. But here, they were just called skills, available to anyone. He realized this was his chance to finally break free from being weak. With that thought, there was no way he could rest. He dropped to the floor to start the next exercise. He lived by a simple rule. Training never betrays you. The more you sweat, the stronger you become. So he started counting. Every single drop was building the future he was fighting for. He kept pushing himself, counting every single one. The other adventurers started to notice him. They couldn't figure out why he was training so hard. They started talking amongst themselves, calling him stupid. To them, an adventurer without mana was completely useless. Everyone just stood there, watching him like he was some kind of freak. But he didn't care what they thought. He just told himself he'd do things his own way and finish the last push-up. The thing is, during this training period, no one could fight monsters. That meant everyone was supposed to be stuck at level 1. But Il-yang wasn't like everyone else. The system announced he completed another request. He got experience, a stamina boost, and leveled up all the way to level 4. He was already leaving them all behind. He let out a huge sigh of relief, finally finished. He even thanked the system, calling it Ms. Hildegreen. He threw his arms up in the air, feeling a huge wave of relief. All that hard work had finally paid off. The system's voice echoed in his head, telling him he was amazing. He just took a moment to let it sink in. He looked down and tried talking to it again, asking Ms. Hildegreen if she could hear him, but there was no answer. He just thought to himself that this goddess must have been around for a very long time. Later, in the cafeteria, the other adventurers were complaining about everything, especially the terrible food. Suddenly, the mood in the room changed. Someone pointed out that 3 important-looking figures had just walked in, but Il-yang wasn't paying attention to them. He thought they were acting like children for complaining when he was so hungry he could eat iron. Meanwhile, another group was watching him from across the room. One of them said he was eager to get to know the famous new adventurer. The group watching Il-yong decided to leave him be. They had someone else they needed to see. Il-yong didn't notice any of it. He was just grateful to finally be eating a real meal. He ate like a man who had truly known what it was like to starve. Meanwhile, another student was looking at his phone. A text came in from a friend who was annoyed he'd forgotten to report something to their teacher. The student just smiled, remembering his friend had promised to help him study. But the conversation quickly changed tone. His friend started complaining about being a broke adventurer, living on nothing but instant noodles. He held his phone, reading the messages as they kept coming. Then came the real reason for the texts, a bank account number and a desperate plea for help. The student typed back a quick excuse, saying his mana was 0. His friend immediately called him a liar. The student insisted to his friend that his mana was completely gone. His friend texted back, confused and asking if he was okay. Just then, a woman with bright red hair walked right up to Il-yong's table. She called out to him, trying to get his attention. Turns out, this was Hwa-yan, the super rookie of this year's class. She looked down at Il-yong with a calm, confident smile. Il-yong had no idea what was going on. He couldn't figure out why this famous rookie would want anything from him, or why she was calling him senior. The student who was texting his friend saw the whole thing happen. He paused, a smile spreading across his face. He quickly texted his friend that the famous Hwa-yan was there talking to someone, but his friend just replied asking who she was. He started typing back, ready to explain everything. The student completely forgot about his friend. He was just staring at Hwa-yan, thinking she was even prettier up close. She told Il-yong that she'd seen him training like a monster earlier. She asked if he was okay, calling him senior. Il-yong was totally confused. He asked why she kept calling him senior, telling her he didn't know her. He also questioned why she'd been watching him in the first place, but she was certain he was a senior. She seemed surprised he didn't know who she was. She reminded him that they were in the same department. Il-yong corrected her, saying it was now called the Monster Material Science Department. That's when something clicked for Il-yong. He asked if she was the one who had returned to the classroom before he did. She excitedly confirmed that was her. She then reminded him that they had also met at orientation. She looked at him, a little surprised that he didn't remember her at all. She couldn't believe he really didn't remember. Il-yong thought back. For him, those college days were 7 years ago. All the intense martial arts training had clouded those old memories. He admitted he really didn't remember, and then asked how she knew who he was. She told him it was simple. He was a returnee, just like she was. She explained that their department's group chat had been buzzing because of him, so it was impossible for her not to know. After all, it was a huge deal. The two reincarnated students came from the same department. She said there were rumors spreading everywhere about a senior student coming back. But on top of that, she remembered him doing a strange dance during a chess competition. His face was just impossible to forget. The memory hit him. He was in a tiger costume, dancing like a complete fool. He finally remembered his shameful past from 7 years ago. Il-yong grabbed his head, groaning. Hwa-yan asked if it was true he'd been gone for 7 years. She said it made sense. He couldn't remember anything. She'd only been gone for 1 year herself. She smiled and told him he didn't need to go around trying to make connections like everyone else. She told him to just call her Hwa-yan. Then she added that she found talking to him a lot more fun, but someone else was watching their conversation from across the room. Suddenly, a voice called out to Hwa-yan, excited to see her again. A man with brown hair walked up to them. Hwa-yan looked completely lost, asking who he was. He tried to remind her that they'd met at a clan gathering. The man just grinned, casually brushing it off and claiming to have a bad memory himself. Hwa-yan was clearly not happy. She hated it when people just came up and started talking to her. The man then turned to Il-yong, asking if he and Hwa-yan knew each other. Il-yong explained that they were just old classmates from university. The man just smiled, saying that meant they weren't strangers at all. He then waved some other people over to join them. A man and a woman immediately stood up, ready to come over. They walked right up to Hwa-yan and introduced themselves. The man was Lee Jin-ho, a ranger, and the woman was Kim Mina, a swordsman. Lee Jin-ho told Hwa-yan it was an honor to meet her, especially since she was the sister of a famous swordmaster. Hwa-yan just put on a forced smile. You could tell the whole situation was making her really uncomfortable. Just then, an announcement started playing over a speaker. It told all the aspiring adventurers that lunch was over and they needed to gather at Training Ground 11. Hwa-yan looked completely relieved. She immediately used the announcement as an excuse to get away from the group. Lee Jin-ho tried to call her back, but it was too late. She was already gone, moving so fast, she was just a blur in the distance. Lee Jin-ho just sighed, commenting that she was gone like the wind. He figured they should probably get going too. Lee Jin-ho seemed pretty bummed out, asking if Il-yong at least got her number, but Il-yong just said no. Il-yong didn't seem to care at all. He just turned and started walking toward the training area. Lee Jin-ho invited him to come along anyway, but Il-yong was already in his own world. He knew that training was the only thing that mattered for survival. As they walked, some of the others wondered if they were about to get another mission. The entire group headed over to the designated training ground. When they arrived, the instructor was waiting for them. He yelled down, asking if everyone had eaten. The whole group shouted back that they had. They all seemed fired up and ready to go. The instructor landed in front of them with a smile. He told them it was time to get moving, because this training was going to take place in the mock dungeon. The instructor stood at the entrance to the mock dungeon. He told the group that ugly goblins were waiting for them inside, but assured them it wasn't too dangerous. He explained that while the goblins were tough, they were the perfect opponents for the students to show off the skills they'd been training. The instructor continued, explaining that the goblins were actually training chimeras made from slimes and goblin bodies. While the others listened, a confident smirk appeared on Il-yong's face. He warned them that the goblin's attack power was weak, but its defense was strong because of hardening magic on its skin. Looking at the creatures, Il-yong thought to himself that he was actually looking forward to this training. He was getting restless and had been itching for a chance to test out the martial arts he'd been practicing. Turns out, he had already registered some of the third-rate martial arts from his past life as skills in this new world. The system showed his new skill list. It included things like the triple blade technique, 6 harmony fist, and the 5-element step, all techniques from his old world. The instructor grinned and added another rule. They had to form their own parties for the training. Il-yong was surprised by this. The instructor reminded them that hunting in this world was almost always done in groups. The other students got excited, talking about how it was just like a college group project. Everyone started looking around, trying to figure out who to team up with. Then the instructor dropped another bomb. The training was a time attack, and to make things worse, he announced that all the clan members would be able to see their results. He told them to do well if they wanted to impress anyone. Il-yong cursed under his breath. The people who were already friends were quickly forming their own teams. He immediately regretted not trying to get to know anyone. He was completely on his own. Just when he thought he was out of options, he spotted someone. It was Manhwa, the woman with the bright red hair. He walked right up to her and asked if she wanted to team up. She seemed completely caught off guard by how direct he was. She got flustered, telling him he shouldn't be so blunt. He tried to rephrase his offer, suggesting they form a party, but she just pointed out that his face was burning red. She thought his expression meant he was rejecting her. He quickly tried to explain that wasn't it at all. She looked him over, thinking about it for a second. Finally, she agreed. It looked like Il-yong had found a partner after all. Manhwa happily agreed to team up. She even offered to start gathering other people to join their party. Turns out, having her on his side made recruiting incredibly easy. The second she asked who wanted to join, everyone raised their hand. She just laughed and told them all not to fight over the spots. With the party formed, a man named Kang Baek-chol stepped up to lead. He encouraged everyone to do their best, and the others seemed to respect him right away. Then, another member introduced himself. His name was Kim Oh-yeon, and he was an assassin. Kang Baek-chol wasted no time, started setting up their formation for the hunt. He put himself in the lead, with 2 others in the back. Il-yong and the assassin, Kim Oh-yeon, were assigned to the center. Hwa-yeon just listened, taking it all in. One of the party members laughed, clearly impressed with Hwa-yeon's leadership. He commented that her sharp instincts were exactly what you'd expect from someone from a famous adventurer family. Il-yong was thinking the same thing. She had sized up the situation in a second and given perfect orders. Hwa-yeon turned to him and asked where he wanted to stand. Il-yong just told her anywhere was fine, but his casual answer annoyed some of the others. One of them complained that Il-yong didn't even have any mana and told him to just stay out of the way. Il-yong didn't even bother to respond. He just decided he'd stand guard with their leader, Kang Baek-chol. With the formation finally set, Hwa-yeon looked over at Il-yong and asked if he was nervous. He just told her he was fine. Hearing that, the leader gave the final order for everyone to move out. They stepped into the darkness of the dungeon. The party moved forward carefully. Il-yong and Kang Baek-chol took the lead, acting as the group's shield. Kang Baek-chol tried to rally Il-yong, telling him they would do their best as the party's shield, but Il-yong just found the whole thing annoying. The only sound was water dripping from the cave walls. Suddenly, one of them called for everyone to stop. He sensed something moving up ahead. The group tensed up, and someone immediately asked how many there were. The scout tried to get a count. At first he thought there were only 2, then 4, but he realized there were at least 6 of them. His eyes glowed. This wasn't a normal human sense. Suddenly, a blur of motion shot out from the darkness. Kang Baek-chol shouted a warning. They were coming. The others froze, not ready for an attack this fast. Before anyone could react, a blade swung down and someone screamed. It wasn't just one. A whole group of goblins charged out of the shadows. The leader yelled for everyone to get ready to fight. Kang Baek-chol immediately used his provocation skill, drawing all the attention to himself. His sword lit up, pulling the goblins' focus. But as the party focused on the front, Il-yong realized something was wrong. He spotted more goblins coming from behind them. It was a trap. The goblins weren't just in the front and back. They were everywhere. The party was completely surrounded. The goblins swarmed in, a wave of green bodies and sharp teeth. Il-yong watched as the rookies started to panic. With no real combat experience, they were completely unprepared. One of them screamed as he was immediately overwhelmed. The chaos was everywhere. Even Manhwa was in the thick of it, but Il-yong could tell she was shaken. This was her first time in a real, up-close fight, and it showed. Watching the fight, something felt off to Il-yong. He wondered if the association guys were intentionally not holding back. It felt like they were being pushed to their absolute limits on purpose. Then the other rookies started shouting in frustration. Their normal attacks couldn't break through the goblins' tough magic. They were completely on the defensive, unable to land a solid hit. The goblins were just too aggressive. They were breaking through the rookies' skills before they could even finish casting. Even Manhwa was struggling. She was so tense from the pressure that she couldn't use her full power. But Il-yong just watched everything unfold, completely calm. The other rookies were losing hope. They knew if things kept going like this, they were all going to be wiped out. And right at that moment, a blue window flashed in front of everyone. A new mission alert had appeared. The mission was called called Proof of a Hero. The goal was simple. Take the skulls of all the goblins. A huge grin spread across Il-yong's face. This was exactly the moment he had been waiting for. He declared that his specialty wasn't some fancy skill. It was pure martial arts, the kind used in brutal dogfights. For the first time in a while, he could feel the flow of his inner energy. His muscles were already reacting, moving faster than he could think. All of his strength was being focused into one single point. He moved in a flash. A clean, perfect strike cut through the air. The goblin didn't even have time to react. Il-yong knew there was never time to activate a skill in a real fight. He reminded himself that in true martial arts, everything had to be instinctive. He told himself it was fine. His body still remembered the moves. He just had to recall the form of the three-sword technique, starting with his left foot forward. He moved without thinking, his body taking over. The blade cut straight through the goblin. A perfect, clean hit. He felt a rush of confidence. He didn't need any help from the system for something this simple. Manhwa watched from a distance, completely stunned. She couldn't figure out how he was doing that without activating a single skill. He was just a blur, moving from one target to the next. One goblin was already down, and he was already stepping toward the next. This wasn't a fight. It was a clean. He moved to the next one without even pausing. The goblin barely had time to scream before the blade was on it. Another clean cut, right through the middle, and he had this wild grin on his face. He was actually enjoying this. It was a feeling he knew all too well. The sensation you get from taking down an enemy, the feeling of cutting through flesh, and the slight resistance when the blade hits bone. The other rookies watched, completely stunned. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The goblin's head went flying. Just like that, another one was gone. To him, this feeling was comfortable, almost intimate. He wondered if this meant he had truly returned as a martial artist. The other rookies couldn't make sense of what they just saw. Manhwa was just as shocked. She couldn't believe he had taken down a hardened goblin so easily. But Il-yong didn't stop. He was already moving toward the next group. Seeing him approach, the goblins started screaming in fear. He called out to them, asking where they thought they were running. He made it clear that even if they wanted to leave, he wasn't going to let them. Another goblin went down, cut clean in two. Watching him, Manhwa remembered her brother's advice. He had always told her to stay calm, but seeing this, she was anything but calm. She remembered how when her group first faced the goblins, everything had fallen apart. The other rookies were just as stunned. They watched him slice a goblin into 3 pieces and couldn't understand how a level 1 with no mana could do that. For a second, they even lost track of him in the chaos. They couldn't figure out how he could be so calm in the middle of all this. But Il-yong was already diving back into the fight, a blur of motion cutting through the rest of the goblins. The other rookies could only watch in shock, completely unable to understand what was happening. One of the hunters turned to Kim Oyan. She asked if this was really the same loser from before, wondering if his class was truly one of a kind. They were all completely stunned, and their faces pale. Watching him fight, it just felt completely unfair. But Manhwa was looking closer. She realized there was no showmanship in his sword movements. He fought like a machine. He wasn't fighting them. He was simply ending them with the most efficient movements possible. This was the only way he knew how to fight. It was a skill he had perfected for 7 long years. He moved from one target to the next, a small smirk on his face as he cut down another goblin. Manhwa watched, completely stunned. She couldn't imagine what he must have gone through to fight like this. The goblin let out a final scream as the blade sliced through it. That's when she recognized the style. It was the most efficient and practical swordsmanship she'd ever seen, and it was just like her older brothers. She thought about her brother, a true swordmaster, and knew she was nowhere near his level. But seeing Il-yong fight, it was like watching another master at work. He realized his speed was still top tier, even when using a sword. Manhwa couldn't believe it. He'd only awakened a few days ago, but he fought like a hardened veteran. He moved like a blur, cutting through another goblin without hesitation. She wondered what his real identity could possibly be. Nothing about him made any sense. She admitted to herself that she hadn't expected much from him. He was only here as a favor to her friend, Sun Chang. That's when a message from her patron god, Hildegreen, appeared. Her bracelet glowed as the voice whispered that even though the god could be childish, he was also sharp when it came to judging people. The god's voice continued, whispering that there might be some hidden benefits to his strange abilities. Manhwa was confused. What kind of benefit could possibly make up for having 0 mana? As she wondered, Kim Il-yong just kept fighting, cutting down goblins with pure, raw power. The god's voice called him an adventurer with limitless potential. He was a hidden gem, a rare find. And in this world, whoever finds a gem first gets to keep it. That's when Hua-yan remembered her brother, who was always complaining that he couldn't find enough good clan members. A smile spread across her face. She thought she might have just found the perfect person for him. She was sure that if she could just get him to join, her clan would be a huge success. The only problem was figuring out how to persuade her senior members. That's when the god of harvest chimed in, telling her that if it wanted him that badly, then she should be willing to do whatever it takes to persuade him, even if it meant using her charm. Hua-yan was completely flustered. She argued back that recruiting someone like him wasn't going to be that simple, but the god of harvest just laughed, pointing out that for a joke, her reaction seemed suspiciously good. She couldn't help but blush. completely embarrassed. Meanwhile, outside the association's viewing room, some people were watching everything unfold. One of the officials commented that with 2 returnees, they should expect a new record. But another reminded him that this time, they had set the training difficulty level extremely high. The official was sure that with the difficulty this high, there wouldn't be any new records. A man turned to address one of the others in the room, Director Kim Ma-young. He asked her why the difficulty level was suddenly raised so high. She didn't answer, so he explained it himself, reminding her that things in Pangea were getting complicated. He said that because of all the conflicts and outsiders, they had to start training the adventurers much harder. He finished by saying that if they wanted to be adventurers, they had to overcome this with pure perseverance. Director Kim Mi-young looked unconvinced, repeating the word perseverance under her breath. Another official, Mr. John, confidently bet that Honghua's party would be the fastest. He was so sure, he joked that even manager Kim wouldn't dare to bet against him. Mr. John continued, saying that Honghua had a big advantage since she was taught by her older brother and came from an excellent family. But Kim Mi-young wasn't buying it. She asked if family lineage had ever actually been proven to make a difference. John argued that it had been proven in Pangea. He pointed out that children born to magicians often have a natural talent for magic. He added that because of stories like that, many adventurers were now choosing partners based on their potential family traits. Kim Mi-young just smirked. She thought to herself how strange the world had become, all because of this talk about lineage. Suddenly, a heavy rumbling sound echoed from the dungeon entrance. Everyone's attention snapped to the doors. One of the officials shouted that the adventurers were finally coming out. With a deep groan, the massive stone doors began to slide open. The adventurers stumbled out of the dungeon, breathing hard. They were all covered in grime and blood, clearly worn out from the fight. One of the officials watching was impressed. He told the general manager that this just proved how important family lineage really was. The woman ordered him to record everything. It all had to be digitized and sent straight to headquarters. A big screen overhead showed their clear time, 9 minutes and 56 seconds. It was a new record. The other officials couldn't believe it. They knew the association had intentionally raised the dungeon's difficulty, but one of them just scoffed at the achievement. He pointed out that they set that record while carrying what he called worthless baggage, a guy with no mana. One of the officials watching was completely blown away. He insisted they had to recruit that woman, no matter what it took. The general manager didn't hesitate. She agreed completely and said she'd get more money for the recruitment budget right away. Meanwhile, Il-yong stood there, covered in blood from head to toe. Watching him, one of the officials thought to himself how messed up the guy's morals were. He wondered who this person could possibly be. Sometime later, things had calmed down. Someone was grunting as they did pull-ups in a training room. A voice from nearby told him to stop making such strange noises. It was Il-yong, and the person complaining was Hong Hua-yan. He was annoyed, thinking to himself that her nagging was irritating. She just let out an annoyed huff, clearly not happy with him. He closed his eyes for a second, just thinking. After all that training, he was starting to feel like his old self again. Showed him the results. His triple sword showed him the results. His triple sword technique had already reached the 6th stage. A grin spread across his face. He remembered how he'd wiped out all those goblins without leaving a single trace. Best of all, his martial arts level had gone up, and he couldn't help but feel a little excited about it. He stood there, feeling the new strength settle in. He knew it for a fact. There was just no substitute for real combat. He gripped his sword, ready to practice his form. He told himself to move slowly, with absolute certainty. Every movement had to be perfect. The system immediately confirmed it. His execution was perfect, already surpassing the target level. He was a little surprised by the result. Another message popped up right away. His triple sword technique had reached the 7th form. A smirk spread across his face. At this rate, he knew he'd get his old power back in no time. But then, he thought bigger. It wasn't just about getting his old strength back. He might actually reach a level he'd only ever dreamed of. He'd always been obsessed with martial arts, and now he was sure he'd made the right choice. Becoming an adventurer on Earth was exactly where he needed to be. Honghua Yan approached him, looking worried. She pointed out how hard he was training and that his hands were completely worn out. Il-yong didn't seem bothered at all. He just told her he was getting back to the hands he used to know. He thought about the hands of a hermit. Then he wondered why Hua Yan wasn't training at all. It clicked that she'd been hanging around him ever since the mock dungeon. He wondered if the other trainees had given her the cold shoulder. Just then, she looked at him seriously and asked if they could talk when he was done training. She promised it wouldn't take long. Il-yong thought about it. Before he went to the Murim world, a serious conversation with a cute girl would have made him ecstatic. But now, things were different. He looked at her and simply refused. He told her he didn't have time to spare. His training was far more important right now. He'd let her know when he had time. Il-yong to let her know when he had time. Il-yong just stood there and watched her go. He finally turned and walked off, thinking to himself that she was really starting to get on his nerves. He couldn't afford to get distracted or carry someone else's burdens. He pulled out a set of training claws, ready for the next step. His plan was to master the wind technique, fist technique, and inner power technique all at once. He knew that focusing on just one thing was a mistake only fools made. He moved like a blur, practicing his forms over and over. Each strike was faster than the last. A blue window popped up. The system confirmed his wind technique proficiency was increasing. His wind technique had already reached stage 15. Ground cracked under the force of his strikes, but he wasn't satisfied. All he could think about was more training. A grin spread across his face. He was enjoying this. He knew he couldn't afford to rest. He'd been given a special class with huge benefits, and he wasn't going to waste it. He thought about how amazing this all was. He shouted out to Hildegreen, the god who gave him this power, saying she was even more incredible than he first thought. A message from the hero. God appeared instantly. She seemed annoyed, asking if he was only just now figuring that out. He looked down at the bracelet on his wrist and asked if Hildegreen was listening. A message appeared, confirming she was there. He grinned, wondering why she was talking through a system window. She explained that the gemstone on his bracelet was what allowed them to communicate. That's when he realized she wasn't some all-knowing, perfect being. She could get angry, just like a normal person. So he decided to push her buttons, asking if she was mad at him now. The message that came back was clearly irritated. She denied being angry, but the tone said otherwise. He decided to change the subject and ask a serious question. He wanted to know if the special requests he'd been getting were coming directly from her. Hildegreen explained that while she had some influence, most of his quests were guided by a bigger, unseen force. He took a moment to think about that. A sly thought crossed Il-yang's mind. If she had some control, then surely she could send him some easy requests, right? He asked for a simple mission with a huge payout. The reply was instant. Hildegreen told him that was completely out of the question. He sighed, realizing he couldn't just use her to get ahead. It was a nice try, but it didn't work. She seemed annoyed by his request, telling him that a true hero shouldn't be looking for shortcuts. The hero god's message was clear. A true hero had to overcome challenges and suffering. Il-yang just scoffed at the idea. He told Hildegreen that being a hero was nothing but suffering, and it wasn't worth it. He explained that in this world, it was the villains who ate well and lived comfortably. They were the ones with all the power. So, he thought, heroes could just eat their dust. He knew that in the end, it's power that really moves the world. And for him, that power, martial arts. His body moved with that belief, a blur of deadly force. This was his path. He declared that whether someone's a hero or not, power is the only thing that really matters in this world. So he dared them to send any request, any challenge they wanted. He was ready for it. A confident grin spread across his face. He wasn't just talking. He meant it. Hero god, Hildegreen, let out a sigh. She couldn't believe this was the client she was stuck with. She was completely stressed out by his attitude. She told him that it was already the last training session. It was hard to say goodbye to the light. It was already the last training session. It was hard to say goodbye to the light. She even said it was sad. Then she got to the point. He would soon be leaving Earth, but there was one final gate he had to pass through first. Il-yang stood in a crowd, listening to a man in a suit talk about a final gate. He had no idea what that was. The man began to explain the rule for everyone wanting to go to Pangea. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear him clearly. He told them they all had to pass through a place called the Dungeon of Proof. The name seemed to catch Il-yang's attention. He repeated the word hard to say goodbye to the light. She even said it was sad. Then she got to the point. He would soon be leaving Earth, but there was one final gate he had to pass through first. Il-yang stood in a crowd, listening to a man in a suit talk about a final gate. He had no idea what that was. The man began to explain the rule for everyone wanting to go to Pangea. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear him clearly. He told them they all had to pass through a place called the Dungeon of Proof. The name seemed to catch Il-yang's attention. He repeated the words to himself, wondering what that could possibly be. The man explained that the Dungeon of Proof wasn't on Earth or Pangea. It was in a neutral dimension, a place for new adventurers to adapt. He called it a tutorial dungeon, designed to teach them to be cautious. But this wasn't like their practice against goblins. The man's tone got serious. He warned them that the monsters in here would really try to kill and eat them. If anyone was afraid, this was their last chance to back out. He yelled that this dungeon was open only to them, the prospective adventurers. Then he dropped the big news. All of their actions would be monitored in real time by clan officials. The group started murmuring nervously, realizing it was a live assessment. To calm them down, the instructor announced that they would be lent magical-grade armor for safety. The adventurers were relieved to have some protection, but the instructor quickly shut that down, yelling that the armor was a loan, not a gift. If they lost it, they'd be in debt. Looked at the heavy gear. Looked at the heavy gear. Il-yang picked up a piece of light, cloth-like armor. He asked the instructor if there was anything that offered protection without getting in the way. The instructor was getting impatient, telling him to just pick something from the pile. Il-yang sighed, realizing he'd have to settle for whatever was there. He chose a piece of sturdy, boiled leather armor. The system showed its stats. It offered some defense, but had no special effects at all. Once everyone had their gear, the instructor yelled out to the group, telling them it was time. A bright blue light suddenly surrounded the adventurers. He told them this was their chance to prove they were worthy. His voice echoed as they were pulled into the portal. He welcomed them to a world of life and death encounters. One of the adventurers turned to his friend, Jin, his voice shaking. He asked if they were really going in alone, knowing real monsters were waiting for them. Il-yang just smirked. To him, it didn't matter if this was Muram or Pangea. It was just a different stage, and when it came to a fight, he was completely confident. The light grew brighter as they arrived. He was ready to show them exactly what he could do. This was nothing, not after 7 years of crawling through the dirt at the bottom of Muram's world. He was more than ready for whatever this place could throw at him. When the light faded, they were in a dark, rocky cave. The teleportation left his head spinning. but he recovered in an instant, drawing his sword. He thought a monster was already on top of them, but it wasn't a monster. A bright light appeared, and two women walked out of it. One of them, a redhead, asked if he was all right, calling him senior. The other woman asked if he was the person they were talking about. The redhead, Manhwa, said yes, adding they were lucky to find him after being separated at the gate. Her companion didn't look convinced. She questioned Manhwa, pointing out that the guy didn't seem to have any mana, let alone a skill. Before she could answer, the rest of their party showed up, armed and ready to move. One of the party members, Kang Byuk-chil, started shouting about how amazing Il-yong's martial arts were. Il-yong was completely thrown off by the way he addressed him. Il-yong couldn't believe it and asked if Kang Byuk-chil was actually younger than him. The big guy proudly announced that he was only 21 years old. Il-yong still didn't buy it. He told the guy to look in a mirror, pointing out that he looked way older and his hairline was even receding a bit. Finally, he just decided to let it go. Manhwa took charge of their 10-person party. She turned to a girl named Li Jia and asked if she could keep her light magic going. Li Jia confidently said she had plenty of mana for it. Pleased with the answer, Manhwa told everyone to get moving. She reminded them that clan officials were watching them live, which immediately sent Li Jia into a panic about how she should act. Il-yong just told her to pretend to be firm and composed. With that settled, another member gave the order to move out. He told everyone to get into formation, assigning Kang Byuk-chil and Il-yong to the front lines. Kang Byuk-chil was thrilled, shouting that they were on the front lines together again. Il-yong just sighed, clearly annoyed by all the noise. As they walked deeper into the cave, Manhwa told Li Jia to move her magical light forward. Li Jia happily agreed, ready to help. Her light shot through the darkness, revealing the ground ahead. It was covered in a massive swarm of giant, creepy spiders. Li Jia screamed, completely grossed out by the sight of them. While the others panicked, Il-yong just sighed. He was disappointed, thinking that these were just bugs and not a real challenge. But Manhwa wasn't waiting around. She activated her skill, Song of Sowing, annoyed that she had lost the first move. A powerful green energy exploded from her hands, aimed right at the swarm. The green energy wrapped around the spiders, tangling them up. Il-yong noticed their movements had slowed way down. He realized her skill must have some kind of weakening effect. Not wasting a second, Manhwa followed up with another skill, Sickle of Harvest. Her attack was so effective that a system message popped up. A new request had been generated. Il-yong's eyes lit up. He saw this as his chance to get in on the action. The system gave them a quest: take out 30 of the pests. The difficulty was very easy, but the rewards were decent. Il-yong grinned. He wasn't about to let her get all the credit. He focused his energy, channeling it into his blade. Then he unleashed his own skill, Rapid One-Strike Sword. His sword was a blur of purple light, striking twice every second. He moved through the spiders, cutting them down without even slowing. He grinned, completely in his element. He announced it was time to hunt the rest of the giant bugs, noting there were only 11 left. The other adventurers, however, were terrified. One of them gasped, realizing this was what a real battle felt like. Not to be outdone, Manhwa jumped back into the fight. She unleashed her own skill, the Sickle of Harvest. Her green energy blade sliced through the remaining spiders, clearing a path. As Il-yong continued his relentless assault, Hwa-yan called out to him. She teased him, pointing out that they were supposed to be fighting together. Il-yong just looked annoyed. He found her attempts at teamwork to be a total burden. The other adventurers watched in complete disbelief. One of them couldn't understand how someone with 0 mana could possibly compete with Manhwa. His movements were unlike anything she had ever seen. With a final flurry of strikes, he took down the last of them. A system window popped up right away. Quest completed. He'd leveled up, and his sword skill had improved. He turned to the others with a smirk. He mocked them for just standing there, asking if they didn't want to level up or impress the clan officials watching them. One of the women complained that he couldn't say that when he hadn't left a single monster for them to fight. Il-yong just shrugged, completely unbothered. But before they could argue anymore, a new wave of monsters appeared. A whole group of goblins was charging right at them. Seeing the new enemies, Il-yong casually told the group he'd back off a little this time, giving them a chance to fight. The goblins rushed forward, but Il-yong just watched them with a confident grin. He wasn't worried at all. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. One of the adventurers screamed for help. Il-yong glanced over, completely calm. He casually asked if these were goblins this time. One of the other adventurers grinned. She was relieved to finally see an enemy she could actually handle. She charged forward, shouting that she wouldn't let her spotlight be stolen again. She was determined not to lose to the others. The rest of the party finally jumped into the fight. Another adventurer laughed as he cut down a goblin, daring them to bring it on. But just as the battle got going, a system window popped up. A new request had been generated, catching Il-yong completely off guard. His surprise quickly turned into a grin. He realized this dungeon would keep giving them quests, which was perfect for him. He immediately took back what he said about backing off. With a powerful slash, he announced that he was joining this fight too. With a look of pure confidence, he leaped into the fray. He moved like a blur, cutting through the goblins without even slowing down. One of the other adventurers was furious. She yelled at him, reminding him that he promised to stay out of this fight. But Il-yong just smirked. He declared that every single monster here would become his experience points. He didn't waste another second. He was covered in blood, but he was loving every moment of it. This was the feeling he'd been missing. This feeling reminded him of his past. It was an addiction, born from 7 years of fighting just to survive at the bottom of the Murim world. He knew a part of him was still stuck in that that hell, but he couldn't deny how good it felt. The rest of the party could only watch. One of them cursed Il-yang for going back on his word. He realized this wasn't teamwork anymore. It was a competition. As he fought, Il-yang realized something. He believed that people needed competition to truly push themselves to get better. One of the adventurers screamed that he was a crazy bastard, but Il-yang just let out a wild laugh, completely consumed by the battle. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the association building, others were watching. Inside the observation room, the director complained to Mr. Kim about their old-fashioned viewing method. Mr. Kim reminded him that filming drones simply don't work inside Pangea. He explained that the scrying pool was a gift. In the past, they couldn't see what happened inside a dungeon at all. One of the women leaned in, completely focused. She asked who that guy was and where he came from. The image in the water showed Il-yang. Another man answered, saying he was the same person who was previously judged to have 0 mana. He then added the most surprising part. Turns out, the man had a unique class no one had ever heard of, Ronin. One of the women watching asked if anyone knew what kind of skill he was using. She admitted they were only F-class monsters, but what he did was a complete massacre, as the image in the water showed him tearing through another enemy. Someone wondered if even Honghua Yan could fight like that. They were all trying to figure it out. They couldn't understand how he could extend his blade or move with such speed when he had no mana at all. One of them figured it had to be a special benefit from his unique class. They immediately decided to start digging for information on him. The woman realized he wasn't just a useless distraction like they'd first thought. She ordered her subordinate to add Il-yang to their recruitment list, and he quickly agreed. She thought to herself that this was the power of a unique class. Even if the person seemed worthless at first, he was still a true warrior, but supporting someone like him was going to be expensive. Back in the dungeon, the fight was still raging. Il-yang moved like a blur, cutting down one goblin after another. His blade sliced clean through the creature's chest. Another goblin let out a final scream as it was taken down. With the last of them gone, Il-yang stood surrounded by the fallen monsters. The rest of the party hadn't even had a chance to move. One of the women finally snapped. She yelled at him, asking if he was getting back at them for ignoring him before. Il-yang just looked down and apologized. But then he looked up with a chilling smile. He explained that seeing blood makes his vision go blurry, and he just can't help himself. The others looked on, thinking he was some kind of devil. He told them that since he felt a little sorry, he'd give them a chance with the next monster. Then he announced it was time to move on. Honghua Yan just smirked, finding the whole thing funny. But a second later, the feeling in the cave changed completely. Il-yang's expression turned serious. He knew something else was coming. He looked around, confused. He could hear it, but no one else was reacting. He wondered if he was the only one. Honghua Yan asked him why he was stopping. Il-yang just said he heard a sound, then quickly told everyone to keep moving. But a few steps later, he stopped dead in his tracks. He heard it again. He immediately yelled for someone to shine a light into the darkness ahead. He couldn't believe no one else was hearing it. The rest of the party just looked at him, totally confused. They hadn't heard a thing. That's when a whole group of green, slimy monsters poured out from the shadows. The adventurers jumped back in surprise. One of them realized they were slimes, but Il-yang just watched them with a curious look. He wondered aloud if a sword would even work on something so soft and squishy. Before he could find out, one of the other adventurers jumped forward. He raised a massive shield, blocking the first wave of attacks. The shield bearer roared, determined to finally show everyone what he could do. He activated a skill, charging headfirst into the wave of slimes with his shield leading the way. The creatures splattered against the metal, but he just kept pushing forward. He laughed maniacally, promising to get rid of all of them at once. One of the women cheered, saying how cool Kang Baek-cheol was. He just grinned, trying to act humble. Il-yang watched with a small smile. He had to admit, the Vanguard class was pretty useful. That's when another adventurer, a man with long red hair, cast his own spell. He called it Marionette Dance, and strange energy wrapped around the party. The spellcaster grinned, ready to show everyone what he could do. The spell wrapped around the slimes, shocking them all at once. Not to be outdone, Honghua Yan unleashed her own skill, the Sickle of Harvest. Her energy blades sliced right through the monsters. Then, another adventurer named Li Jia stepped up, but Li Jia just brushed it off, saying it was just a small setback. She was determined to keep going, and she knew that she could do it. But Li Jia just brushed it off, saying it was a simple skill. Seeing this, Il-yang just smirked. He announced that he was making his move too, and the others panicked when they saw him step forward. Li Jia immediately yelled at him to stop. She told him if he had any decency, he'd let them handle this one. Il-yang just smirked. He told them he'd already given them the little chance he promised. Since half the monsters were gone, he figured that was enough. He wasn't going to listen to them anymore. The other adventurers were furious, but Il-yang didn't care. He announced it was time for a slaughter and shot forward like a blur. They screamed at him in frustration, telling him to just go die, but it was too late. He was already tearing through the remaining monsters. Realizing they couldn't stop him, the woman with the red bow yelled for everyone else to just jump in and fight. The entire party charged in, a chaotic mess of attacks, as everyone tried to get a piece of the action. And just like that, it was over. The slimes were all taken care of. A moment later, the other adventurers started celebrating. They were leveling up. One of them excitedly announced he'd reached level 2, his stats improving. Il-yang decided to check his own status. A system window popped up, showing his level had risen to 12. His stats had gone up too, putting him in a completely different league from everyone else. He decided to check his techniques next. Looking at the list, he was thrilled with his progress. At this rate, He figured he'd soon be as strong as a third-rate martial artist from his old world. Meanwhile, another team was making its way through the dungeon. For them, it wasn't about the team. For them, it wasn't about the team. It was about their own personal glory. Breathing hard, and they pushed through the final passage, believing they had finally done it. But when they finally stepped out, they froze. Il-yong's party was already there, just waiting. The newcomers couldn't believe it. They were furious, wondering how another team could have possibly beaten them there. They thought it must have been some kind of trick. Il-yong just watched them, completely unbothered. Even one of Il-yong's own party members looked confused by the sudden arrival of another team. And then things got even weirder. Third team showed up, and one of them started yelling like he knew someone there, bragging about how easy the dungeon was. Manhwa looked at Il-yong with a serious smile. She told him the real fight was about to begin, the boss raid. Il-yong seemed interested. He asked her what kind of monster usually shows up as the boss. He explained it was typically just a couple of hobgoblins, or a gnoll. He thought that didn't sound like a big deal, but Hua-yan warned him that wasn't always the case. Sometimes, something much stronger, like a dark orc, was summoned, and when that happened, a lot of people didn't make it out alive. Just then, a dark, heavy energy started to fill the air. Il-yong and the others felt a sudden, crushing pressure. They realized the boss was finally appearing. A massive foot slammed down onto the ground. Everyone stared, completely stunned. 3 huge, muscular creatures emerged from the darkness. One of the adventurers shouted in fear, recognizing them instantly. They were dark orcs. The hunter's voice shook. It wasn't just one dark orc. There were 3 of them. While everyone else panicked, Il-yong just stared them down. He looked serious, but not afraid. The other hunters were already losing hope. They knew they stood no chance against that kind of power. Panic set in. Someone yelled for everyone to run for their lives, but it was too late. The orcs moved in fast, cutting down anyone who tried to escape. Manhwa screamed at them, begging them not to leave their friends behind, to die. Il-yong heard her, and his expression hardened. The attacks were brutal. The hunters didn't stand a chance. One by one, they were taken out with ease. The dungeon had turned into a slaughterhouse. The dark orcs were ruthless. One of the hunters went down hard, blood spraying from his mouth. Il-yong watched the chaos unfold. He knew if things kept going like this, everyone was going to be wiped out. Another hunter was hit, the force of the blow sending him flying. Even a more experienced-looking fighter was taking heavy hits, crying out as he was struck. Il-yong realized these rookies had never been in a real battle before. Expecting them to work together to bring down a boss was just impossible. He parried a heavy blow. This was a desperate situation, and it was a dangerous one. He knew that even for him, dealing with this alone would be tough. But nearby, the veteran hunter gritted his teeth. He was glad to see there was at least one other person who could actually hold out against the monsters. Manhwa screamed for Mr. Kongbek-chul to get back. At the same time, she unleashed a skill called Sickle of Harvest. One of the other hunters charged in, swinging his blade right at the dark orc. But the creature just gritted its teeth. The attack barely seemed to hurt it at all. Hua-yan launched another attack, this time a fire skill called Marionette Dance. It was no use. The orc was just too strong, its roar completely overwhelming her magic. The blast of energy slammed into the monster, throwing up dust and light. But Hua-yan didn't stop. She used another skill, Song of Sowing, as she dodged out of the way. The orc's weapon came crashing down, and she barely managed to block the massive blade with her staff. The orc's weapon was just too heavy. Hua-yan was using every bit of her strength to hold it back, but she was losing ground fast. Il-yong watched in horror, knowing she would die if this kept up. Just then, a new quest appeared from the system. It was called, and the goal was simple: rescue Manhwa. He couldn't believe it. He never thought he'd have to put his own life on the line just to fight a boss monster. He took a deep breath. He had to ask himself, was he scared? He looked over at Hua-yan, who was just seconds away from being crushed. The answer was yes, he was scared, but that didn't matter. He was not a coward, and he wasn't going to let her die. In a flash, he was there. He slammed his fist straight into the orc, sending it stumbling back. Hua-yan stared in total shock. Il-yong planted his feet firmly on the ground. He'd been in situations like this countless times before. He'd been on battlefields overflowing with fear and hopelessness, but every single time, he had found a way to survive. The orc roared, stunned and furious, but Il-yong was ready. It was time to prove what he could do. He moved in a blur, showing the orc that his 7 years of crawling at the bottom of the miram were not wasted. The creature swung its weapon wildly, but Il-yong was already inside its guard, landing a solid hit. The orc screamed for him to die, but Il-yong didn't stop. He just kept pressing forward. He gritted his teeth, holding back the massive blade with everything he had. The monster growled, its anger growing with every blocked attack. But Il-yong realized this thing wasn't just strong. It had real technique. This was going to be a do-or-die fight. The orc roared as Il-yong's fist slammed into its side. The attack worked, but he was surprised. Even after taking a solid hit, the creature was still ready to counterattack. Its endurance was incredible. Still, Il-yong wasn't worried. He knew that in a fight to the death, the one who stays calm is always the one who wins. He gripped his sword, ready to make his move. With a clean motion, he swung the blade. It sank deep into the orc's shoulder. He mocked the monster, asking if this was the exciting fight it had been looking for. The creature roared in pain. That was the chance Il-yong had been waiting for. He didn't hesitate, driving the blade in even deeper. He didn't give the creature a moment to recover. He taunted it, then yelled out the name of his next move as he unleashed a powerful punch. The blow landed with a crushing sound. The creature was thrown off balance, seconds, completely stunned by the force of the hit. Watching from the side, Manhwa was amazed. She praised his skill and prepared to launch her own attack. But Il-yang was already striking again. He swung his sword with another powerful technique, and the creature roared in pain. The orc stumbled, barely able to stay on its feet. Il-yang just grinned. He mocked the monster, asking how it felt to be cornered by a simple human. The creature glared back, its eye burning with pure fury. This fight wasn't over yet. The orc screamed out some strange words. Suddenly, Il-yang felt a crushing pressure wash over him. The creature let out a massive roar as its entire body began to glow with energy. The orc moved in a blur. Il-yang barely had time to raise his sword to block the attack. The force of the blow was incredible. The orc pressed forward, completely relentless. He realized the monster had suddenly gotten way stronger. He had no idea what was happening. He gritted his teeth, pouring all of his strength into just holding the creature back. He couldn't keep up. For the first time in this fight, he was at a clear disadvantage. The orc screamed another word, its eyes glowing with pure power. It was completely overwhelming him. The orc's sudden power-up was too much. Il-yang gritted his teeth as he was pushed back, losing ground for the first time. The creature put all its weight to the strike. Il-yang's arms trembled, struggling just to hold the blade back. His guard finally broke. The force of the blow sent him stumbling backward with a cry of pain. Seeing him go down, one of his teammates didn't hesitate. He yelled that he was coming to help and charged straight for the orc, but Il-yang wasn't hurt at all. He looked back with a confident smirk, completely unharmed. The adventurer met the orc's blade head-on, using a skill called Rush of Trust to stop the massive attack. She immediately unleashed her own attack. A skill called Marionette Dance. The combined assault from both teammates worked perfectly. The orc was trapped, creating the exact opening they needed. Il-yang didn't waste a second. He knew the small window was enough to finish the fight for good. With a final shout, he brought his blade down hard. The massive creature collapsed. The fight was finally over. A moment later, a message from the system appeared. He had completed the request and leveled up, but the real prize was a new skill, the 10-star Triple Divine Sword Technique. He let out a long breath, covered in the dirt of the fight. The rest of the team cheered, celebrating their hard-fought victory. But then, a system message popped up. A buff called Heroic Anthem had been activated. All his stats, including his inner power, were boosted by 250% for the next 5 minutes. He could feel the power surging through him. It felt like his blood was boiling as the new strength flooded his body. A grin spread across his face. With this much power, he felt like he couldn't possibly lose. He wondered if this was what it felt like to be a hero, but the celebration was cut short. 2 massive monsters appeared out of nowhere, roaring as they attacked the adventurers. He watched the chaos unfold. There was no way to leave the dungeon without taking down the boss, and these new creatures were clearly the boss. They were on a completely different level from anything they had faced before. He knew this was a fight for his life, and his heart was pounding, but instead of fear, he felt a rush of excitement as energy gathered in his fist. He decided right then to give it everything he had. He didn't care if he died. He was going to finish this. He swung his blade, mocking the monsters and challenging them to keep up. The 2 creatures roared back, furious at his confidence. He gritted his teeth and called out the name of his technique. A flash of light erupted as he unleashed a flurry of strikes, cutting into the monsters. But one of the monsters swung back hard, trying to land a quick hit before it retreated. Their blades met with a massive crash, shaking the ground around them. The impact sent them both flying back, but Il-yang recovered instantly, diving right back into the fight. He landed perfectly between the 2 creatures, sword at the ready. They didn't waste a second, swinging their huge blades at him from both sides. But he was too fast. Their blades just scraped against each other, missing him completely. One of them roared in frustration. That was the opening he needed. He spun around and faced one of them down. The creature's blade managed to graze his cheek, but he didn't even flinch. He just gritted his teeth, completely focused. He knew their power covered a wide area, while his was more focused. The only way to win was to get in close and do it fast. And in the blink of an eye, he was there. His blade slammed right into the monster's head. The monster choked, spitting up blood from the strike. Before he could finish it, the second creature came charging in with a roar. He knew that fighting 2 at once was exhausting. Even with the Heroic Anthem buff, he was being pushed to his limit. Taking on 2 Class D monsters was a huge challenge for any novice adventurer. That's when the creatures started chanting strange words, their bodies glowing with a dark energy. He watched them, completely confused. He had no idea where this move came from. To make things worse, he realized his 5-minute buff was almost over. This was a terrible situation. The monster let out one final scream, its eyes glowing with power. Kang Byok-chul stood his ground, facing the powered-up creature. Even though his buff was gone, he didn't look worried at all. Just then, his teammates rushed in to back him up. The battle was far from over. Manhwa led the charge, yelling out that their timing was perfect. Seeing his backup, Kang Byok-chul just smirked. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. Without wasting a second, Manhwa leaped into the air and unleashed a skill called Sickle of Harvest. At the same time, another teammate activated her own ability, a powerful swift strike. The coordinated attacks slammed into the monster from all sides. It roared in pain, caught completely off guard, but it wasn't wasn't down yet. The creature raised its weapon, screaming the name of its own counterattack. The monster's counterattack was a whirlwind of destruction. It swung its massive weapon in a huge arc, tearing right through the adventurers' formation. They cried out in agony as the blow landed. The adventurers had no defense against the sheer force of the attack. It cut them down easily. One of the fighters could only watch in horror, thinking this was like hell on earth. The coordinated attack was completely broken. The monster's single move sent the entire team flying, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Manhwa wasn't giving up. She unleashed her own skill, the sickle of harvest, sending waves of energy at the monster. But the creature just roared, completely unfazed. Manhwa grunted in pain as her attack failed. Kim Il-yong watched it all happen. His expression didn't change. He felt the exhaustion creeping in. His whole body was as heavy as a wet sponge. But even with his team scattered and his body failing, he stood his ground. He knew he couldn't rely on buffs or support anymore, but backing down was never an option. He lived by the sword. He remembered his master's words. The old man had told him that a hard time would eventually come, a moment where no tricks would save him. And in that moment, the only thing he could trust was the martial arts he had spent his life building. The master's final piece of advice was to cut down every enemy without hesitation. He promised that if he did that, the way of martial arts would answer him. Kim Il-yong took a deep breath. He decided to stop doubting and just believe in himself. The monster was still tearing through his team, but none of that mattered anymore. His mind was clear. He lunged forward with a single thought: defeat the strong. This was how he had always grown stronger, by pushing past his limits to become something more. His master had taught him to move forward by feeding on the blood and strength of his enemies. It was the only way. This was the way of the warrior. With his mind clear and his purpose found, he unleashed his skill, the 5 elements step. The monster roared in fury, sensing the sudden shift in the fight. He moved so fast he was just a blur, weaving right through the creature's attack. He gritted his teeth, his eyes locked on the target. Nothing else mattered. Manhwa screamed for him to go, telling him that this was their only chance. He didn't hesitate for a second. He lunged forward, putting all of his strength into one final strike. The creature's eyes widened in shock. It saw the attack coming, but was too slow to react. Kim Il-yong roared as his fist slammed into the monster's side. The impact was huge, sending the creature stumbling backwards as his defense completely shattered. He stood over the fallen creature, gasping for air. A thought echoed in his mind. He had finally defeated a truly strong opponent. The creature collapsed to the ground, its life fading away in an instant. Just then, a system window appeared. He had leveled up, earned the title Dual Class Warrior, and unlocked a new martial arts skill. A wide, brutal grin spread across his face. He had finally achieved it. He stood alone among the bodies and let out a roar of pure joy. This was a dream he couldn't even realize back in the world of martial arts. His teammates watched from a distance, completely stunned. Fighters just stared, clenching his jaw. Fighters just stared, clenching his jaw, at a total loss for words. Manhwa watched him, realizing she had been completely mistaken about his true strength. She thought about her brother, whose fighting style was like a chilling ice storm. But Kim Il-yong was different. His power was like an erupting volcano. Elsewhere, a group of people watched the battle on a screen, completely stunned. They couldn't understand what they were seeing. They wondered how a rookie, who had only awakened a week ago, could possibly have the strength to take down a dark orc. One of the men asked who the young fighter was. His subordinate identified him as Kim Il-yong, the same rookie he'd mentioned before, with a talent for beating F-rank monsters. The boss just scoffed, saying that defeating F-ranks was no big deal. The boss asked if he had a plan to recruit him, reminding the scout that he was told to go all out for Manhwa. The scout admitted he hadn't even contacted the young man yet. His boss was furious, but the scout quickly tried to point out a silver lining. He explained that since no other clans had made contact with him either, at least the playing field was level. This excuse only made his boss angrier. He yelled at the scout for getting paid a fortune just to sit around and wait. He ordered his team to immediately start gathering more information and finding recruits. Elsewhere, a woman thought about Kim Il-yong's past victories. She knew he was special when he took down beetles and orcs, but defeating a dark orc was on a whole other level. Her subordinate told executive director Lee Hani that the competition for recruits would get intense after graduation. She corrected him, saying it would be more like a war. She then predicted that Kim Il-yong's value would likely skyrocket beyond even Manhwa's, which surprised the man. Lee Hani was absolutely certain. She pointed out that even Manhwa couldn't take down 3 dark orcs. She gave a direct order: bring him in, even if it meant risking the company's foundation. She was confident that if they made an irresistible offer, he'd eventually join them. She knew it wouldn't be a loss. As her grandfather always said, talent was the foundation of any business. Super rookies like him didn't yet know their true value or the potential they had for growth. Elsewhere, 2 officials from the Adventurers Association walked down a hall, clearly shaken. The woman let out a sigh of relief, saying they'd managed to avoid a huge disaster. She knew that if an entire group had been wiped out, even experienced adventurers couldn't have fixed the situation. Her colleague agreed, worried that a failure would have made the entire country look weak. The woman suggested asking the government for better armor rentals, but she already knew the answer. They just reject it over budget issues, like they always did. The man figured the government would just downplay the whole thing thing anyway. The woman was fed up with the bureaucracy, complaining that the government never tried to prevent problems, only react to them. Looking out over a large hall, the man admitted his frustration. The woman understood. She said every guild would be scrambling to recruit a rookie who could take down 3D rank monsters. In the end, she knew he'd join a guild, not their association. She sighed, complaining that adventurers these days only cared about money and power, not the spirit of adventure. Just then, a bright blue orb of light appeared in the middle of the hall. A voice announced the arrival of the rookie adventurers as they stepped out of the light. Kim Il-young and Honghua Yun were right at the front. The crowd below stared, completely stunned. A figure in robes raised his hand, calling out to a healing god for mercy and blessings. A wave of light washed over all the rookies, preparing them for the trial ahead. Kim Il-young watched the healer work on the others. He could tell from their faces that they had no idea how close they'd come to not making it out at all. The healer turned to one of the other rookies, asking about his shoulder. The guy was clearly in a lot of pain. He handed him another potion, explaining that he had to leave. There were other adventurers who were in even worse shape. Kim Il-young looked at the glowing bottle in his hand. He'd heard stories about Pangea's wonders, but seeing this kind of magic up close was something else. He figured with healing this strong, doctors would probably be out of a job soon. Then he took a drink. The potion tasted awful. Just then, a man walked up to him. He called him by name, noting that since he'd passed the trial, he wasn't a rookie anymore. Then he asked him who he really was. The man introduced himself as Kim Mi-young, the director of the Adventurers Association. He told Il-young that he'd already become quite a sensation. Il-young didn't say a word. He knew this kind of attention could mean trouble. After everything that had happened, Il-young finally had a moment to himself. He let out a long sigh, trying to process it all. He couldn't believe he'd just jumped head first into danger like that. He had no idea what he was thinking. He figured it was because of some stupid hero's aura. To him, being a hero was just a thankless job where you risk everything for nothing. Just then, a message popped up. It was from the mother of heroes, telling him not to ignore his inner heroic instincts. He scoffed at the idea. Heroic instincts? In someone like him, with his background, he thought even a dog would laugh at that. The system chimed in again. The mother of heroes was mocking him, claiming his martial arts would respond to his instincts, whether he liked it or not. He was getting seriously frustrated. He blamed his own silly hero mindset for everything, and just wanted it to stop, but the god wasn't done. The system told him she was smirking and imitating him. He was losing his patience with this damn god. The system message confirmed the god's name was Hildegren, and she was laughing at him. Il-young just sighed, feeling like he was collecting one embarrassing moment after another. Just then, a voice called out to him, asking if he was Kim Il-young, the prospective adventurer. The man introduced himself as Kim Ma-young, the director of the Adventurers Association. He said he was happy to finally meet the adventurer everyone was talking about. Il-young's eyes narrowed, a high-ranking official from the association. He knew this kind of attention was never good. The two of them were alone in a massive, empty hall. The director asked Il-young if he would consider working for the country. Il-young didn't even hesitate before saying no. The director looked completely shocked by the instant rejection, but Il-young was just tired of it all. First, it was become a hero. Now, work for the country. He was getting sick of it. He was so fed up, he seriously wondered if he should just go find a powerful shaman to get rid of whatever was causing all this trouble. The director's colleague told Il-young that there was no room for him in their organization. She then asked if he was just going to join a guild instead. They both looked surprised by his silence. The director commented that Il-young was more determined than he expected. Il-young was just thinking about everyone who had ever treated him like a loser. He calmly told them he'd pass. His pride wouldn't let him bow down to people who had looked down on him before. Il-young finished by saying he'd rather just hunt in the wild. To his surprise, the director grinned. He said it had been a while since he'd seen a real man, and that he deserved a reward for it. Il-young had no idea what to make of this. He couldn't figure out why the director suddenly liked him. He wondered if it was because he'd stopped the Dark Orc massacre, or maybe it was because he'd said he didn't need a clan. But he quickly decided there was no pride when it came to free stuff. It was a habit from his days with nothing. So he pointed to the armor he was wearing and asked if he could take that as his reward. The director didn't hesitate. He said he would cover the cost of the equipment personally and assured him it wasn't against any rules. The director told him to accept the armor as a gift to maintain a good relationship with the association. Il-young thought to himself that free stuff was always the right choice. He just added a small warning not to brag too much about it. Il-young simply scoffed. Just then, the director's colleague noticed a group of people approaching. She sighed, saying the restless ones had finally shown up. The director agreed it was time for them to go. He knew things were about to get difficult for Il-young. A whole mob of people in suits was sprinting toward him. They swarmed a corner of the room, and one of them called out, asking why someone was standing in such an awkward place. Il-young looked back. He realized they were all there for him. The crowd erupted. They were all recruiters from different clans, shouting over each other. They promised him a brilliant career, the best rookie development team, and powerful connections if he would just join them. Il-young stood there, completely surrounded. He finally understood what the director meant. This kind of attention was a huge pain. Suddenly, a system window popped up. It was a quest from Hildegren, ordering him to reject every single offer. The reward was a good chunk of experience. He looked at the crowd. Their eyes were practically burning with greed. It felt like they were ready to swallow him whole. His anger grew. These were the same people who wouldn't even give him a second glance in the waiting room. He hadn't forgotten how they treated him. Il-young Il-yang believed in holding grudges and settling them, and the crowd started pushing and shoving, shouting in the chaos. Someone was using a surprising amount of force to get through. A woman finally broke through the mob and held out her hand. She introduced herself as Li Hani, an executive from the Il-sheng clan. Il-yang didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, looking right at her. She was clearly surprised he was just leaving her hanging, but then a smirk appeared on her face. She thought to herself that if he was shocked now, he had no idea what she had planned. The recruiters kept shouting over each other, promising huge contract fees. They all claimed they hadn't realized his true value until now. Il-yang held up his hands to stop the noise. He calmly told them he couldn't understand a thing if everyone talked at once. He announced that he'd only speak with the clans who had contacted him before the trial. The crowd went quiet, confused, wondering who he could possibly be talking about, but he already knew the answer. Not a single one of them had even looked his way. They'd all dismissed him for being a mana zero. He looked out at the silent room and sighed. Then he sarcastically remarked that it seemed no one there had an eye for talent. With a smirk, he said that since no one stepped forward, he had no choice but to leave. He was done with them. He thought about how they'd spit him out when they thought he was worthless. The idea that they wanted to pick him back up now was just laughable. Suddenly, a cloud of dust filled the air. By the time it settled, Il-yang was gone. The recruiters just stood there, stunned, unable to believe he'd actually just left. The recruiters were left speechless. They couldn't understand why someone would turn down all their offers and just leave, questioning how he could possibly survive without a party. Far from the noise, Il-yang walked down a quiet hallway. He figured he had some time before reaching the gate, so he decided to check his status. He pulled up the system window. He was finally level 14, and his title had been upgraded to second-class martial artist. A smile spread across his face. Leveling up was the answer. Now that he was a second-rate martial artist, the number of skills he could register had grown massively. He decided to get rid of all the useless arts he'd learned. He needed to focus only on practical, powerful martial arts, and not get distracted by the sheer number of choices. He knew that disorganized training would only slow him down. It was time to be selective and focus. He started with the wind essence sword technique, something he'd practiced countless times, but he wondered if this meant he had to throw away the skills he used before, like his 3-element swordsmanship. To his surprise, the system told him he could inherit the proficiency from his old skill. It wasn't a huge increase, but it was better than nothing. At least now he knew his past efforts hadn't gone to waste. He grinned. If he could transfer proficiency, he might as well inherit everything. He decided to merge all 5 of his second-tier martial arts. The system confirmed it. All his major techniques, from the wind essence sword to the 7 steps death control, were now officially registered. He was truly a second-tier martial artist now. He remembered his time in the martial world. Back then, with nothing to help him, it took a year and a half of brutal training to reach this same level. But here, with the Pangea system, he'd done it in just 7 days. He couldn't help but feel a little impressed with himself. Just then, a message popped up. It was Hildegren, reminding him that it was the class that was amazing, not him. Il-yang just sighed. Turns out, his god liked to brag a little too. His thought was cut short by a blinding flash of light. He'd arrived. He looked around and saw Manhwa standing right there. Arrived too. She turned to him, noticing arrived too. She turned to him, noticing his stare. She asked him what he was looking at. Il-yang couldn't believe what he was hearing. Manhwa was calling him the hero who saved her, and he thought she was being way too bold. She kept going, reminding him that he appeared just in time, took down the dark orc, and saved her. She was completely serious. Then her tone changed. She said she still couldn't believe his skill with a sword and asked him what on earth happened during the 7 years he was gone. His face darkened. He remembered the hell he'd survived, explaining that he'd returned after experiencing the filthiest parts of another world. To him, a hero's life wasn't glorious. It was like walking through mud. He said the word hero was the last thing that described him. He was just a swordsman, driven by money and profit, and that's what a hero really is. But she didn't seem to get it at all. She just smiled, figuring he was just too embarrassed to brag about his good deeds, and was pretending to be cold. She was totally convinced that he'd appear out of nowhere to save someone in danger, no matter where he was. Il-yang couldn't believe it. She had him completely wrong. She changed the subject then. She'd heard he was rejecting all the recruitment offers from the clans and wanted to know if he was okay. Il-yang just smirked. He told her he was fine and that he definitely didn't need a clan's protection. He looked away, his expression turning bitter. He couldn't stand how their attitudes changed in an instant. Thinking about how they'd ignored him before still made him furious. He said his motto was simple: repay kindness, but carve resentment into stone. That's when Manhwa asked him directly if he'd be interested in joining her family's clan. He didn't even let her finish. He knew exactly what she was going to offer: a small elite group with almost no profit sharing. He wasn't interested, but she wasn't giving up that easily. She grabbed his arm, trying to get him to listen. She laid out the terms. They wouldn't collect any of his profits. They wouldn't mess with his business, and all he had to do was show up. It was an incredible offer. She kept pushing, getting closer. Il-yang was starting to look really uncomfortable. Finally, he shouted that he still wasn't interested. He sighed, then admitted the real reason. He just doesn't like having anyone above him. Manhwa asked why he cared so much about being on top. He explained that he'd been pushed around his entire life. He told her that in the martial arts world, there were countless masters who could crush him instantly. He was done with that life. He'd rather be the head of a snake than the tail of a dragon. She had an idea. If he didn't want to follow anyone, why not just create his own clan and become the leader himself? Il-yang admitted he'd think about it. He joked that if he did, she should join and bring her shield-using friend along. They both laughed. agreeing to think about it. Suddenly, a huge ball of light exploded in front of them. Someone shouted that it was opening. This was the entrance to a mysterious otherworld, just like something out of a fantasy novel. It was a place where danger was certain, but overcoming it meant great wealth and fame. The director stepped forward and addressed the crowd. He announced that their test was over. They were all now full-fledged adventurers, standing before the world of Pangea. He warned them that there would be adventures and crises waiting for them, but he truly believed they could overcome anything. The director's voice boomed, making sure everyone knew that Il-yong had defeated a dark orc all by himself. Suddenly, every eye in the hall was on him. Il-yong hated it. He didn't want this kind of attention from anyone, especially not from a crowd of strangers sizing him up. With one last powerful shout, the director gave his final command. He told them that Pangea was waiting. The crowd erupted, rushing towards the portal of light. Manhwa turned to Il-yong, telling him it was their turn to go. A message popped up from someone called the Mother of Heroes, trying to encourage him. But Il-yong didn't need it. He was going anyway. He remembered something an old friend once said. An adventurer's job is simple. They go on adventures. And that's what this was all about. Facing the risks, enduring the challenges, and in return, getting all the wealth and honor you could handle. He was ready for crossing into the new dimension, felt like sinking endlessly into a deep ocean. He felt a chilling sensation as he finally opened his eyes. And there it was. A huge, new world was waiting for him. Someone asked if he was okay. Turns out, Manhwa was the one who was really sick. He figured the dimensional travel caused some serious nausea for most people. She was clearly in no shape to be worrying about anyone else. He couldn't hide his disgust at the whole situation. He tried to help by patting her on the back. She thanked him, but admitted that it was only making her feel worse. She couldn't understand how he was perfectly fine. He just shrugged, saying he didn't know why. He admitted to himself that he felt a little dizzy, but nothing like this. Looking around, he saw all the other adventurers were sick on the ground. Then a message from the Mother of Heroes reminded him about his level and stats. That's when it clicked. His high physical stats gave him better balance. Manhwa, being a mage, probably had terrible physical stats, which is why she was hit so hard. For a second, he thought she should have picked a better class, but then he figured she probably chose the best one for her. Just then, a man flanked by 2 guards stepped forward. He formally welcomed the new adventurers to the city of Illidel, but his tone was anything but welcoming. He sarcastically commented on the sick adventurers and told them to get a grip because he was busy. One of the adventurers, clearly annoyed, demanded to know who he was. The man apologized for his late introduction. He was Odello Waterman, the head butler to the city's lord. Odello Waterman then announced that his lord wanted to invite the new adventurers to a welcoming party. The crowd was stunned. An invitation from a real lord felt like something out of a storybook, but Il-yong was suspicious. He wondered why a powerful lord would bother inviting a bunch of level 1 and 2 newcomers. It felt like a move to scout for future talent. The other adventurers, though, were completely sold. They were already buzzing with excitement, talking about meeting noble ladies and living out a fantasy. Il-yong thought about it. For adventurers, level mattered more than social status. He figured he might as well go and see what a noble's party was all about. That's when Odello dropped the bomb. He explained that adventurers who hadn't signed contracts with clans weren't invited. One of the guys looked completely crushed, his dreams of meeting noble ladies gone. The crowd started to get angry, questioning why only those with contracts could go. They were already being treated like they were useless. Il-yong saw it clearly. Not having a clan contract basically meant you were seen as someone without any class or talent. In other words, the people of this world, they looked like they had no skills and no connections. They were nothing. It all made sense. This was why everyone was so desperate to join a big clan. The system was simple. Clans take a big chunk of the money their adventurers earn. Some might call it teamwork, but really, it was just exploitation. They use that money to get close to the rich and powerful people of Pangea. Once they're in, they make sure no one else can climb up after them. That was their entire strategy. He was disgusted. They were kicking away the ladder so no one else could climb. It was a dirty game, but he didn't care. Let them knock down all the ladders they wanted. He had his own strength, his own martial arts. He didn't need their path. He would just jump right over them. It was that kind of arrogant thinking from the clans that would make them lose out on someone truly powerful. Manhwa must have seen the look on his face. She called out to him, worried, but he just told her he was fine. She wasn't going to let it go. She stepped up and asked Odello if just one more person without a contract could come. The butler shut her down immediately, saying it was a strict order from his lord. She clenched her teeth, furious at the injustice. One of the adventurers asked what people without contracts were supposed to do. Odello just told them to figure it out and find the Adventurers Guild. Il-yong's first impression of this new world was that people were the same everywhere, always ranking and looking down on each other. Manhwa offered to go with him, but he just waved her off, telling her he'd see her back at school. He was used to this kind of treatment from his days as a ronin. Instead of feeling wronged, he just decided he'd get stronger and pay them back for the disrespect. The other adventurers who weren't invited were furious. They cursed the city for beginners and then scattered, each going their separate ways. Odello watched them all leave, looking completely satisfied with himself. Il-yong just saw him as an unlucky old man. The sun began to set over the city. Now that he was on his own, Il-yong had to find the Adventurers Guild. He was a little worried, but the bracelet he wore made communicating with people easy enough. He found the guild without much trouble. A sign above the door wished glory to all adventurers. This was the place. Il-yang walked into the guild, and the place was packed. The adventurers inside were all complaining about the crowd, quickly realizing it was because the new recruits had just arrived. The talk quickly turned to the test the newbies had just finished. A rumor was going around that 3 dark orcs had shown up as the final boss. But another adventurer was confused. He said he'd just come from the plaza, and the new adventurers seemed perfectly fine, full of energy. The others couldn't believe he hadn't heard the news. A bald man at the bar scoffed, saying the dark orc story was old news. The others leaned in, begging him to tell them what he knew. He just cleared his throat and told them to buy him a drink first. After getting his wine, he finally told them what really happened. He said there were 2 potential unique class adventurers in the new batch, and one of them took down all 3 dark orcs alone with just a single sword. The other adventurers were stunned. They couldn't believe it and immediately asked who this guy was. The man admitted he didn't know his name, only the story, so they asked about his class. He thought for a moment before remembering the class, Ronin. The others knew right away that it had to be in unique class. They were instantly jealous. They all agreed. And unique class was basically a cheat. Turns out, Il-yang had been listening the whole time. He sighed, thinking that rumors really do spread faster than a person can walk. His story had arrived at the guild before he did. Il-yang scanned the room, just as he expected for a beginner's city. It was full of low-level adventurers. The strongest people he could see were only D rank. He walked up to a woman at the counter, but she just gave him an annoyed look and asked who he was. She muttered to herself about the terrible service. Il-yang told her he was a new adventurer and that some rude old man had sent him over. The woman's expression changed to a smirk. She knew exactly who he meant and seemed to find it funny that Il-yang had been bossed around by him, but their conversation wasn't private. A few other adventurers overheard and started whispering. They thought it was funny that the new guy had gotten yelled at by the butler right after arriving. They started laughing out loud, clinking their glasses together while making fun of him. That was it for Il-yang. He glared at them, his voice low and angry, asking if they were enjoying themselves at his expense. The woman at the counter told him to just ignore them. She explained that fighting monsters all the time had made their personalities a bit strange, but they weren't really bad people. Il-yang seemed to let it go. He looked around the crowded guild and asked if it was always this busy. Before she could answer, another adventurer spoke up. He explained that it was the monster wave season, a time of year when monsters become much more active. The adventurer explained that the monster waves were like an annual event. They always stormed in whenever new adventurers arrived, but they were mostly weak, low-rank monsters that were easy to handle. But others in the guild were worried. They'd heard predictions that this wave would be unusually large. The whole room was filled with arguments and loud talk, and eventually, the topic turned to Il-yang. They started comparing each other to that Ronin guy, not realizing he was standing right there, listening to every word. The woman at the counter cut through the noise. She told the newcomer that since he was here, he might as well register, and asked for his name and class. That got everyone's attention. The adventurers at the tables started placing bets on what his class could be. They guessed he was a porter, or maybe a tanker. One guy even bet gold that he was a warrior, ignoring them completely. He looked at the woman and calmly gave his name, Kim Il-yang. He explained that the name came from a dream his mother had before he was born. In it, a dragon was flying to the heavens, but she was sad because the dragon wasn't holding a special jewel, which meant it couldn't truly become immortal. He looked up with a slight smile. He told her that he had finally gotten that jewel. Then he made his declaration to the whole room. His class was Ronin. The entire guild went quiet. Every adventurer stopped what they were doing and just stared. He said it again, just to make sure everyone heard. His class was Ronin. The adventurers looked at each other, completely stunned. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The woman at the counter was sweating, her eyes wide. She stammered, asking him to repeat what he just said. Il-yang was getting annoyed. He repeated it one more time, his voice sharp, telling her he said Ronin. That's when one of the adventurers remembered something. He asked if Il-yang was the one who took down the dark orc. The receptionist cut in. She explained that for the registration to be official, she needed to see his info window as proof, so he showed it to her. The blue window glowed, clearly displaying his name, Kim Il-yang, and his class, Ronin. It was real. Suddenly, one of the adventurers who'd been making fun of him put it all together. He excitedly asked Il-yang to tell them the story about the dark orc. Il-yang was not enjoying this. The sudden attention from everyone in the room was overwhelming. Another man spoke up, looking skeptical. He asked that if Il-yang really had such a unique class, why wasn't he given a title from the castle? Why was he still hanging around a place like this? Il-yang explained that titles like that were only for high-ranking members of a clan. He told them he hadn't signed a contract with anyone. The adventurers were stunned. They couldn't believe someone who had taken down 3 dark orcs hadn't been signed to a clan yet. Il-yang corrected them with a slight grin. It wasn't that he couldn't join a clan. He just didn't want to. He explained that he'd learned an important lesson during his time as a Ronin. He remembered that a swordsman's fate depends entirely on his boss. An employer could change who your friends and enemies were overnight. So he decided not to make friends, not to form connections, and not to register anywhere. Il-yang's words split the room. Some adventurers started arguing about their own small parties and the trouble with clans. He ignored them completely. He turned to the woman at the counter and asked if there was a nearby dungeon with E-rank monsters. She said yes, and asked how many people were in his party. He told her he was going alone. Her eyes went wide in disbelief. One of the adventurers at a nearby table overheard. He quickly warned Il-yang that dungeons weren't meant for soloing. Il-yang didn't even flinch. He just told the man that was his opinion, not a fact. Another man stepped forward. He argued that if Il-yang died, he'd just be a problem for the next party. Then he offered him a spot in their group, saying they'd help him grow. Il-yang crossed his arms, unimpressed. He thought to himself, who's really going to be helping who here? Then, an older-looking adventurer told him to stop joking around. He boasted that his party was almost clan level, and that their hunts were systematic. He even offered Il-yang an extra 10% of the profits to join. Another adventurer tried a different approach, trying to get Il-yang to join by mentioning the women in his party. Suddenly, the whole room erupted. Everyone was shouting at him, telling him to ignore the others and join their party instead. They all promised to take care of him, each one trying to shout louder than the last. Il-yang just watched them. He was starting to understand what was going on here. He realized that all the truly useful rookies were immediately picked up by the big, powerful clans. Those A, B, and C rank groups got their pick of the best talent, leaving nothing for anyone else. So the ones left behind, the E rankers with less useful classes, had to scrape by, farming dungeons without much hope. But today, a talented stray had wandered into their territory, and that stray was him. He knew that because he didn't belong to any clan, they all thought he was up for grabs, but he found it almost funny. They really thought he would join their little groups. He ignored all of them and asked if there was an E rank dungeon nearby that could fit about 6 people. One of the adventurers looked at him, confused. He asked if Il-yang was really planning to go alone. Il-yang asked if there was a rule against it. The adventurer was speechless. He explained that while it wasn't forbidden, nobody did it because it was a death sentence. Il-yang's response was simple. He told them it wasn't a problem because he could handle the work of 6 people all by himself. The adventurer couldn't take it anymore. He yelled in frustration, telling him how dangerous that was, but his words were completely ignored. Another adventurer stepped forward, trying to talk some sense into him. He told Il-yang to stop being arrogant and just join their party. Il-yang completely ignored him and just asked for the location of the Rocky Mountain dungeon. The receptionist sighed and gave him the directions. The man gave him one last look, asking if he was absolutely sure he wanted to do this. Il-yang just gave a thumbs up. He promised he'd be back before it got dark. And with that, he left the guild and headed for the mountains. The path was empty and quiet, just him and the wind. He thought about all the noble lords and chosen adventurers having their parties. While they were all celebrating, he was out here, ready to work. He was confident. This was his chance to level up at lightning speed. As he walked, he noticed footprints. His old survival skills kicked in, and he could tell from the tracks that some wore heavy armor, while others were barely equipped at all. He realized another party was somewhere ahead of him, and there was only one reason anyone would climb this dangerous mountain: to conquer the E-rank dungeon. The trail was easy enough to follow. He knew the footprints would lead him right to it. The landscape grew darker and more jagged, and then he saw it. A glowing light between the peaks, the dungeon entrance. And just as he suspected, there was a party of adventurers already standing at the dungeon's entrance. Il-yang sighed. So he wasn't the first one here after all. He was annoyed. It wasn't like he could just turn around and find another dungeon at this point. That's when one of the adventurers turned around, hearing something behind them. The whole group turned to face him. One of them called out, asking who he was. As Il-yang walked closer, they asked where the rest of his team was. He answered plainly that he came alone. The adventurer stared at him, completely shocked. He asked if the guy was out of his mind, basically trying to get himself taken out in the dungeon. While Il-yang stood there calmly, the other adventurer was sizing him up. He saw an unfamiliar face with a cheap steel sword and standard-issue leather armor. He looked like a total rookie. One of the women in the group, Kim Da-young, looked him up and down. She called him an arrogant F-rank newbie, wondering if the certification dungeon was just too easy this time. Il-yang didn't react. He knew they had no idea his group of adventurers had faced the hardest certification dungeon ever. Da-young got even more aggressive. She yelled that this was an E-rank dungeon and told him to get lost since they were here first. She was done talking, but another woman in a red cloak stepped in, trying to calm Da-young down. She wanted to at least hear what Il-yang had to say, but Da-young just kept yelling for him to leave. Il-yang just watched them argue. Il-yang thanked her for the concern, but Il-yang thanked her for the concern, but told her he was confident he could clear it on his own. That just made Da-young laugh. She mocked him for not knowing his place, saying it's no wonder so many new adventurers don't make it. The man in the dark armor finally turned his attention to Il-yang. He noted that Il-yang clearly had no intention of backing down. The adventurer walked toward him, his party watching from behind. Il-yang asked calmly if they were planning to use force to make him leave. He didn't look scared at all. He just stared back, waiting for their answer. The adventurer's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. He said that since Il-yang had come this far, there was only one thing to do. But instead of drawing his sword, he smiled and invited Il-yang to join their party. Da-young was furious, yelling at her leader for the sudden change of heart. Another member of the party was furious. He couldn't believe they were even talking to a drifter like Il-yang. The leader ignored him completely and looked straight at Il-yang, asking what he was going to do. Il-yang thought about his choices. He could just walk away, or he could just knock them all out and go in by himself. But right then, a quest alert popped up. The system wanted him to make allies, not enemies. The reward was some experience points and a secret elixir. His eyes immediately locked onto the reward. That one item changed his mind in an instant. A secret elixir. He couldn't believe it was a possible reward. He knew exactly what it was. A secret elixir from the Emafa clan. It was a low-grade potion that could boost your inner power. He remembered it all too well. This was the very thing that got him killed. He had been betrayed over it. He died before he ever even got the chance to use it. He thought about the system Hildegren. Its personality was definitely annoying, but if it was offering rewards like this, he was more than willing to play along. Then it hit him. The rewards weren't just elixirs. The system was offering all kinds of martial arts items. His mind started racing. Could he get things like dragon scale armor or even 1,000-year-old ginseng? The possibilities were insane. After a moment, Kim Il-young looked at the party leader and accepted the offer. The leader was clearly not expecting him to agree so easily. He stammered for a second, then agreed they should head in together. Il-young smirked. He figured the system really wanted him to get that elixir. One of the women gagged. A horrible smell. One of the women gagged. A horrible smell. One of the women gagged. A horrible smell filled the air. The party leader explained that it was waste, used by monsters to mark their territory. The woman looked even more disgusted, realizing the walls were covered in it. Il-young looked around, realizing the cave was way bigger on the inside than it seemed from the entrance. But not everyone was focused on the dungeon. One of the women was shooting him a dirty look. She was furious that with him here, they'd have to split all the rewards 7 ways. Another guy started complaining too, annoyed that they had to drag a rookie along. The party leader walked over and told him to just ignore them. Il-young replied that he wasn't bothered at all. He asked why they were so on edge, and she leaned in, telling him it was kind of a secret. Turns out, the others who were complaining couldn't get into any other parties, so their leader felt bad for them and let them join. She told Il-young not to let their attitude get to him. Il-young just nodded, telling her not to worry. He promised he would pull his own weight, but in his head, he knew he could do the work of all 6 of them combined. As they walked deeper into the cave, the leader realized they hadn't properly introduced themselves. She introduced herself as Lee Dasam, a 29-year-old healing priestess. Il-young just stared, a little thrown off by her energy. Il-young decided to ask her about what she'd mentioned before. He wanted to know the real reasons the others couldn't find a party. She hesitated, then admitted it was because of some bad rumors. Rumors? That definitely got his attention. He waited for her to explain. Lee Dasam leaned in, telling him this was also a secret. She started with Kim Da-young. Apparently, she'd lost a rare artifact that held lightning magic in her previous party. Since her class was a thief, the story made everyone suspicious of her. Il-young understood immediately. A thief losing a powerful lightning artifact. Yeah, anyone would be suspicious of that. Daesum then moved on to the archer. He was the only one who survived after his entire party was wiped out. An archer's job is to scout ahead and keep the team safe. For him to be the only one to make it out, that was a huge red flag. Daesum figured it had to be one of 2 things. Either he had a terrible past, or he just had the worst luck in the world. That left one person. Il-young asked about their leader, Oh Tae-suk. Daesum admitted she didn't know much about him either, since she hadn't been in the party for very long. Daesum wondered aloud if their leader was a good person for gathering all these people with nowhere else to go. But Il-young had a different thought. A man like that could just as easily have a dark heart. Suddenly, another party member snapped at them to be quiet, worried they were attracting monsters. He complained that he was already struggling to pay off loans for his gear and didn't want another person to split the rewards with. Daesum was shocked by his rudeness. To change the subject, she turned to Il-young and politely asked him to introduce himself. He told them his name was Kim Il-young. He was 24, and his class was Ronin. Daesum seemed surprised. She'd never heard of a Ronin class before. Suddenly, one of the party members shouted that he'd spotted enemies up ahead. The leader immediately asked how many there were. Tae-seok reported about 12 of them, and they seemed to be lightly armored. The leader figured they were just beginner scouts. He quickly gave orders for Dasum to provide support, Tae-seok to attack with his bow, and another warrior to stick by his side. Then he turned to Il-young, telling him to protect Dasum and the porters in the back. Il-young agreed, as thinking to himself that they were just using him as a shield. And there they were, a pack of wolf-like monsters, armed with axes and shields, ready for a fight. Tae-seok drew his bow, yelling that the first to strike would win. He let the arrow fly straight into the pack. With a look of satisfaction, he confirmed his first hit. 1 down. Taking 1 down didn't scare them. It just made the rest of the pack furious. They let out a massive roar, their eyes glowing with hate, and then they charged, all at once. The party leader looked back in alarm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9... The party leader looked back in alarm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 2, 3, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 2, 3, 7, 9, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, 5, 7, 8, 9, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, 3, 7, 9, 4, 3, 7, 8, 9, 3, 7, 8, 9, 9. Barely managed to block a heavy blow from one of the beasts. His teammate was completely surrounded, fighting desperately with her daggers. Suddenly, a blast of dark energy shot through the air, hitting one of the monsters right in the face. But the attack only made the leader of the pack angrier. It let out a roar, and the rest of them surged forward. That's when another group arrived. The leader looked over the chaos and calmly stated that 2 of the other adventurers were already down. Without hesitation, one of them moved. A blade shot out, and the creature screamed in pain as it was struck down. One of the adventurers, a big guy with an axe, was struggling to hold the line. His teammate yelled at him, furious that he hadn't worn better armor for a fight like this. The axe wielder shot back. The chainmail wasn't cheap, and he didn't have the money for it. Their argument was cut short as another monster lunged forward, forcing them to defend. Seeing the front line struggling, the party's healer, Lee Dasum, began to chant. She finished the spell, unleashing a wave of healing energy. A massive cross of glowing light appeared above the battlefield, washing over everyone. The axe wielder grinned as he felt his wounds closing up. He quickly called out his thanks to Daesum. With their wounds healed, the party's frontline fighters pushed forward with new energy. They moved like a well-oiled machine, cutting through the monsters with ease. Il-yang watched from the back. He realized their skill level was completely different from the novice adventurers he'd met before. So this was what it was like to be in a party with veteran E-rank adventurers. He didn't even have to move. The mission was progressing, and he was getting experience points just for standing there. A system window confirmed it. He had to admit, this party plaything wasn't so bad after all. He figured he could just keep reaping the benefits. But then he noticed something ahead. A new group of monsters appeared from the shadows. They looked much stronger than the ones the party had been fighting. These new monsters were completely different. They were huge, muscular wolfmen, and they charged forward like a wave. The party's frontline fighters were getting overwhelmed. The sounds of battle filled the cave. The creatures were fast and brutal, tearing right through the party's defenses. One of the adventurers yelled that they couldn't let any of them get past the front line, but it was already too late. The party's healer, Lee Dasam, was in the back, focused on casting her spells. She was completely unprotected, and that's when Il-yang realized how smart these creatures were. They were ignoring the tanks and going straight for the priestess while she was busy healing. He watched it all happen with a small smile. He had to admit, for a bunch of monsters, it was a brilliant decision. Their plan would have worked perfectly if he hadn't been there. Il-yang stepped forward, his blade ready. The party's healer, Lee Dasam, was in the back, focused on casting her spells. The party's healer, Lee Dasam, was in the back, focused on casting her spells. She was completely unprotected, and that's when Il-yang realized how smart these creatures were. They were ignoring the tanks and going straight for the priestess while she was busy healing. He watched it all happen with a small smile. He had to admit, for a bunch of monsters, it was a brilliant decision. Their plan would have worked perfectly if he hadn't been there. Il-yang stepped forward, his blade ready. The wolfmen didn't hesitate. They charged forward in a single, brutal wave, aiming straight for the healer. Daesum was frozen in fear. One of her teammates screamed for her to run, but she couldn't move. Il-yang, however, just watched them come. He remembered an old saying he'd heard a long time ago. A mad dog just needs a good beating. He decided it was time to put them down. Without another thought, he exploded into motion. A smirk crossed his face as he unleashed his technique, the 18 windless strikes. He moved so fast, he was just a blur, cutting through the pack. He thought to himself that it was only natural for a dog to bite a person, and just as natural to be put down for it. He followed up with the first form of his wind-cutting sword technique, Swift Strike. The creature in front of him was torn apart instantly. The whole point of the move was a single, perfect strike, powered by the pure joy of the fight. His attack didn't scare them. It just made them angrier. Downside was that a sword could easily break after just a few swings. He moved like a blur, his blade flashing through the dark. He was completely surrounded. He knew that if a warrior's moves were read by their opponent, they were as good as dead. He struck another one down before it could even react. The other creatures froze, shocked by his speed. He cut through the pack in an instant, leaving nothing but broken bodies behind him. But then, something he didn't expect happened. One of the creatures caught his blade in its teeth. For a moment, even Il-yang was surprised. The creature growled, thinking it had him trapped. It told him he'd made a grave mistake. But Il-yang just smirked. He grabbed the monster's jaw with his bare hand and twisted hard. The creature screamed in agony. With a sickening crack, his fist smashed into the monster's face. He didn't stop there. He just kept hitting it over and over with his bare hands. The other adventurers just stared, completely stunned. They couldn't believe he was beating an E-rank monster down like a dog with just his fists. The creature roared in pain, but the punches just kept coming. A message popped up from the system. His octagonal fist proficiency was getting better. He threw one last punch, and the monster finally went down for good. Il-yang stood there, surrounded by the bodies of the creatures he'd just taken down. The rest of the party walked up, one of them asking who he was, and if he was the new recruit. He looked over at the party's healer. She quietly thanked him for saving her, and he seemed a little surprised to find someone so polite. Il-yang just brushed it off, saying protecting the party was his duty. But the armored adventurer stepped forward, clearly impressed. He said Il-yang's skill was beyond anything he expected. Il-yang asked how he knew his name. The man explained he'd overheard him talking with Dasam earlier. He admitted that when he heard Il-yang was taking on an E-rank dungeon alone, he thought it was just a beginner's bluff. He apologized on behalf of the group for treating him like a novice. But Il-yang just said he got lucky, insisting that he was a beginner who had just arrived in Pangea. The adventurer's face went pale. He couldn't believe it. The other party members overheard, and they were furious. They couldn't understand how a newcomer could fight like that. One of them, a woman with sharp teeth, got right in his face, demanding to know what his deal was. The party's archer wondered aloud if Il-yang was some kind of criminal, hiding his identity after doing something terrible. But then Dasam remembered something. She pointed out that Il-yang had mentioned his class was unique. The others realized that must be it. They started guessing he was a returnee, and their suspicion quickly turned to jealousy. The archer still thought it was weird. He asked why someone with a unique class would be wandering around without a clan. Il-yang just gave a small smile and said he'd had some issues with them in the past. The armored adventurer finally stepped in and told everyone to back off. He said everyone has a past, and it was clear Il-yang didn't want to talk about his. He reminded them that having a strong person join their party was a good thing, not a bad one. With the introductions finally over, the armored adventurer told the porters to start the cleanup. Il-yang had no idea what he meant by cleanup. The cave was quiet for a moment. That's when he saw them. Two men were busy taking apart the monster bodies. Il-yang asked if the bodies were actually worth anything. The adventurer explained that the creatures contain a small amount of mana, which could be used to forge new armor and weapons. He then pointed out the knoll teeth, saying they could be used for magic or potions. It all started to make sense to Il-yang. This was why they looted the bodies. Il-yang looked down at his own sword and asked if there was a difference between gear made on Earth and gear from Pangea. The adventurer admitted that Earth-made equipment was much nicer, but it had one big problem. It was expensive. He explained that gear from Pangea could be smelly and uncomfortable, but for most adventurers, it was all they could afford. The adventurer finished by saying that the absolute best gear, legend rank and above, could only be made in Pangea. He said people on Earth just weren't skilled enough to create it yet. Il-yang was still thinking about that legend rank gear. Suddenly, one of the porters cleaning the bodies stopped. The adventurer noticed right away and asked him what he'd found. Embedded in the monster's chest was a glowing blue crystal. The porter was stunned. It was a mana stone. Party members couldn't believe their eyes. Il-yang recognized it immediately. It was a real mana stone. The others were already celebrating. They saw it as a huge payday, a complete jackpot. The archer, however, was more focused. He asked the party leader what grade he thought the stone was. The leader held the stone up, looking at it carefully. He explained that the particles inside were small and few, meaning it was probably the lowest grade. The others didn't seem to mind, pointing out that even the cheapest one was worth a fortune. But the archer was uneasy. He said mana stones shouldn't even be in an E-rank dungeon. One of the women told him to relax and just think about the money, but the archer wouldn't let it go. He warned them that a low-level monster dropping a mana stone could be a sign of a dungeon break. Another hunter had clearly heard enough. Comment had clearly hit a nerve, while the comment had clearly hit a nerve. While the others argued, Daesum turned to Il-yang. She asked him what a dungeon break was. Daesum started to explain. She said that sometimes the dungeon master's power grows stronger. When that happens, the dungeon fills with magic, making the monsters inside more powerful and numerous. If it gets too strong, she warned, the monsters will burst out and attack the city. Il-yang didn't get it. He asked why they couldn't just destroy the dungeon before it explodes. The archer stepped in to answer. He explained that even if they destroy a dungeon, the master's power just makes it reappear somewhere else. It was better to leave them in one place so they could be managed. Il-yang looked over and saw the two of them were still going at it. The archer was clearly not happy. The archer turned to Il-yang. He asked if he'd noticed anything strange, explaining that monsters with mana stones can sometimes evolve. Il-yang just said he wasn't sure, since he took it down in a single hit. Il-yang asked if there was a problem. The archer told him not to worry about it, but Il-yang understood the implication now. An E-rank monster evolving into a D-rank was a very bad sign. The party leader had heard enough. He told everyone to get back into formation so they could move forward. As they walked deeper into the cave, the archer couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The party leader warned that goblins were on their way, drawn by the scent of the scouts they'd taken down. The archer asked how many. The leader estimated around 20, but said one of them had unusually loud footsteps. He figured it had to be a wolf chieftain. The battle plan was simple. Daesum would distract the boss while everyone else cleared out the smaller enemies. One of the fighters hoped they'd find another mana stone. The other guy scoffed, saying it wasn't likely, but the first one just smirked, saying, "You never know." Suddenly, a terrifying howl ripped through the cave, shaking everyone. The archer couldn't believe a wolf chieftain could make a sound like that. The leader's face went grim as he wondered if it was something worse, like a wolf warlord. Then, from the darkness, a whole pack of monsters appeared. The party leader scanned the horde, but he couldn't find the boss. The archer couldn't see it either. It didn't make sense after that howl. The party grew tense, wondering where it was hiding. The monsters didn't wait. They were ready to charge. The party leader yelled for everyone to focus on the wolves in front of them, calling for Il-yang to help out. The archer immediately let an arrow fly as the fight began, but Il-yang was already a blur, cutting through the monsters before they could even react. He slammed right into one of the wolves. A wild grin spread across his face. He was in his element. A system window popped up, tracking their hunt. In just a few moments, they'd already taken down 20 of the 30 monsters. One of the fighters was impressed by the clean sweep. He couldn't help but wonder just how high their party leader's level was. The whole cave was a mess of fighting as the party clashed with the remaining monsters. Through it all, Il-yang was completely locked in, his eyes fixed on the fight. In the middle of the fight, the party's healer closed her eyes and began to chant. A powerful purple energy started to gather around her. She unleashed her cure spell, a massive cross of holy light that slammed down on the remaining monsters. Il-yang was thinking this was all too easy. That's when something slammed into him from the side, catching him completely off guard. The other party members were just as confused. They had no idea what was going on. A massive wolf-like creature. Bigger than a massive wolf-like creature. Bigger and meaner than anything they'd faced before. The party started to panic. One of them realized it wasn't a wolf chieftain, but a wolf warlord. A monster that had no business being in an E-rank dungeon. Another connected the dots, shouting that the mana stone must have caused this. The warlord let out a terrifying roar. For the first time, Il-yang looked genuinely concerned. The creature was huge. A wolf warlord, and it stared them down from the darkness. Its size alone was enough to tell them this fight would be on a whole different level. The wolf warlord let out a low growl. its sharp teeth on full display. One of the fighters realized it had appeared right after the healer's spell. The archer put it together. The monster had some kind of invisibility skill, and he warned everyone to be on guard. The warlord roared that it would tear them apart. With a final shout for everyone to dodge, it lunged forward in a blur. It slammed into the ground where they had been standing, shattering the rock. The party barely managed to leap out of the way. One of the fighters warned that even a glancing blow could be fatal, but Il-yang cut her off, telling her to stop talking and just fight. As the creature growled again, Il-yang spotted something. There was no armor protecting the area above its neck. He'd never seen a monster with a weak point like that. The warlord didn't give him any more time to think. Swung its massive claws right at his face, but Il-yang was too fast. The creature missed and immediately charged toward the archer, who was now completely exposed. But the archer didn't back down. He drew his bow, aiming right for the charging warlord. Just as the creature was about to strike, Il-yang appeared out of nowhere. He intercepted the attack, saving the archer's life. The warlord roared in fury. Il-yang didn't just block it. He used the momentum to launch his own attack. He moved like a blur, striking the monster before it could react. Seeing his chance, the archer joined the fight. But instead of firing an arrow, he charged forward and threw a punch, using his bow to add force to the blow. The hit landed right on its weak spot. The warlord growled, clearly hurt by the attack. The archer stood his ground, ready for the next boof. But the wound only made the warlord even more furious, and it let out a deafening roar. It was too fast. The monster grabbed the archer by the head, lifting him off the ground. One of his teammates screamed out his name, O Tae-seok. Filled with rage, the fighter cursed the monster and charged forward to save his friend. But the fighter's charge was useless. The wolf warlord swatted him away like he was nothing, sending him flying. The party leader watched with a grim look on his face. He knew that with that kind of power, even a single hit could be fatal. The fighter couldn't believe it. He had no idea where the monster had even come from. The warlord let out a furious roar, ready to strike again. That's when Il-yang moved. He launched himself into the air, his sword glowing as he unleashed his one-flash wind slash. In its rage, the monster had made a huge mistake. It had left its weak spot, the neck, completely exposed. Il-yang saw the opening instantly. For a master of the swift sword, a mistake like that was a death sentence. He twisted his body midair, driving his foot straight into the warlord's neck with incredible force. The kick connected with a sickening crunch. It wasn't just a simple attack. It was pure force aimed right at the weak spot. The blow sent the massive creature stumbling back. Il-yang landed gracefully, already preparing for his next move. The warlord slammed into the cave wall, and the whole place shook as rocks and dust exploded everywhere. Through the dust, the monster looked up. It let out a confused growl, unable to understand what had just happened. But Il-yang just stood there, calmly, watching. He smirked, taunting the beast. This, he explained, was the power of a true martial artist. The taunt worked. The wolf warlord pushed itself up, its eyes burning with pure rage. It let out a final, terrifying roar. It was done playing around. But just when they thought the fight was over, the bodies of the wolves on the ground started to twitch. Dark energy was crackling all over them. One of them let out a piercing shriek. This wasn't a wolf anymore. It was something else entirely. Il-yang couldn't believe his eyes. Every single wolf they had taken down was getting back up. The whole cave was now filled with these undead monsters. The undead horde didn't waste any time, and they charged straight for the party. One of the fighters realized these weren't like any undead he knew. This was something different. The party leader figured it out. There had to be a necromancer nearby, turning them into undead. He yelled for Dasum to bless their weapons immediately. Dasum closed her eyes and began to pray, gathering holy power in her hands. A massive cross of light erupted behind them. The holy energy flowed into their weapons, making them glow. Now they had a fighting chance. Il-yang looked down at his sword. The holy blessing had made the blade shine with a powerful purple light. All around him, the rest of the party readied their own weapons, which now glowed with the same holy energy. With a terrifying shriek, the undead wolves charged. The party leader yelled for everyone to brace for impact. The horde slammed into them with incredible force. One of the fighters was immediately swarmed by the creatures. The party leader was furious. His eyes began to glow with power as he prepared to strike back. He cut down one of the monsters, but it was clear this wasn't working. Il-yang watched, realizing they were in real trouble. And that's when the undead wolf warlord let out a roar. It was finally joining the fight. Il-yang knew he couldn't wait any longer. He decided to stop holding back and go all out, charging straight for the warlord. With a final burst of energy, Il-yang unleashed his ultimate technique. He called it the one-flash wind slash, a single, devastating strike aimed right at the creature's weak spot. The massive monster collapsed behind him, defeated. A moment later, a blue window appeared in the air. The system announced that the quest was complete. He stood over the body of the fallen warlord, the cave suddenly silent. He thought to himself that this was what it felt like to use real martial arts. The wolf warlord let out one last, silent scream before its body went completely still. A small smile played on Il-yang's lips. The fight was over. The scene felt strangely familiar, reminding him of his time in the Miram world. He thought about the only real difference. Back then, the bodies on the ground were human. One of his party members stared in disbelief, wondering how a sword could move that fast. He realized it must have been the swift strike skill. With the warlord gone, a strange thing started to happen. All across the cave, the undead wolves began to crumble into dust. The fighter turned, his eyes wide with surprise as he watched the entire horde just fall apart. He finally understood. The necromancer controlling them must have been a spellcaster. With the leader gone, the curse was broken. The fighter explained that this kind of control curse usually loses its power when the caster is taken down. The party leader turned to Il-yang, thanking him for his help. Il-yang just smiled, saying it was nothing. He told them that party members should always help each other out, but he couldn't shake a strange feeling. For 1,000 demon leader, that wolf had seemed kind of weak. He thought about how easily they'd won, especially considering how panicked the rest of the group had been. That's when one of the other party members called out to him, a bit nervously. Il-yang turned to her, arms crossed, and just told her to spit it out. She was trying to thank him for saving her, but she was so flustered she couldn't get the words out. The other warrior just stood there, smiling at the whole thing. She got frustrated with herself for being so awkward. Il-yang finally realized she was just trying to say thanks. Il-yang just waved it off. He told her not to worry about it, that helping each other is just what party members do. But the party leader didn't agree. He said that kind of loyalty only exists in a real team, built on trust, not a temporary group like theirs. Il-yang looked annoyed by the comment. He told the leader to do whatever he wanted, making it clear he wasn't a pushover. The party leader clenched his fist, furious at how rude Il-yang was being. With the fighting over, an awkward silence filled the cave. That's when they turned their attention to the loot. The wolf warlord had dropped 2 magic stones and a ring. The party leader announced it was time to sort out the loot they'd gotten from the dungeon. He held up a scroll covered in strange, glowing symbols. One of the party members asked what it was. The leader explained it was an intermediate appraisal scroll, worth 1,000,001. Il-yang was stunned by how expensive it was. The system windows showed the rest of the loot: 2 mana stones and a rare ring. The ring could increase the wearer's strength and even grant invisibility for a few minutes. One of the guys noted that, as expected, it was a low-grade mana stone. The archer guessed that the dungeon boss must have been promoted to a higher rank than they thought. That's when another member realized something important. Grade wasn't the same as lowest grade. He asked what the price was, and the answer was shocking, around 30,000,001. Il-yang listened quietly. He couldn't believe it. That 1 small mana stone was worth as much as a car, and he wasn't even done. The party leader explained that the ring, being a rare accessory, was probably worth between 60 and 70,000,001. The rest of the party couldn't hold it in. They started cheering, realizing they completely hit the jackpot. The leader had to tell everyone to calm down. He reminded them they still needed to figure out how to split everything fairly. All this excitement was over 2 small stones and a simple-looking ring. He looked over everything one last time, including all the smaller items. The total value was around 120,000,001. Il-yang couldn't help but smile. That was an insane amount of money for just 1 day's work. But the archer brought them back to reality. The money was unusual, but so was the dungeon they'd just barely survived. The archer boasted that while their team's reputation wasn't the best, their skill was undeniable. He was sure that any other party would have been completely wiped out. One of the fighters looked worried. He wondered if this meant all dungeons were becoming this dangerous, which could be a huge problem for everyone. But a woman on the team immediately shut him down, telling him that wasn't their business. She turned to the party leader and demanded to know how much their share would be. The leader started doing the math. First, he explained, they had to deduct the porter's wages and a 20% tax. The woman immediately complained about the tax. The fighter just shot back that if she didn't like it, she should become an A-class adventurer and get an exemption. After all the deductions, each person would get about 15,000,001. The rest of the party seemed pretty happy with that. While the others talked, Il-yang just listened. One of the fighters complained that 15,000,001 felt like a letdown after hearing the initial total was so much higher. He then pointed out one of the items they found, asking the party leader if a simple iron ring was really worth that much money. Il-yang watched him, staying silent. The party leader just smiled, like he knew something they didn't. He held up his hands and explained that even though it was just 1 piece of armor, a person has 10 fingers to wear rings on. And this wasn't just any ring. It was an invisibility ring, which was an incredibly tempting piece of gear. With the loot sorted out, the leader called for everyone's attention. He told them they all worked hard and that it was impressive they all made it out unharmed, especially after the commander showed up. The party leader held up some potions. He said he'd treat everyone, explaining that the potions would help with any internal injuries their normal healing couldn't fix. The other party members were thrilled. One of them gave a thumbs up and thanked the leader, saying it was just what he needed for a nagging wound. Il-yang took his potion and drank it down, figuring he wouldn't turn down something free. He grimaced a little at the taste, thinking to himself that good medicine is supposed to be bitter. But then he noticed something strange. Another party member wondered aloud if the potion was supposed to be sweet. A second later, the other party members started grabbing their chests and coughing violently. Something was terribly wrong. One of them collapsed to his knees, struggling to breathe. Il-yang just watched the chaos, wondering what was happening. He seemed to be the only one not affected. One of the party members managed to get to his feet, demanding to know what the leader had given them. The party leader just stood there as his teammates collapsed around him, one by one. A sick grin spread across his face. He asked them if it was deadly enough for their tastes. He looked down at them and said that at least outsiders make good items. That word, outsiders, sent a wave of confusion through the rest of the party. They had no idea what he was talking about. The leader finally answered their question. He told them they had drunk a potion concentrated with mana poison. He held up the empty vial, explaining that it was designed to completely mess up an adventurer's mana, no matter how strong they were. The realization hit the last conscious party member. The leader just watched him struggle, calling it useless. With a twisted grin, he told them it was already over. There was no coming back from that poison. The party leader explained that the poison felt like a heavy stone in your chest, making it impossible to breathe or use mana. Il-yang clutched his chest, feeling the effects. To him, it felt familiar, like a poison that scatters internal energy. He tried to check his energy, but then he stopped. A blue light glowed in his hands. He looked down, confused by what was happening, and then it hit him. The poison worked on mana. He didn't have any. The realization made him feel incredibly foolish. The party leader laughed, saying how lucky he was to find a group of loners and hit the jackpot. The last conscious party member could only look up in anger. One of the men struggled to speak, demanding to know why he would do this. The leader just looked down on them, saying this is what happens when people cause trouble. He revealed that he was one of the outsiders he'd mentioned before. The long-haired man finally understood. The leader had picked him specifically because he was a wanderer with no one to back him up. Il-yang listened, taking it all in. The party leader explained that he loves targeting drifters because no one ever comes looking for them. Il-yang stared back, asking if he was really going to eliminate 7 people for just 120 million. The leader just laughed. He corrected him, saying it was 120 million each. Then he mocked them, asking if they really thought their lives were worth $1 billion. Il-yang realized this guy's way of thinking was completely broken. The leader then pointed out that on top of the money, he'd also get to keep all their magic equipment. The last conscious party members screamed at the leader, demanding to know what he thought a human life was worth. They called him a despicable monster. The leader just ignored their rage. He told them to say whatever they wanted and consider it their last words as he picked up his sword. But just as he moved, a system window appeared. It was a new request called Justice Realization. The system called the party leader garbage and offered a reward to clean him up. A small smile spread across Il-yang's face. The timing was perfect. He got to his feet, sword in hand, ready to begin. The party leader was completely stunned. He demanded to know how Il-yang was still moving. With a small smile, Il-yang asked if he'd ever heard of someone with 0 mana. The leader just yelled that it was nonsense. But before the leader could even process it, Il-yang moved. He told him it was time to get what he deserved. His sword came down, and the leader's arm flew off. He screamed in pain, demanding to know why the poison didn't work. Il-yang simply repeated the answer. He has no mana for the poison to affect. The leader refused to believe it, shouting that every adventurer has mana. Il-yang just stated that he was standing right there. The leader begged him to stay back, but Il-yang's face was cold. He told him that wasn't an option. The man got desperate, trying to call it murder and appealing to their shared nationality. Il-yang just scoffed, wondering why trash like him was still talking. He swung his sword, explaining that in all his experience, backstabbers were never shown any mercy. The leader collapsed to the ground, finished. With the leader taken care of, a system window popped up. The request was complete, and he had leveled up. Back in town, the sun was setting. This was the Adventurers Guild, a place meant to support those who risk their lives. Inside, the woman at the counter was lost in thought. She felt guilty, worried that she might have sent an adventurer to their end. Just then, the door creaked open. She looked up and saw Il-yang walking in. She was surprised to see him back so soon. She assumed he gave up, telling him it was a smart choice for a F rank to quit an E rank dungeon. But then, he slammed a heavy bag down on the counter, and her eyes went wide. Inside was the head of the party leader, the man with the bounty on him. After everything that happened at the guild, the group walked through the town as the sun began to set. Il-yang turned to the others. He brought up what the receptionist had said, asking if they were the ones who wanted to know whose head it was. He confirmed that it was indeed the man with the 100 million bounty on his head. The others seemed to finally realize just how dangerous their former leader was. One of the adventurers then held out a bag of money, offering him the bounty. Il-yang just stared, completely surprised by the gesture. They explained that since he saved their lives, he should get everything, the dead leader's share, his equipment, and the bounty. The man added that if Il-yang didn't want it, he'd make sure the money was used for a good cause. With a simple thumbs up, Il-yang agreed. Il-yang warned them that once the money was in his pocket, there was no turning back. The conversation then shifted. One of the women couldn't believe their leader was an outsider, admitting she thought he was a kind person. Another member bitterly remarked that there are no good people in this line of work. Everyone just looks out for themselves. They wondered what to do now that their reputation was destroyed. One of them suggested they just stick together. The blonde man pointed out that they shouldn't be worried. They had new power now, the man who took down their leader in a single strike. The others agreed, realizing that with Il-yang on their side, they had a fighting chance. Suddenly, a system message popped up. The Mother of Heroes was not happy with his hidden intentions. Il-yang just thought to himself, what's so wrong with being a little selfish? But the system warned him not to even think about running away. Realizing he was stuck, Il-yang accepted the terms. He asked how the settlement would work, and the blonde adventurer explained he'd handle it, and the money would be deposited into everyone's accounts once they returned to Earth. Il-yang was already thinking about paying off his loans. Another one of the adventurers, a warrior with a massive sword, turned to Il-yang. He asked him what he planned to do with all that money. Instead of answering, Il-yang just pointed to a ring. The blonde adventurer picked it up, surprised. and asked if this was the one he wanted. Il-yong confirmed it. He was buying it. He explained his reasoning. He said that a wise sage taught him every adventurer needs an escape plan. For him, this ring was it. He smirked, thinking about how its skills would make him impossible to catch. It would even help him look like a gentleman. But the mother of heroes immediately shut him down, telling him a hero doesn't steal. The blonde adventurer said buying the ring would make settling their accounts easier. When Il-yong asked for the price, the man held up 7 fingers. Il-yong couldn't believe it. He accused the man of charging the highest price possible and demanded a party discount. The adventurer argued that settlements needed to be clear to avoid problems. He offered to lower it to 6 since they fought together. But after a moment, he was firm. The price was 7. He thought about meeting in the middle, but shook his head. 7 it was. Il-yong suddenly started acting weak, clutching his chest. He claimed it was the after effect of fighting their leader while suffering from mana poison. The blonde adventurer wasn't buying it for a second. He reminded Il-yong that he doesn't even use mana and complained about how difficult he was being over the price. Finally, the adventurer just gave up. He sighed, admitting that being a party leader was tough, and he didn't want to make their already bad reputation any worse. Il-yong pulled up his status window. He was now level 15. He realized he must have leveled up when he took down their old leader and thought it was a little twisted that the system rewarded him for that. He held 2 small black pills in his palm. Without a second thought, he swallowed them. A system message popped up. His inner strength had increased, and he could feel himself getting stronger. With the boost, he slipped on the ring he'd just bought, already imagining how powerful he'd be with its invisibility skill. The blonde adventurer asked what he planned to do with the rest of his money. Il-yong explained that since adventuring paid so well, he was going to reinvest it all in better equipment. The adventurer gave him a recommendation for a good blacksmith and confirmed that his first payment would be in his account by the end of the day. Il-yong told the adventurer he was going to treat himself to some chicken. He set a meeting for the next day at the guild, but playfully added that he might not even show up. The adventurer shouted after him, reminding him about the second payment. Il-yong just ignored him, clearly annoyed by the whole conversation. Following the adventurer's advice, Il-yong arrived at the blacksmith shop. As he walked in, a voice from inside the shop called out, identifying him as a customer. The blacksmith seemed surprised, saying it had been a while since he'd had a human customer. He told Il-yong to just look around and pick something out if he happened to like anything. Il-yong thought the owner didn't seem too keen on doing business. He looked over the weapons on display until one of the swords caught his eye. As he looked closer, he recognized the style. It reminded him of the weapons he'd seen back in the Central Plains. A system window popped up, confirming his guess. It was a rare grade short sword with a high attack stat and a special effect. This was exactly what he was looking for. Il-yong asked if the blacksmith had made the sword. The man said no. Someone else had sold it to him. He explained that nobody ever bought it because of its strange look, but offered to sell it for 4 gold coins. Il-yong told him he couldn't afford that. The blacksmith considered it, then offered 3 gold coins instead. The blacksmith held firm at 3 coins, arguing that it was still a rare grade weapon. So Il-yong made a counteroffer. He'd pay the 3 coins, but only if the price included repairs and maintenance. The blacksmith grinned. He told Il-yong that was a deal he could make. Il-yong was satisfied. He could tell the sword was made with excellent materials by a true craftsman. This was the weapon for him. The blacksmith commented on Il-yong's unique taste. He took the sword, promising to fix it up like new, and told him to come back the next day to pick it up. The next day, Il-yong returned to the shop. The blacksmith greeted him as he walked in. The sword, now looking brand new, rested on the counter. Il-yong asked if he could try drawing it, and the blacksmith told him to go right ahead. Il-yong slowly drew the blade. It wasn't just clean. It was glowing with a strange, powerful light. The blacksmith asked if he was satisfied, saying this was the sword's true form. The blacksmith also mentioned he'd made a temporary sheath for free. Il-yong was genuinely confused. He couldn't figure out why this guy seemed to hate making money. With the sword at his side, the blacksmith commented that it suited him well. He even got a little emotional, comparing it to seeing a daughter get married. Il-yong just smirked and joked that he should start calling him father-in-law. The blacksmith told him not to push it. But just then, a loud bell started ringing through the entire shop. They both froze, trying to figure out what was happening. The blacksmith's face went pale with dread. He explained that the bell meant only one thing: the city was being invaded. Il-yong's playful mood was gone in an instant. The invasion bell wasn't just ringing in the shop. It was echoing across the entire city. Inside the castle, the lord looked stunned. She demanded that the captain of the Persian Knights repeat what he just said, and the captain delivered the grim news. The monster assault had failed. He reported that the D-class and E-class hunters were almost completely wiped out and were retreating. The lord couldn't believe it. He explained this wasn't a simple monster wave, but a well-organized invasion, as if they'd been waiting. To make things worse, the monsters even had siege equipment like ladders. The lord realized someone must be targeting their city on purpose. The captain confirmed it, adding that the monsters looked twisted and withered, like an army of the undead. The news hit her hard. An army of undead, all under someone's command. It was a nightmare. She wondered if a high-ranking necromancer was behind it all, and the captain agreed that was the most likely answer. Dealing with normal monsters was hard enough, but this was something else entirely. They were facing facing an immortal army that knew no defeat. If this continued, the entire city would be nothing but ash. The Lord explained that they had protected Ildel for generations, but they were only ready for a simple monster wave. Desperate, she asked the steward if he had any ideas. The captain clearly didn't think much of the old man. The steward simply stated that he knew nothing about fighting. The Lord then asked if they'd heard from their allies. The steward had more bad news. He explained that since other cities were also being invaded, immediate help was unlikely. The Lord was frustrated, questioning why they'd bothered making friends if they couldn't help in a crisis like this. She wasn't taking no for an answer. The Lord ordered him to contact their allies immediately and make sure they sent reinforcements, no matter what it took. She finished with a clear threat, telling the steward that if he failed, she'd have no choice but to test his capabilities personally. The steward looked completely overwhelmed. The captain just watched him, saying nothing. The captain had his own theory. He figured the adventurers didn't help because they were offered more money somewhere else. He also thought about the rumors that a lot of the money meant for the clans had ended up in the steward's pocket. Finally, the captain spoke up. He told the Lord that he'd been saying for years they should have spent their money developing Ildel's own army and knights. As he spoke, he glared at the steward. It was clear who he blamed for their current mess. The Lord agreed with the captain, but said it wasn't the time to point fingers. She needed to know how many fighters they had left. The captain reported they had about 100 soldiers, but could maybe gather 400 by drafting people. He added that there were still some adventurers in the city who hadn't joined the first fight. The Lord wondered if those adventurers would even answer a call to arms. The steward explained that it was unlikely. He told her that the ordinary adventurers had been kept away from the castle on his orders to protect her dignity. The captain realized what the steward had really been doing. He'd kept the adventurers away so he could scheme more easily. He knew the chances of them helping now were slim. After all, they owed Ildel nothing. The Lord made her decision. She ordered the gates locked immediately. She told the captain to empty the entire vault if needed to hire the adventurers, saying she would take full responsibility. The captain understood. The news of the invasion was spreading through the city. People were just starting to realize the danger they were in. Inside a tavern, the adventurers were in an uproar. They demanded to know what happened to the first wave of fighters and couldn't understand why the city gates were suddenly locked. Suddenly, a man slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room. He told everyone to shut up because he had a proposal worth hearing. One of the adventurers told him not to waste their time unless he had a brilliant idea. The director calmly agreed, saying he knew most of them were ready to abandon the city, but he warned them that just running away wouldn't change anything. The director explained that this invasion wasn't just happening to them. He told them other places were also under attack, and he'd heard rumors of even C-rank monsters appearing elsewhere. The adventurers listened, the news catching them completely off guard. He pointed out that, in contrast, their city was mostly facing low-level monsters. With that said, he was ready to make his proposal. He held up 2 fingers. He promised to pay 2 gold coins in advance to anyone who joined the battle, and for those who fought until the very end, he'd give them another 2 gold coins. The room filled with chatter as the adventurers debated the offer. They knew that with an undead army, the key was to take out the necromancer, but they questioned if they could even reach them, let alone get past their guards. Il-yang just listened quietly from the side. A woman next to him asked what he was planning to do. Il-yang just shrugged, saying he didn't really need the money right now. The others couldn't believe it. They asked why he wouldn't make money while he had the chance, calling him greedy for passing it up. Il-yang didn't seem to care. Another adventurer leaned in, trying to convince him. He pointed out that just by showing up and pretending to fight, they could earn a fortune. He seemed to think Il-yang was being difficult for no reason. Il-yang listened with a small smile as they laid out their real plan. They figured the Lord wouldn't let her own clan members fall, so they could just fake their way through the battle, collect the money, and then make a run for it. One of the adventurers worried about what would happen if the city actually fell, since there weren't many places for E-rankers to go. Another guy just laughed it off, saying it wasn't their problem. He figured the Lord must be getting pretty desperate by now, and right then, as if on cue, a blue window popped up right in front of Il-yang. The system was giving him a new quest, Call of Duty. The difficulty was medium, and the objective was to defeat one key target. The reward for the quest was Hildegren, a legendary root that had absorbed mystical energy for 1,000 years. Il-yang figured it was a pretty good deal, but he hesitated. The quest's difficulty was medium, and he remembered almost dying to a medium-low Dark Orc. This was a serious risk. The quest involved a siege battle against an endless wave of monsters. An inner voice, the mother of heroes, started nagging him. She said a true hero should ignore the risks and stand at the top. He got frustrated, telling her to give him a moment to think, but she kept pushing until he finally snapped and told her to stop with all the hero deck. But then he realized something. The quest didn't say he had to win the war or defeat thousands of enemies. A grin spread across his face. This might actually be doable. He'd made his decision. The other adventurers saw him muttering to himself and thought he was crazy. One of them asked if he was talking to his divine contractor. Without answering, Il-yang raised his hand and announced that his party was joining the battle. The others were completely caught off guard. He turned to his party members, reminding them that they had to join since he was forced into the party. He gave a big speech about protecting the city and its people. His teammates were not impressed, but they reluctantly agreed to go. Il-yang just sighed to himself, annoyed that he had to listen to his superiors. Seeing them join, another group of adventurers decided they should probably participate too. One of Il-yong's teammates grumbled under his breath, but then a familiar voice called out, addressing someone as senior and brother. Il-yong's head snapped up. He knew that voice. Il-yong looked over and saw Manhwa walking in with another man. He asked why they were together. The man, Kong Baek-chul, proudly announced that he was now a member of the Cheong family. Hwa-yan just smiled, saying they couldn't let a talent like Il-yong get away. Hwa-yan suggested that since he was joining the battle anyway, he should just join their party. She promised they'd take good care of him. Il-yong was just annoyed. Her offer made him sound like a total loner, and the worst part was, it wasn't completely untrue. Kang Baek-chul flexed and yelled that he would support his brother, just like he did before. That's when one of Il-yong's teammates stepped in. She told them to stop trying to take him, saying he'd already been through life and death with them. The two women glared at each other, both demanding to know who the other group was. Il-yong just stood there, thinking to himself that when two annoying things meet, the problem just gets twice as bad. They started arguing about who his real comrades were, getting right up in his face. The mother of heroes found the whole thing hilarious, telling him she was glad to see two women fighting over him. She even praised him for being a hero who could play with women's hearts, which just made him more frustrated. They all started pressuring him at once, demanding he make a choice. Even Kong Baek-chul begged him to join them, reminding him of a past battle. The whole situation was becoming a huge burden. Then, another one of his original teammates quietly asked if he was going to stay with them. Il-yong knew he couldn't choose just one side, so he held out his hand and announced the only solution. They would all fight together. Manhwa sighed, admitting she knew he'd say something like that, but it was still a little cringy. His other teammate just looked completely done with the whole situation. Il-yong's teammate agreed to combine their forces, but as soon as it was decided, Manhwa grabbed Il-yong's arm. She told him to come with her, giving him a look that made him really uncomfortable. He was already getting tired of all this. She led him to a massive castle, the main keep of the city. They walked down a long, fancy hallway. It was clear this was a place of power. Il-yong looked around, impressed. The difference between the inside of the castle and the rest of the town was huge. She led him to a huge set of doors and pushed them open. Inside, a man was reporting bad news to a woman on a throne. He told her that the request for support from the Hong family had failed. The woman, Lord Oriana, looked disappointed. That's when she noticed Il-yong standing in the doorway. Manhwa stepped forward. She announced that while she didn't bring family support, she brought something better, the strongest person in the city. Lord Oriana looked at Il-yong, completely surprised. The man who had been reporting to the Lord recognized Il-yong instantly. He immediately protested, telling Lord Oriana that they couldn't possibly accept him into the special forces. He remembered him as the man who had shouldered past him at the gate. The butler then accused Manhwa of lying. He claimed Il-yong wasn't the strongest at all, but just a newbie with no clan who had only been on Earth for a few days. Il-yong gritted his teeth, clearly getting annoyed. He was furious. They didn't seem to understand what real experience was. A memory flashed through his mind, his 7 long years in the brutal martial world. He might be new to this place, but he was a veteran who had survived countless battles. The butler urged Manhwa to admit the truth. He demanded that Lord Oriana throw Il-yong out immediately, but the Lord just looked past him and spoke directly to Manhwa. She asked if there was a special reason for bringing him here. That's when Manhwa played her trump card. She asked the Lord if she remembered the story about the person who saved her life. Lord Oriana's eyes widened, recalling the tale of a hero who wiped out an army of monsters and took down a dark orc in a single blow. She explained that Il-yong is a returnee, just like her. He has a wealth of combat experience because he survived for 7 years in the dirty, brutal bottom of another world. The court officials were completely confused by her words. The butler was shaking with anger, refusing to believe it. He argued that if Il-yong was really that powerful, he would have joined a clan by now. Manhwa simply stated that Il-yong doesn't like being in groups and prefers to work alone. The butler just stood there, fuming, unable to accept any of it. Cutting through all the arguments, Il-yong stepped forward and addressed Lord Oriana himself. He formally introduced himself and announced that he was joining the special forces. He looked at her with a confident smirk, asking her to take care of him. Lord Oriana looked down from her throne and commented that she didn't remember seeing Il-yong at the welcoming party. Il-yong explained that as an adventurer without a clan contract, he wasn't invited. This immediately caught the Lord's attention. Her expression hardened as she turned to the head butler, demanding to know why she wasn't told about this. The butler tried to defend himself, arguing that adventurers like Il-yong were just scraps not worth spending resources on. The Lord's face twisted with rage. She screamed at him to be silent, accusing him of questioning her loyalty and spreading wicked rumors around the castle. The Lord admitted she hadn't wanted to believe the things she'd heard about him, but now she finally realized just how wrong she had been to trust him. She pointed right at him. The real reason he didn't want to spend resources on adventurers, she yelled, was because he was putting that money into his own pockets. She told the head butler that she wasn't a child anymore. She was now a 16-year-old adult, and she could see his schemes for what they were. She calmly thanked him for his service, but told him she no longer needed him. The butler began to plead, but she cut him off and called for Captain Persia. She ordered the captain to strip the butler of his position and kick him out immediately. The captain acknowledged the order without hesitation. As two guards grabbed the butler, he cried out his name, Othello Waterman, and begged the Lord to remember that he had served her since she was a baby. Captain Persia let out a heavy sigh, his expression unreadable. He watched the whole thing go down. He couldn't help but think it was a ridiculous show. He glanced at Hong Hua-yan, wondering if this was all part of her plan. He decided she was a truly terrifying woman. With the butler finally gone, Lord Oriana turned back to them. She apologized for making them witness such an unpleasant sight, but Hong Hua-yan just smiled. She told the Lord it was fine, explaining that sometimes you have to get rid of the bad stuff, especially when the city's fate is on the line. She added that for some, watching it happen can be satisfying. Il-yong thought to himself that she wasn't just scary, she was creepy. With that settled, Hong Hua-yan got straight to business. She said it was time to save the city. The Lord agreed, her expression serious. She knew the enemy was probably closing in as they spoke. Lord Oriana turned to her captain. She asked if they had located the enemy's commanding sorcerer. Persia apologized, explaining that it was taking time because all the sorcerers looked alike, but he mentioned that a recon team had reported seeing one strange guy. The Lord was curious. Persia explained that the man had a mana stone on his forehead and a green light coming from his eyes. That's when Il-yong spoke up. He knew exactly who that was, confirming he'd seen that same guy commanding the undead. The Lord noted that Il-yong had only just arrived in this world. That's when Captain Persia realized he'd seen him before, in the Rock Mountain dungeon. He remembered hearing about a new adventurer catching an outsider, and Il-yong confirmed it was him. Hong Hua-yan was amazed at how much he'd already accomplished. Lord Oriana then got straight to the point, asking Il-yong if the man with the mana stone was definitely the necromancer. He told her he was sure. With the target confirmed, the Lord said they needed to figure out how to deal with him. Il-yong spoke up, telling her he already had a way. Both Hong Hua-yan and the Lord looked at him, completely surprised by his confidence. He held up his hand, showing them a ring. He explained it was a rare item that could make him invisible. His plan was to use his power to sneak up on the necromancer and take him out at close range. The Lord turned to her captain, asking if the undead army was mixed with other monsters. Persia confirmed it, adding that they believed the necromancer was being protected by a group of orcs. Lord Oriana's face grew serious. She realized that even if he succeeded, he'd be surrounded. Il-yong explained that was the whole point of the special unit. As soon as he took down the target, they had to rush in and get him out. If they were late, he wouldn't make it. He gave them a time limit, 10 minutes. That was the most he could endure on his own. The Lord looked at him, completely confused. She asked why he was willing to risk so much for them, especially after the way he'd been disrespected and ignored. Il-yong just smirked. He told her his reason was simple. The reward for the request was something called the Millennium Elixir. Hong Hua-yan backed him up, telling the Lord it was exactly as she'd explained before. The Lord looked at Hong Hua-yan, admitting she was right about him being different. Seizing the opportunity, Il-yong asked if he could bring a few more adventurers into the special unit. He argued that the more people they had, the better his own chances of survival would be. The Lord smiled and agreed immediately, welcoming anyone he recommended. Il-yong's grin widened. He figured if they were going to be his party members, they should carry some of the weight too. Later that night, Il-yong went to see the adventurers he mentioned. One of them, an archer, stared at him in disbelief. He asked if it was true that Il-yong had recommended them for the special unit. Told them the reward for joining was 5 gold coins, with extra pay for good performance on the battlefield. The group quieted down, thinking it over. Il-yong added that he would be taking care of the most difficult task himself. He explained that he was in charge of sneaking in and taking down the necromancer. One of the adventurers asked why he was taking on something so dangerous. He told them it was because he was the only one who could. All they had to do was deal with the weakened undead and pull him out when he was done. He smiled, asking if it didn't sound pretty easy. Plus, he reminded them, they could all get a shot at the Millennium Elixir. The adventurers thought about it. 5 gold coins was a huge amount of money, and the offer was tempting. Il-yong smirked, telling them they should be thanking him for the opportunity. One of the men reluctantly agreed. One of the adventurers confirmed their mission was to rescue him. Il-yong told them his life was in their hands, and they should charge in as soon as the undead started to fall. The blonde adventurer joked that he'd do his best for the bonus pay, but he still seemed suspicious of Il-yong's real goal. Il-yong laughed. He said it proved that it wasn't friendship or hope that moved people's hearts, but money. With the deal made, he told them to meet him at the North Gate Wall and waved goodbye. With his team assembled, he knew it was time to get ready for the fight. The battle was set to begin at the fortress's North Gate Wall. From the top of the wall, the adventurers got their first look at the enemy. Below them was a sea of undead, stretching as far as they could see. The creatures were horrifying, their roars echoing up the wall. Il-yong and his new party stood ready, watching the horde get closer. Seeing the army up close, one of the adventurers started to panic. He whispered that they should run, regretting that he'd been tempted by the money. But his friend grabbed him, reminding him that deserting in battle meant they'd be executed on the spot. He pressed his blade against the man's neck, telling him to get it together. There was no room for cowardice now. On the main wall, a commander gave the signal. The archers drew their bows, preparing for the first volley. He gave the order to fire. A storm of arrows rained down on the approaching horde. The arrows found their marks, but the creatures barely slowed down. They just kept coming. The commander watched in frustration, realizing normal attacks weren't going to be enough to stop them. Seeing the normal arrows weren't working, a knight approached the commander. She told him they needed fire arrows to stop the horde. The commander immediately gave his permission. Order was given. The archers quickly lit their arrows, knocked them, and took aim at the sea of monsters below. With a single command, a storm of fire rained down on the undead army. The creatures were engulfed in flames, and their screams echoed across the battlefield. But even as they burned, more monsters pushed forward through the fire. The commander yelled at his men to keep firing without a moment's pause. The fire arrows found their marks, but it felt like trying to stop a flood with pebbles. For every monster that fell, another took its place. Just then, a soldier ran up to the commander with bad news. He yelled that the enemy's ladders were already reaching the top of the walls. The commander saw the creatures scrambling up the ladders. Without hesitation, he gave the order to pour boiling oil. His men tipped the massive pots. Streams of boiling oil cascaded down onto the climbing monsters, who fell back screaming as they were burned alive. But the boiling oil wasn't enough. A soldier looked down in shock as a horrifying creature appeared from the smoke. In the next moment, a guard ran to deliver the news. The enemy was already over the walls. The soldiers couldn't believe it. The creatures had just used the bodies of the fallen to climb right over the burning oil. As the monsters swarmed the walls, the commander screamed at his men to stop them. The fight was pure chaos. The soldiers desperately swung their swords, trying to hold back the tide of undead. Seeing how bad the situation was, the knight commander begged her lord to retreat to the inner fortress, but he refused. He told her that if the outer fortress fell, the inner one wouldn't last much longer anyway. He asked what his soldiers would think if they saw their lord running away. This castle had been in his family for generations, and he would rather share its fate. The knight commander understood, but insisted on staying by his side to protect him. As she watched the chaos unfold, her thoughts turned to one person. She wondered where the adventurer, Kim Il-young, could be. Below, the army of the dead was endless. A sea of monsters stretched as far as the eye could see. A truly hopeless sight. The fire arrows kept falling, but it was like throwing stones into an ocean. The undead horde just kept marching forward, completely unstoppable. Down on the battlefield, Kim Il-young moved through the chaos. He dodged the rain of fire arrows, annoyed by the heat, but he just smirked. This chaos reminded him of his old life. Back then, mercenaries were treated as disposable, because the fewer who survived, the less the employer had to pay. He'd been caught in showers of arrows from both allies and enemies countless times. This was the first time they were on fire, though. The arrows rained down on the undead horde. Of course, this time they weren't actually aiming for him. That just proved how well he'd hidden himself. As the soldiers on the wall fought desperately to hold the line, Il-young continued his mission alone. He cut through the horde of monsters, a blur they couldn't even see. A quick glance at the system showed he had less than 2 minutes of invisibility left. The skill was expensive, but worth it. The only problem was the sheer number of undead blocking his view. He scanned the endless sea of monsters, trying to find his targets. That's when he heard a strange sound. He knew instantly that was it, and there it was, right in the middle of the undead horde. A man in white robes was directing them. This had to be the necromancer. A grin spread across his face. After all that searching, he'd finally found him. The ground rumbled as the undead army charged forward. A massive wave of rotting flesh and green energy. But the humans weren't backing down. A warrior led the charge, yelling for his men to push the monsters back. The two armies crashed into each other. The warrior smashed through the zombies, determined to destroy every last one of them. The entire battlefield was a storm of fire and steel. It was pure chaos. The soldiers were getting overwhelmed. The undead just wouldn't stop coming. But through it all, Kim Il-young moved like a ghost, completely unnoticed. He scanned the battlefield, searching for the one controlling this mess. That's when he heard it, a strange chant in the distance. He knew he'd found his target. Turns out, the necromancer wasn't human. It was an orc. Il-young wondered how that was even possible, but it didn't matter. All he had to do was get rid of it. The orc stood there, surrounded by its army. Il-young measured the distance in his head, about 20 steps. He was ready to move. Seeing the orc, Kim Il-young decided to change his plan. A powerful red energy began to swirl around him. The necromancer was still lost in its chant. Il-young just smirked. He was only 5 steps away. He prepared to use a special power, calling on the strength of Lady Hildegrin's ancient water. With a wild grin, he shot forward, ready to end this. The orc looked surprised for a second, but then it just raised its hand. A wave of green energy erupted from its palm, stopping Il-young in his tracks. The green magic wrapped around his body, lifting him helplessly into the air. He was completely trapped. Down below, the necromancer just smiled, enjoying the moment. Meanwhile, the rest of the battlefield was pure chaos. The Lord, leading the human forces, was also caught in the necromancer's dark magic, struggling to break free. The orc necromancer just smiled, enjoying the show. Il-young was slammed back to the ground, pinned by the strange energy. He couldn't believe it. This felt like something out of a cursed fantasy story. The necromancer didn't give him a moment to breathe. It started gathering energy for another attack, but Il-yang fought against the pressure and trying to get back on his feet. Suddenly, a system message popped up. It was a warning. He was under a transformation spell and was losing his mind. Dark thoughts started flooding his head, telling him to kill and eat. His eyes began to glow. He gritted his teeth as his body started to change. He was turning into some kind of monster, and the only thing he could think about was eating human flesh. A flash of memory hit him. He remembered becoming this thing before, a monster that tore through people without a second thought. He remembered the fighting, the chaos, the monsters. Meanwhile, on the fortress walls, the situation was falling apart. A soldier gave the Lord a desperate report. Their southern forces were collapsing, civilians were still trapped, and the archers had run out of arrows. The Lord fought in the middle of the chaos, pushing back against the wave of monsters. But for every one he took down, another took its place. He cursed, seeing the endless tide of undead. He was fighting so hard that one of his men yelled for him to take cover inside the fortress. His soldiers were losing hope. They begged him to escape, admitting they were at their limit and couldn't fend off the monsters anymore. But he just kept fighting, even as the monsters began to swarm him. He refused to give up, striking down another one with a powerful blow. The undead horde swarmed him, their screams echoing across the battlefield. He fought back with everything he had, but the sheer number of them was just too much. A giant monster grabbed him from above. His soldiers screamed his name as the horde closed in, tearing at him from all sides. She urged him to regain consciousness. Worried that the adventurer, Kim Il-yang, might have already fallen in battle. The Lord looked out at his burning fortress, his heart sinking. He apologized in his mind to his grandfather and his father. He felt like a failure, thinking he couldn't protect someone named Illidel. But out on the battlefield, something was changing. A dark energy began to rise from a lone figure. It was Kim Il-yang, but he looked completely different, transformed into something monstrous, with glowing green eyes and dark power pouring out of him. The dark energy poured into his sword, making it glow with a strange blue light. His hand was cracking under the strain of the power. A system window appeared, announcing the skill. Clear mirror, still water. Down below, the entire undead army stopped and looked up in alarm. In a flash, a wave of pure blue energy exploded across the battlefield, swallowing the entire horde. The orc necromancer grunted, caught in the edge of the blast. The dark power began to fade from Il-yang's body as he slowly returned to normal. He took a sharp breath, sweat dripping down his face. He looked around the empty battlefield, stunned that he had actually survived. He finally understood what the skill did. The orc was furious, demanding to know how a human could possibly have won. But Il-yang just smirked, casually asking who said he knew the orc was even coming. The necromancer laughed, saying it could smell his greed. Il-yang just smiled back, saying his sword would work just fine. He raised his blade, telling the orc to get ready. His sword began to shine with a brilliant golden light. The orc screamed, shielding its eyes as the pure energy washed over it. The golden light erupted from his sword in a massive explosion. A system window announced the skill, Flash Explosion. The entire undead army screamed in agony as the pure energy burned them away. Story jumps back to one day before the battle. Kim Da-young was walking through the city streets when someone called out to him from behind. The man who stopped him wanted to have a quick chat. He knew Da-young's name. Da-young asked what was going on. The other man looked nervous, struggling to get his words out. Finally, Da-shaish, he got to the point. He asked if Da-young was seriously planning to go after the necromancer all by himself, warning him that it was a huge risk. Da-young just confirmed that he was willing to do it for the Millennium Water Dragon. The man admitted Da-young was capable. He then reminded him of a promise he'd made to help out once if things got bad. With that, he held out a glowing ring, offering it to him. Da-young was stunned. It was a rare artifact with flash magic. He playfully asked if the guy had stolen it. The man got angry, yelling that he was just taking back what was stolen from him first, and that's how he got the ring. The same one he was now using on the battlefield to finish this fight. The necromancer screamed as the golden light tore through him. Below, and the rest of his army was being wiped out in the blast. Il-yang fought through the last of the creatures, impressed by the ring's power. He thought to himself that a rare artifact was really something else, but the necromancer was still on its feet. Seeing that the boss monster was still conscious, Il-yang prepared to strike again. He tried to activate the ring again, but a system window popped up. The skill had a 24-hour cooldown. He realized he couldn't use it again right away. The necromancer saw its chance and screamed a curse. A blast of dark purple energy shot straight towards Il-yang, but Il-yang wasn't worried. He told the orc that trick wouldn't work anymore. He activated his clarity technique, unleashing a powerful blue strike that cut right through the dark magic. The necromancer stumbled back, screaming for help. In response, two huge orc warriors appeared behind it. Il-yang realized they must be bodyguards. He didn't hesitate for a second, calling them nothing more than meat shields. He charged straight through them. He wasn't about to let the necromancer escape. He leaped into the air, bringing his sword down with all his might. The necromancer could only scream as the blade came crashing down on him. The necromancer hit the ground hard, completely defeated. The remaining undead just stood there, their leader gone. The necromancer looked up, begging for its life. But Il-yang just stared back coldly and refused. He knew he couldn't miss this chance. With a final swing, a flash of blue energy finished the necromancer for good. As the necromancer turned to dust, a series of messages appeared. The system announced that the request was complete. He had leveled up twice and even earned a new title for taking down the enemy leader. Suddenly, a powerful golden energy exploded around him. A new skill, Hero's Ballad, had just activated. He smiled, remembering this feeling. It had been a while since Hero's Ballad had activated. Down below, the remaining undead started to scream. The golden energy washed over them, and they began to crumble into dust. Il-yang smirked, satisfied that taking down the necromancer was the right call. Down below, the soldiers stared in disbelief. They couldn't believe a single adventurer had actually done it. All across the fortress walls, the effect was immediate. Without their leader, the undead army began to crumble into dust. The creatures just fell apart right in front of the soldiers, who could only watch, completely stunned. The confusion on the front lines quickly turned into relief. They had actually won. One of the fighters smiled, saying she always knew Il-yang could do it. Sensing their chance, one of the warriors grabbed his massive sword, asking if it was their turn to charge. But a knight in blue armor held them back, signaling for everyone to wait. The moment of caution was lost in a wave of cheers. The soldiers celebrated wildly. They had stopped the invasion. A soldier rushed to the blonde knight, Orion, confirming that Il-yang had defeated the necromancer. But he immediately turned to his lord with an urgent warning. He explained that Il-yang was now completely surrounded by what was left of the enemy army. But the fight wasn't over. The necromancer's personal guard, a group of massive orcs, were still standing, and they were furious. Il-yang just smirked back at them. Being surrounded didn't seem to bother him at all. He knew why. A system window showed that his skill, Hero's Ballad, still had almost 10 minutes left on the clock. He tightened his grip on his sword. That was more than enough time. He raised his blade and shouted a challenge to the whole group. The orcs just growled, hesitating. So Il-yang decided he wouldn't wait for them. He charged straight into the horde. Since the orcs wouldn't move, Il-yang decided he would go first. He brought his sword down, and a massive pillar of light erupted from the ground. He moved like a blur, a flash of blue light from his sword. The first orc didn't even have time to react before it was cut down. He landed, his body still glowing with the golden energy from his skill. He glanced back at the stunned creatures and told them it was way too early to be surprised. He parried another attack with ease. The orcs could only watch in terror as their friends were taken down one by one. The creatures started to panic. One of them yelled to the others that the human sword was just too fast, asking if they were scared. Hearing their fear only seemed to encourage him. He yelled for them to stop hesitating and come at him all at once. Without waiting for an answer, he dove right back into the fight. He became a storm of attacks, cutting through the horde with ease. The system window confirmed it. Time ran out, but a smirk spread across his face. He didn't seem to have an answer, and he didn't seem to care. One of the orcs roared, challenging the human to face them. The entire horde looked ready to charge. Il-yang didn't hesitate. He accepted their challenge and decided to go in first. He moved like lightning, a whirlwind of blue and gold energy. Orcs were torn apart before they could even lift their weapons. His movements were so fast, they were impossible to track. For anyone without strengthened inner energy, their eyes couldn't even follow his sword. He was just a blur of destruction. The power boost was only temporary for now, but if he made it through this fight, that incredible speed could become a permanent part of his stats. But that was a big if. He had to survive first. The remaining orcs stared in horror, finally realizing just how dangerous this one human really was. He moved through the orcs relentlessly. His only goal was to reduce their numbers, one by one, before they could overwhelm him. He paused his attack, realizing he needed to break their spirit. He looked at the remaining orcs and mocked them, saying they weren't even worth his time. The taunt worked perfectly. The orcs roared back in pure rage. The entire horde began kicking up a massive dust storm, finally ready to charge. Just as they moved, a system window popped up in front of Il-yang. His skill, Hero's Anthem, had just ended. The golden energy around him vanished. He stood there, completely depowered, and thought that this all felt strangely familiar. Then it hit him. The orcs had no idea his power-up was gone. He decided to press his advantage, yelling at them for being cowards. The orc leader snarled back, warning him that this victory meant nothing. The Demon King was angry now. The orc explained that soon, powerful beings would rise from the demon realm to make all humans suffer. But the threat was completely lost on Il-yang. He had absolutely no idea who this Demon King was. The orc couldn't believe it, demanding to know how anyone could be ignorant of the Demon King. Il-yang just casually asked if he was supposed to know, explaining that he was new around here. His response only made the orc angrier. The orc stared, trying to understand how a newcomer could be so powerful. Then it clicked. He finally understood the Demon King's plan to get rid of adventurers like him. Il-yang just looked back, completely confused about what he was talking about. He declared that creatures like Il-yang should never be allowed to live. They were a direct threat to the Demon King's greatness. The orc leader turned to his brethren, screaming that they had to take this man down, even if it cost them their lives. The entire horde roared in agreement, ready for a final battle. Il-yang watched them, feeling the atmosphere change completely. He knew they were building up their morale for one last, desperate charge. He knew exactly what was coming. Once their war cries stopped, a massive death charge would begin. Looking at the sea of enemies, he had to admit it. He was screwed. This was a bit too much, even for him. The orc's screams reached a fever pitch. Their rage was boiling over, and they were finally ready to charge. He tightened his grip on his sword, deciding to go all out, no matter the cost. A purple light flashed from the ring on his finger. Suddenly, a massive wave of energy exploded from his sword. He looked just as surprised as anyone. The blast slammed into the front line of the orcs, sending them flying. He couldn't believe the power he had just unleashed, but he wasn't alone anymore. From behind him, a group of adventurers charged into the fight. The red-haired woman, Manhwa led the way, shouting orders to her team. Hearing the reinforcements, Il-yang's expression hardened. One of the fighters yelled out that his last move was a game-changer. The tide of the battle was finally turning. One of the adventurers, a woman with long black hair, began to cast a spell. She called upon the spirit of the earth, gathering energy around her. Meanwhile, Il-yang activated his own skill, Enchant Weapon. He smirked, telling the orcs it was time for the tables to turn. The team's archer fired 2 glowing arrows straight into the charging horde. Il-yang's newly enchanted blade cut through the orcs before they even knew what was happening. They were being taken down one by one. Then, Manhwa stepped forward, her staff glowing with red energy. She unleashed a skill called Song of Sowing Seeds. Golden vines of light erupted from the ground, spreading across the battlefield. The vines wrapped around the orcs, shocking them and holding them completely still. They were trapped, with the orcs unable to move. The team's armored tank charged forward. He yelled that he was about to hit them like an 8-ton truck, ready to smash right through their line. The armored warrior rushed past Il-yang, yelling at him to get moving so they could end this quickly. He unleashed a skill called Cross Slash, bringing his weapon down with incredible force. As the team kept fighting, Manhwa stepped forward. She announced that she would take care of the rest. A massive wave of red energy erupted from her, tearing right through the remaining orcs. Il-yang watched the chaos with a smirk. He thought to himself that this wasn't a fight anymore. It was a massacre. Suddenly, cheers erupted from the city walls. The people watching had realized the battle was won. The crowd started chanting the name of the adventurer group, the Constellation Brigade. They celebrated their return. The team walked through the city gates as heroes. The crowd roared, chanting their name over and over, calling them the heroes of Illidel. Manhwa laughed nervously, a little overwhelmed by the welcome. The man behind her looked less than thrilled. A system window popped up. It was from Il-yang. He was just annoyed. He couldn't believe they were celebrating these guys when he'd done all the real fighting. A system window popped up. It was from someone called the Mother of Heroes, asking how he felt. He just smirked and told the system he liked it, so he wanted more rewards. The system seemed disappointed by his attitude, but Il-yang didn't care. He just wanted to know if there was any hero out there who didn't enjoy the perks. He grinned, shamelessly admitting that yes, he was just in it for the rewards. A woman named Kim Da-young walked up to Il-yang and demanded her artifact back. She accused him of caring more about the ring than about saving her. He looked down at it and casually mentioned how powerful the stolen artifact was. She was furious that he called her a thief in front of everyone. Il-yang just smirked. He pointed out that her stealing it was what saved the city. He even joked that she'd probably be called a righteous thief for it. She was not amused. One of the other adventurers walked over, asking if they were having a lover's fight. Kim Da-young quickly shut him down, saying it was nothing. She told him again to give it back, but Il-yang had other plans. He asked if she'd be willing to sell it, promising to buy it with the rewards he was about to get. She just held out her hand, waiting. Il-yang argued that he needed something to protect himself, especially with all the rewards he was about to get. But he could tell just by looking at her, she wasn't backing down. One of the other adventurers stepped in, looking serious. He pointed out that taking down an orc horde was something even a D rank would struggle with. He told Il-yang that no matter how you looked at it, F rank just didn't fit him. Il-yang just smiled and called it a strange buff, a kind of luck. He listed off all his advantages, an unique class, a rare artifact, and even the ability to use skills without mana. The other adventurer complained that it was completely unfair for one person to have it all. Kim Da-young was even more annoyed, snapping at Il-yang for not even pretending to be humble. Il-yang's expression changed. He told them it wasn't unfair. This was his reward for 7 years of hardship. A memory of a small girl flashed in his mind. He explained that back then, he couldn't tell good fortune from bad, but now he knew for sure. He thought back to meeting the girl, Hildegren. He said out loud that making a contract with her was definitely good fortune. A system message from the Mother of Heroes appeared, telling him he should at least be grateful. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the crowd, ordering everyone to open a path. The townspeople quickly hurried to clear a way. 3 knights in heavy armor marched through the opening. Their leader looked around, confused by what he was seeing. The knight captain looked over the scene, totally confused. He couldn't understand what had happened here. Then, his expression changed as he recognized 2 people in the crowd. He muttered their names, the adventurer, Kim Il-yang, and Lady Oriana. Before the knights could say anything else, Lady Oriana started running right towards Il-yang, calling out his name. Her eyes were sparkling with respect as she told him he was truly amazing. Then, she just threw her arms around him in a hug. Il-yang froze, caught completely off guard, while the other adventurers stared in disbelief. Sometime later, the group was brought to the main castle. As they walked through the grand hall, Manhwa immediately started messing with Il-yang. She teased that he must have enjoyed the hug, pointing out that he couldn't wipe the smile off his face. She leaned in with a sly look, reminding him that by Earth standards, Oriana was still underage. She called the whole thing pretty scandalous. She then threatened to spread rumors back on Earth, asking what would happen if she told everyone at school that he was embracing a 16-year-old. That made Il-yang panic. He yelled for her to stop, saying his reputation was already terrible. He tried to argue that she was the one who hugged him, but the system chimed in, saying the mother of heroes doubted his story, as he tried to explain that Oriana was considered an adult. Here, Manhwa burst out laughing, admitting it was just too fun to tease him. Il-yang gritted his teeth, annoyed by her constant teasing. Manhwa just smiled and told him he was going to be famous when he got back to Earth. He didn't understand. This world didn't have phones or social media, so how could word even get out? She explained that rumors travel, and a story this big would definitely make it back to Earth. Another adventurer joined in, reminding him that everyone on the castle walls saw what he did. They watched him take down the sorcerer and fight off dozens of orcs all by himself. Il-yang realized all this attention was going to be a huge hassle. He even thought about avoiding Earth for a while, but then a grin spread across his face. He could worry about that later. Right now, it was time to collect his rewards. As the adventurers walked into the throne room, the knights lining the hall started whispering. They couldn't believe someone so young could be so powerful, and they knew it was important to keep him on their side. When his name was called out, Il-yang immediately got nervous, worried that Oriana was about to rush over and hug him again. But the knight commander spoke up, reminding the young lady to maintain her dignity during the formal occasion. Oriana lightly teased the commander, saying he was starting to sound just like her nagging butler. Persia just cleared his throat and replied that someone had to do it. With that settled, Oriana addressed the group from her throne, asking the adventurers to step forward. She then ordered Knight Commander Persia to bring her the item she had prepared. A large, ornate wooden chest was brought out and placed before them. The chest was opened, and it was overflowing with gold coins. All the adventurers stared in disbelief. They immediately started celebrating. One of them excitedly talked about buying a full set of rare chainmail armor, saying it would be enough to take on a D-rank dungeon. They couldn't believe how much they were getting, already talking about doing it all over again. But Il-yang just watched them, silent. Soon, the chest was completely empty. Il-yang thought about the huge amount of money she'd just given away. He realized that while her family was rich, this was about more than money. She was buying back her people's trust, and with a ruler like that, he knew her land would continue to do well. That's when Oriana's voice cut through the room. She called for adventurer Kim Il-yang to step forward. The knight commander, Persia, held out a folded piece of clothing. He explained that this was a personal token of appreciation from Oriana. Il-yang was confused. This wasn't gold. Oriana explained that it was a family heirloom, a robe her grandfather wore into battle, and she hoped it would protect him. A system window popped up, identifying it as the Robe of Twilight, a rare grade item with high durability and special effects that could resist temperature and absorb damage. Il-yang thanked Lady Oriana and promised to put the robe to good use. He bluntly added that it smelled a bit musty and felt itchy, but was still a good piece of gear. Oriana was just glad he liked it and told him she had one more personal request. She asked if he would accept the title of honorary knight. Il-yang was completely caught off guard by the sudden offer. He quickly realized it was a sweet deal, all the rights of a knight with none of the duties. He grinned and said he'd be grateful to accept. Raising her hand, Oriana formally granted him the title, calling him the most honorable person she had ever met. She then presented him with a brooch to certify his new status as an honorary knight, hoping he would wear it with pride. Oriana apologized for keeping him so long, knowing adventurers are always busy. Il-yang replied that everyone's time is valuable, not just his. He thanked her again and promised that his city, Illidel, would always stand by her side. He told her it was his pleasure and then turned to leave. He walked down the long hall, heading for the exit. As he walked away, Oriana watched him go. She thought to herself that they would meet again, her knight. He sat down to absorb its power, but the 1,000 He sat down to absorb its power, but the effect was immediate and much harsher than he expected. A wave of energy started to build up inside him, but this was more than he could handle. The power was becoming too much. He grunted in pain as dark energy poured from his eyes. He'd made a huge mistake. This herb was too powerful for his current body. Just as he was about to be overwhelmed, his sword began to glow. A system message appeared. Spirit vision was activated. He refused to let some simple herb be the end of him. He gritted his teeth, determined to survive this. He'd been through this before, back in his old world. He focused, carefully guiding the wild energy through his body, bit by bit. He pushed through the pain, forcing his body to absorb every last drop of the herb's power. Then, a system message popped up. It announced the full opening of something called the Underworld Gate. His internal energy stat started shooting up like crazy. When it was over, he was bleeding, but a confident grin spread across his face. He'd done it. Meanwhile, at the Adventurer Industry Promotion Agency, things were not going so well. Inside, a man was giving a grim report. He announced that Korea had lost a territory, and their influence in Pangaea would drop because of it. The director at the head of the table looked grave. He immediately asked his head of information analysis for a full report on the lost territory. The analyst delivered the news. The territory they'd lost was media. Another official seemed relieved. He pointed out that at least it wasn't Ildel, their city for beginners. Losing that would have been a total disaster. The director wanted to know how the other countries were doing. The analyst explained that their neighbors had also lost a lot of territory. Turns out, nobody was prepared for a monster wave that big. He broke down the numbers. The United States lost 1 territory, while Japan and China lost 2 each. But the strange thing was that both of China's lost territories were their only cities for beginners. The officials at the table were stunned. The director realized that China only had 2 beginner cities to start with. This meant all their new adventurers now had nowhere to go. That's when one of the officials saw the angle. A small smile appeared on his face as he realized the Chinese adventurers would have to come to their city, Ildel. Looking at the map, it was obvious. Ildel was the closest place for them to go. The official called it a huge opportunity. They could charge the foreign adventurers as much tax as they wanted. The Pangea Guide rules were clear. If you wanted to hunt in a territory you didn't own, you had to pay a huge tax. The director knew this was their chance to make Ildel successful again, then told a manager named Kim to handle the new tax plan. The director argued it was time for their department to be promoted to a full ministry. He was tired of always being second best. He remembered the adventurer who saved Ildel was also a Ronin class, the one who took down the Dark Orcs in the Dungeon of Proof. His subordinate added that the internet was buzzing about another patriotic adventurer who was following the Princess Knight. The director listened carefully, then asked what kind of person this Ronin adventurer was. Miles away, Il-Yang was walking through the city when he got a weird feeling. He wondered who was talking about him. He turned around and saw Kim Da-young. He looked exhausted, blaming her for constantly pushing him to raise his level. He decided to check his status. He was level 17, and most of his stats seemed normal, but his inner strength was way too high, at a level that should have taken 15 more level ups to reach. He realized it was all because of the Millennium Shell Turtle. If that one item could boost him this much, he started wondering what a 10,000-year one could do. He thought about the rich sex back in his old world, who grew up eating rare herbs. The huge gap between them and him was exactly why he learned to steal instead of run. Putting those thoughts aside, he knew he needed to level up fast to balance his stats. He decided to pull up his skill window. The system displayed his list of skills. These weren't game abilities, but the deadly martial arts he had mastered over years of fighting for his life. Just then, Il-Yang spotted some familiar faces. He called out to them, asking where they were going. The large warrior with Honghua Yan explained they were heading to the gate to get power leveled in Adel territory. He then asked Il-Yang if he wanted to join them, power leveling. Il-Yang was also on his way to the gate, but he paused. He thought about how in a game, a high-level player would just carry the low-level ones. Honghua Yan explained that her brother was leading the party and invited him again. Il-Yang admitted they had a bad reputation for being E-grades, since they seemed so skilled. Il-Yang admitted they had a bad reputation. When she asked if they were thieves, he just nervously insisted that their skill was all that mattered. Honghua Yan didn't give up. She offered to take him into her own family if the rumors about his party became a problem. She was sure her special ability could help him improve quickly, but Il-Yang just brushed it off, thinking she should focus on someone else. She finally let it go, telling him to do as he pleased. She said she was off to get power leveled by her brother and warned him not to get overconfident. With a playful smile, she asked if she really seemed like a pushover. With that, she turned to leave with her brother, calling out that she would return much stronger. As he watched them go, Il-Yang thought about how they'd already helped him twice. He realized their relationship was becoming more than just a casual one. With them gone, he stood alone in the street. A grin spread across his face. It was time to head back to Earth. He was back on Earth, in the modern world he'd left behind. He was finally in his own place. His heart was pounding, but it wasn't from a fight. Turns out, it was just anxiety. After years of constant battle, peace felt strange. He flopped onto the couch. This was his safe place, perfect for someone who just wanted to be left alone. He took a deep breath and smiled. Even the damp, musty smell of his small apartment felt like home. He grabbed the remote and turned on the news to catch up on what he'd missed. The first thing he heard was a big story. A woman named Lee Hani from the Ilsung clan had just applied for S-rank promotion. The anchor explained that if she passed, she would become only the 9th S-rank adventurer in all of Korea. Il-Yang watched the news report. He thought to himself that Lee Hani had it all: skills, money, and looks. He let out a little laugh. He was Kim Il-Yang, a descendant of a famous family, but he had absolutely nothing to his name. A smirk crossed his face as he remembered turning down Honghua Yuan's offer. To him, she was like a goddess offering a handshake, and he'd been the one to reject it. Just then, his phone buzzed and lit up, snapping him out of his thoughts. He looked at the screen and his eyes widened. A deposit of over 26 million won had just hit his account. He realized that being an adventurer really did pay well. Right after that, another notification popped up. It was a message from Soon Chang. He opened the chat and saw a flood of messages. Soon Chang had been trying to reach him for days, asking when he was coming back, and if the crazy rumors about him were true. The messages got more and more desperate, begging him to just pick up the phone. Il-Yang stared at the messages, his expression serious. He realized he should have known his friend would be worried sick. He finally sent a reply, just 2 words. With that, the unique class user, Kim Il-young, was ready to make his move. He stared at his phone, his mind made up. It was time to get a promotion, so he headed straight for the Adventurers Association. When he got there, Soon Chong was waiting for him, and he was not happy. He yelled at Il-young not to let his success go to his head. Il-young just apologized, saying he'd been busy, but Soon Chong didn't buy it. He asked if Il-young was really too busy to even send a text, demanding to know if he understood what was going on. Il-young calmly told him he knew all about the coordinated attacks from different groups. That was exactly why he'd been holding back. Soon, Chang was confused and asked why he wanted to meet here of all places. Il-young told him plainly he was here for a promotion. His friend was shocked, since it hadn't been long since he'd returned from Pangea. Instead of explaining, Il-young just activated his device, ready to pull up his status window. Soon, Chang stared at the status window in disbelief. It showed that Kim Il-young was already level 17, with a unique class called Ronin. He couldn't understand how it was possible. Il-young just smiled, telling him that for a unique class user, this kind of performance was normal. Soon, Chang found his friend's attitude incredibly annoying. Soon, Chang demanded to know where he'd been all this time. Il-young calmly explained he was in a place where sword and wind currents swirled around. His friend was confused, asking if he was talking about some kind of fantasy world from a novel. With a small smile, Il-young simply confirmed that his friend's guess was true. Soon, Chang was still trying to wrap his head around it. He muttered that at this rate, Il-young would reach E rank in no time. Then he asked what his current rank was. Il-young casually told him he was A rank. Soon, Chang's jaw dropped. He was completely stunned. A moment later, a grin spread across Soon Chang's face. He started copying Il-young's calm attitude, teasing him not to make the martial arts world look bad, and joking that he felt like cutting him. That was the last straw for Il-young. He snapped, yelling at his friend to just shut up. Soon Chang remembered something Il-young had said before. When he'd asked how long he could hold out, Il-young answered without a second thought that he could last a long time. He should have realized right then what that really meant. As they walked, Soon Chang told his friend to stop being a baby. He said he was doing well, but his attitude was getting really irritating. Soon Chang admitted that even to an A-rank adventurer like him, Il-young was completely overpowered. He said not even Director Lee Hani had progressed this fast. With that settled, he told Il-young it was time to go take the promotion exam. They arrived at what looked like the Adventurers Association. The place was busy, filled with people in suits. Il-young and Soon Chang walked inside, taking in the scene. Right away, people in the lobby started to notice them. Someone pointed, recognizing the A-rank adventurer, Park Soon Chang. The whispers spread quickly. Another person chimed in, calling him the unparalleled mage. Il-young just looked at his friend, completely annoyed, but Soon Chang was loving the attention, smugly telling Il-young that he wasn't the one who made up that cool nickname. A man in a suit came over, immediately recognizing Soon Chang. He asked what brought such a famous adventurer to the association. Soon Chang just grinned and pointed to Il-young, explaining that his friend was there for a promotion. The employee immediately promised to help them. The man smiled and led them through the lobby, letting them skip any lines. Il-young watched them go. He couldn't help but think that having the unparalleled mage for a friend was making this whole process way too easy. The employee at the desk then called out for Kim Il-young, waving him over. The man explained the first step of the exam. Il-young had to show his full information window using his bracelet. Il-young activated his bracelet, and his status window appeared. It showed his name, his level, and his unique class, Ronin. The examiner's eyes went wide. He stared at the word Ronin and asked in disbelief if Il-young was the famous adventurer known as the savior of Illidel. Conversation had drawn attention. Other adventurers in the lobby started whispering, recognizing him as the famous Ronin. They couldn't believe he was already here for a promotion. Il-young was shocked that they knew him. But then he remembered. The rumors were spreading like wildfire. Turns out, his story had already hit the internet. Videos were popping up about the F-rank adventurer who became a legend. The comment section was a total mess. Some people were amazed, but most called it a lie, refusing to believe F-rank could take on dozens of orcs. The thing is, large clans had information networks spread all over Pangea, but for regular adventurers, getting the real story was almost impossible. That's because the god of Earth rejected modern technology. With no internet or social media in Pangea, all they had were rumors. The examiner smirked, asking if he was really the famous savior of Illidel. Il-young gritted his teeth, annoyed by the ridiculous nickname. He looked back at the status window. It showed Il-young was level 17 with the Ronin class, but the examiner was stunned by his stats, questioning how his strength could be so insanely high for his level. The examiner was floored. He asked how a level 17 could possibly have 82 total stat points. It just didn't make any sense. The examiner thought out loud, calculating that based on stats alone, Il-young was somewhere between D and C rank. The examiner, who was an A-class adventurer himself, called Il-young a monster. He warned him not to get a big head and start ignoring people just because he was doing well. He kept teasing, joking that Il-young seemed like the type to pretend he didn't know you if things went south. The teasing stopped. It was time for the official results. The examiner prepared. The announcement sent a shockwave through the lobby. Everyone was stunned. Jumping 2 ranks at once was unheard of. The other adventurers started whispering among themselves, questioning if something like that was even possible. They'd never seen anything like it. The examiner cut through the noise. He explained that while it was unusual, there was no rule against it. He said the judgment was based on level, stats, and performance. Il-yong's stats and level had already blown past the standard requirements, but that wasn't all. The examiner added that Il-yong had also proven himself in 2 major incidents. He brought up the time Il-yong took down the Dark Orc and saved a fellow adventurer. Then he mentioned the other incident where he saved the town of Ildel. With all that taken into account, he said, they decided that D rank was the perfect fit for him. Il-yong just thanked him. That's when Park Soon-chang, another adventurer, walked up with a grin. He pointed out that getting to D rank just days after awakening meant Il-yong had just broken Li Han's famous record. Il-yong didn't look impressed. As they walked outside, Park Soon-chang brought up the tax exemptions for A-rank adventurers. He asked if Il-yong was actually aiming for the immunity privileges of a S-rank. Il-yong just asked what was wrong with that. Park thought about it for a second. With a unique class and cheat-like abilities, he realized it might actually be possible. Il-yong just smirked, completely confident. That's when Park got all clingy, grabbing Il-yong's arm. He begged him not to forget their friendship when he got famous. Il-yong just looked annoyed, wishing he could pretend he didn't know the guy. But someone was watching them from an elevator. Her eyes were fixed on them as the doors slid shut. A moment later, she stepped out and started following them. She caught up and blocked their path. Park looked surprised, but she was staring right at Il-yong. She mentioned the Chuyun Club, and Il-yong immediately told her not to call him by some ridiculous nickname. The woman just smirked. She leaned in and asked how he knew Li Han. Park's jaw just about hit the floor. Her expression turned serious. She crossed her arms and asked if he was there for a promotion test, just like she was. Il-yong tried to get Park to leave, but his friend was frozen in place. He just stared at the woman who had blocked their path. She yelled after him, furious that he was just walking away. She complained about some trouble he'd caused her before, but Il-yong didn't even look back. He just told her he didn't care. She changed her tone and tried to recruit him. She asked if he was still a F-rank adventurer, promising that if he joined her clan, all his past troubles would be forgotten. Il-yong cut her off. He told her he was a D-rank adventurer now, so she'd have to make a better offer. The woman was stunned, saying it hadn't been long since his last test. He held up a D-rank medal as proof. There was no arguing with that. He smirked, saying he just grows a little faster than most people. He then reminded her that she was the one who broke a record, implying it was time for her to up her game. She was speechless. None of this made any sense to her. Il-yong spelled it out for her. He knew she had to swallow her pride to even approach him, but things had changed. He told her he was now a returnee with a growth potential that was way beyond hers. She was shaking with anger. She demanded to know what kind of person he even was. Il-yong just grinned back at her. She yelled at him to stop copying her and demanded to know what his special ability was. He just turned the question right back around, asking what her special ability was. She couldn't answer. Defeated, she suggested they just agree not to ask each other. She thought to herself that you can't trust what you see on TV. To her, famous adventurers like Li Han were all about faking an image. But just then, people on the street started shouting. Turns out, someone had spotted Li Han, the famous princess knight. Everyone started looking around, trying to get a glimpse of her. A moment later, a mob of fans rushed past them, screaming for an autograph. The whole street was focused on Li Han. The woman used the distraction to make her exit. As she got into her car, she decided this wasn't over. She would get him one way or another. As the car drove away, Il-yong thought to himself that he'd never met a truly scary person who relied on empty threats. Just then, his friend Park Soon-chang ran up to him, completely stunned. He asked how Il-yong knew Li Han and couldn't believe he'd just ignored her handshake. He was furious. He called Il-yong a moron, yelling that when a knight princess offers her hand, you're supposed to kneel and grab it. He explained that Li Han is basically a real-life princess, the granddaughter of the Il-sung clan's leader. By rejecting her, Il-yong had made a huge mistake. Il-yong cut him off. He told Soon-chang to think about it. A girl like Li Han is constantly pampered. By acting differently, he'd left a strong impression. Soon-chang was in disbelief, calling it a ridiculous bad boy act. Il-yong had heard enough and just told him to shut up. He remembered the look in her eyes. It was a look that assumed he would inevitably join the Il-sung clan, and he hated it. But for a second, he started to wonder. Maybe this whole bad boy thing wasn't as effective as he thought. Sometime later, they all arrived at the dungeon entrance. The party he was with stared at him, completely surprised by his new gear. One of them asked if he'd spent all his money the second he got it. Il-yong just laughed, saying that safety was his top priority. Then, he proudly showed them his new adventurer badge. They were stunned. One of them couldn't believe it, complaining that Il-yong was already a higher rank, even though he'd been an adventurer for half a year longer. The archer was having a hard time processing it, calling it a total reality shock. Il-yong ignored them and asked about the dungeon. The archer explained it was a D-class dungeon filled with ratmen, and it was the most difficult one in the area. Il-yong asked if there were any traps or other dangers. The archer said the ratmen weren't smart enough for that, but there was one strange thing about this place. He revealed that this dungeon had never been cleared. Another adventurer added that the first party to clear a dungeon gets to take all the rewards for themselves. Il-yong wanted to know the exact clearing condition for the dungeon. The archer explained that it was used usually simple: kill all the monsters or the boss. But he said dozens of parties had tried that here, and the dungeon was never cleared, which he found really strange. Il-yang thought about that. If parties were wiping out everything and still not clearing it, one of the men mentioned that he'd run. One of the men mentioned that he'd run into some Chinese adventurers earlier, wondering why they were in the area. His companion had heard a rumor that they'd already cleared out all the beginner dungeons, probably making a fortune. The first man agreed they were crafty. He said it would be great if their own party could hit a jackpot too, since they'd already had a taste of rare items. His friend grinned, joking that they were so used to monastones now that they couldn't live without them. The other guy groaned, telling him not to add more pressure. But then, he suddenly held up a hand. He told everyone to stop, saying he could sense footsteps approaching. The archer figured the monsters must have felt the vibrations through the ground. He knew that dungeon creatures were extremely sensitive to intruders. One of the fighters drew her weapon. Her eyes narrowed. She knew what was coming. It was rats, and she was right. From the darkness ahead, a horde of them appeared, their squeals echoing through the cave. One of the adventurers asked what the plan was. The woman just stared ahead, weighing their options. But she didn't need a plan. She yelled that they would just wipe them all out and charge straight into the horde. At the same time, the archer let an arrow fly. It shot forward, glowing with a bright blue energy. The arrow hit its mark, exploding on impact and taking out one of the rat men instantly. The archer smiled, commenting that a rare grade bow really was different, but taking out one of them didn't matter. An entire wave of the creatures charged forward, the red eyes glowing in the dark. The archer fired again, sending another powerful shot, spinning right into the heart of the swarm. The arrow slammed into the group, but it didn't slow them down. The entire horde just kept coming, a wave of claws and teeth. But the archer wasn't looking at the monsters. His eyes were wide, shocked by how fast someone else was moving. The party leader yelled for everyone to get ready. The fight was on, but Il-yang didn't need to prepare. He was already moving. He shot past his teammates like a blur. Before they could even react, he was already on the front line, his sword cutting through the first ratman. He didn't stop, flowing from one target to the next without a single wasted movement. The look on his face was pure focus. This was where he felt most alive. He plunged straight into the middle of the horde, a whirlwind of steel cutting down everything around him. He could feel the power surging through him. He knew his inner strength wouldn't run out. He was strong enough to wipe them all out. The archer watched from a distance, completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, thinking that the kid had turned into a complete monster. The others weren't just shocked. They were annoyed. One of them complained that he needed to slow down because he was making them feel useless. But that feeling didn't last. Inspired by the charge, the spearmen yelled for everyone to get going. So they pushed forward, heading into the darkness of the cave. It didn't take long. Soon, the ground was covered with the bodies of the ratmen. One of his teammates kicked a monster's corpse, wondering if D-class monsters were always this weak, or if it just seemed that way because Il-yang was so strong. The spearmen agreed, finding it strange that there were so few enemies. But as they talked, Il-yang's sword began to glow. It was trying to show him something. Il-yang felt his sword begin to vibrate. Something was definitely happening. A system message popped up, confirming it. The Mother of Heroes was telling him his sword wanted to show him something. He didn't hesitate. He decided to trust the sword and follow wherever it led. The sword pulled him toward what looked like a dead end, just a solid rock wall. He reached out and touched the stone, wondering if there was something hidden inside. As soon as he pushed, the rock crumbled. This wall wasn't natural. It was way too weak. One of his teammates walked over, asking what on earth he was doing. Il-yang just told him he'd found something strange. The spearman wasn't convinced. He shot back that the only strange thing was Il-yang digging into a random wall like a crazy person. Il-yang knew his sword was right. There had to be something behind this wall. He slammed the hilt into the rock, determined to break through. The stone shattered easily, just like he thought it would. He'd broken through, revealing a dark tunnel behind the fake wall. Inside, the ground was covered in what looked like dirty nests. A grin spread across his face. He finally understood. This was where the rats were hiding, which explained why the dungeon felt so empty. Il-yang turned to one of his teammates, Otae-suk. He told him to gather up all their torches, oil, and anything else that would burn well. Otae-suk agreed, but he was confused. He asked why they were suddenly gathering all of that stuff. Il-yang explained that rats are naturally terrified of things like fire. Then he looked back at the dark tunnel he'd just opened. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a rat hole. Otae-suk couldn't believe it. He asked how something so huge could possibly be a rat hole. Il-yang just smirked. He was absolutely sure of it. They gathered everything that could burn and started a fire right at the entrance of the tunnel. The smoke began to pour inside. His teammates were suspicious. One of them asked what was supposed to come out, while another wondered if this was just a waste of time. Il-yang just told them to be patient. The archer watched the smoke, thinking to himself, if Il-yang was right, this would explain why no one had ever managed to clear this dungeon before. For Il-yang, this was a familiar feeling. It reminded him of his old life, back when he used this exact same trick to hunt rats for food. He remembered how the smoke would fill up the holes, forcing the rats to run out into the open. Back then, the ground would turn black with a sea of fleeing rats. He knew it was only a matter of time before something happened here too. And just like that, a message popped up. The system was responding. His plan had worked. A new request called Peeping Hole appeared. The goal was to take down 100 ratmen and a single plague rat. The reward was a nice chunk of experience points. One of the teammates stared at the quest window in disbelief. He couldn't believe how many enemies they had to face all at once. He grabbed his head, absolutely sure they were all going to die. That's when the ground started to shake violently. The teammates looked around, completely confused about what was happening. But Il-yong wasn't scared at all. He drew his sword and calmly told everyone to get ready to fight. The spearmen turned on him, screaming and demanding to know what he had done. Il-yong just grinned. This was exactly what he had planned. From deep inside the tunnel, a horrible squealing sound echoed out. The first ratman that charged out was taken down instantly. A massive swarm of them poured out of the darkness. Il-yong looked thrilled, shouting that he was ready to take them all on. He dove straight into the horde, cutting through the ratmen like they were nothing. He was having the time of his life. The sheer number of them was insane, but he moved so fast they couldn't even touch him. His teammates, on the other hand, were completely panicked. The spearman screamed that he was tired of getting caught in danger because of the new guy. Another teammate agreed, yelling that following Il-yong felt like a death sentence. But the ratmen just kept coming, screeching as they charged forward. The archer unleashed a multi-shot, taking one of the monsters down instantly. He grinned, impressed with how good his equipment was. Meanwhile, the team's healer began to cast a spell, calling on divine power. A bright light flared as she finished the healing spell. The spearman was starting to sweat. He looked out at the swarm and muttered that there was no end to them. The archer was in trouble too, yelling that he was running out of arrows. Down below, another teammate was getting completely overrun. Il-yong shouted in frustration. The quest required them to take down 100 D-rank monsters. A quick look at the system showed they were only a third of the way there. The spearman tried to lighten the mood, promising to buy everyone honey wine if they survived. Il-yong just yelled back, asking if he was serious when they were in this much danger. But the spearman just insisted it would be enough. Il-yong couldn't believe it, turning his attention back to the horde of monsters closing in. Done with the argument, Il-yong got serious. He told them they needed to thin the enemy's numbers fast. That's when he spotted it, the boss monster. He didn't hesitate. He unleashed his wind-cutting sword technique, sending a bright blue arc of energy right at the creature. The boss monster was fast, but Il-yong was faster. He met its attack head-on, his blade clashing against its claws with a loud crack. Il-yong gritted his teeth. He'd managed to block the attack, but just barely. He was furious. A lowly ratman had actually tried to ambush him. He swung his sword, aiming to cut the creature down in one move, but the ratman raised its shield, and Il-yong's blade slammed into it with a loud clang. He couldn't believe it. The monster had actually blocked his attack. It was pushed back, but it wasn't down. Done with the sword, he drove his fist straight into the creature's face. A system message popped up. His kill count was now at 63. They were getting closer. Meanwhile, the spearman was grinning. He joked that if they kept this up, he might actually have to buy that honey wine. His teammate just shot back that they had to survive first. Suddenly, a loud screech echoed through the cave. The spearman looked around, panicked, wondering what was happening. Il-yong was calm. He told them it was probably the plague rat. The spearman got angry, complaining that he'd finished off the other rats for nothing. But before his teammate could tell him to be quiet, another piercing screech filled the air. They finally saw it, a giant rat monster, clutching its head like it was in terrible pain. Il-yong watched it carefully, trying to figure out what it was doing. The plague rat just stood there, covered in filth and trembling. It wasn't attacking. It was just twitching. The plague rat stopped twitching and raised its pack, spewing a filthy yellow mist that rolled out around them. Backed by the whole swarm, it finally looked like a real boss, ready to spread its sickness through the cave. The frontliners staggered as the stench hit them, coughing and trying to cover their mouths, but the gas was already inside. A cold system message told them the truth. Ravaging plague had infected the whole party. Il-yong watched another window pop up, calmly spelling out that every one of his stats had just dropped by almost half. He clicked his tongue, realizing this was his first real taste of a system debuff, and it was no joke. His mind jumped to Manhwa, the red-haired mage who had once wiped out a whole group of foes with the same kind of plague magic. Back then, he had watched her rot enemies from a safe distance. Now he was the one stuck on the receiving end. Out in the gas, the two frontliners felt their strength drain at once, legs turning to lead and arms barely lifting their weapons. They cursed under their breath, knowing that fighting a swarm like this while slowed was close to suicide. The gas spread until it filled the cavern, wrapping the whole party in a sickly haze. Weapons came up anyway, even slowed and coughing. None of them were ready to back down. The plague rat threw its head back and let out a shrill cry that cut through the cave, the plague mist whipping harder around its body. That roar was a signal, and everyone knew it meant the real charge was about to start. With a wild roar, the ratmen burst out of the fog, eyes glowing red and weapons swinging as they rushed straight for the weakened hunters. The plague had done its job. Now the swarm was coming in to finish the job up close. Il-yang narrowed his eye, seeing how the rat men pushed in harder now. He knew they had caught on, that the party was slower and weaker from the plague. The great sword warrior tried to swing, but his blade felt like it weighed a ton. Every muscle in his arms screamed, showing just how hard the plague had hit his strength. The archer fumbled with his bowstring and watched his arrow slip from his fingers. Even simple movements were off now, and losing shots in a swarm like this was deadly. The hunters huddled back to back, gasping for air as the foul mist clawed at their lungs. Dead rat men littered the ground, but an even larger wave closed in around them. Each breath came out ragged, and the casters could feel their mana slipping away with every spell. They knew they could not keep this pace much longer while trapped in the poison. Il-yang shut his eyes for a heartbeat, trusting the support behind him. A magic circle flared under their feet as the healer poured out a cure, showering the party in bright light that fought to burn the plague out of their bodies. The rat men shrieked and stormed forward, maces and shields raised high. They were desperate to crush the hunters before the healing light could fully restore them. The great sword warrior hacked at the nearest ratman and blurted out that, if this was the end, he at least wanted a chance to hit on the guild receptionist. The spearman cursed and drove his weapon through another foe, scolding him for tempting fate when they were already hanging by a thread. Il-yang stared through the poison haze, sweat running down his face as he tried to figure out a way out of this mess. His eyes locked onto the massive ratman leading the swarm, and he figured that if they could bring that one down, the rest might finally break. A system code flashed over the monsters, marking the leader as their key target and proving his guess right. Il-yang's gaze sharpened as he remembered a rare moment when he had taken things easy and relied on a simple trick instead of brute force. His fingers brushed the ring as he weighed that same move, but with dozens of ratmen staring him down, he knew they would block him before he could even start. As the ratmen rushed him, shrieking, Il-yang found himself wishing he had a way to shut their eyes and ears down for just a few seconds. Then a slow grin tugged at the hunter's lips as a better plan finally clicked into place. Il-yang twisted around toward Kim Da-young and asked if she still had the flash ring he had returned to her, while she flailed in protest, upset that he was bringing up something she wanted to keep hidden. Kim Il-yang bared a sharp grin and ordered her to trigger the ring right away, even warning that if she refused, he would happily go first and tell everyone about the shameless things she had done. Kim Da-young snapped back at the hunter, agreeing to do it, but shouting that he would have to answer for whatever came next. Da-young lifted her hands high and yelled for everyone to shut their eyes and cover their ears before she set the ring off. With a sharp snap of her fingers, Da-young triggered the ring, hurling a blinding burst of light straight into the mass of ratmen. The ratmen shrieked and staggered under the sudden glare, their red eyes squeezed shut as the light swallowed the whole front line. Da-young watched the dust settle, scowling as she muttered that this alone was not going to solve their problem. Kim Il-yang stretched out his hand as a system window popped up, and he smirked when he saw they still had 3 more chances to use the trick. He drove his foot into the ground and shot forward, ready to use the blinded swarm before they could recover. Kim Il-yang shot through the dust like a bullet, grinning as the blinded ratmen scrambled after him, but kept falling behind. The massive plague rat threw its head back and roared, its red eyes burning as it locked onto Il-yang in the chaos. Il-yang clicked his tongue, guessing the ratmen had sniffed them out, then met their charge head-on, his blade flashing as he carved a path through the pack, relying on the 7 steps death control he had honed in Murim. Il-yang danced just out of reach, his light steps teasing the ratmen as they howled behind him. Il-yang came to a calm stop in the swirling dust, lifting his gaze to the towering ratman that stepped in front of him, with its jaws spread wide, his fingers curled tight around the sword hilt. Il-yang steadied his breath and ready to clean, finishing thrust. Il-yang lunged forward in a blur, his sword punching straight through the ratman's chest and dropping the creature before it could even swing. The monster staggered around the blade buried in its chest, but instead of celebrating, the hunter stiffened, shocked as a strange dizziness washed over him mid-fight. The plague rat clawed out of the rock, its rotten body wrapped in rags as a sickly mist poured off it and crept through the cave. The filthy rat monster lifted its head and bared its massive teeth, the choking gas around it growing thicker with every breath. A system window warned Il-yang that poison was now eating at his body, and even that small dose already made his head spin. Annoyed that the disease was not enough, he decided he had to deal with the poison before anything else. Before he could act, a rat man burst out of the murk with its claws stretched for his throat, forcing Il-yang to snap his guard back up. His fist shot out first, slamming into the rat man's chest so hard the creature folded over and coughed as it flew back. The impact hurled the rat man across the cavern, carving a long groove in the ground and filling the air with dust and broken stone. Il-yang let out a rough groan as pain rushed through him, but the system announced that impact absorption had kicked in, swallowing part of the blow even as his body grew a bit weaker. The spearman rushed over through the swirling gas, shouting to the newbie and asking if he was still alive, and Il-yang forced out that he was hurt but not done yet. Il-yang narrowed his eyes through the yellow haze, forcing himself to focus on clearing the poison before anything else. The poison burned his throat and he gagged, but when a teammate shouted his name in panic, Il-yang straightened and calmly told him he was fine, almost amused to have someone worry about him for once. The plague rat shrieked like it had already won, while Il-yang watched with a crooked smile, wondering if they really thought that last hit was enough to put him down. Through the rolling fumes, Il-yang faced the plague rat alone, letting it twitch and posture while he measured the distance for his next strike. A slow grin tugged at Il-yang's lips as he called the creature an amateur in his head, knowing anyone who relaxed against a martial artist, still holding back a final move, was begging to be finished. In the next heartbeat, Il-yang was already above the plague rat, dropping like a hammer as a blinding strike tore straight through its body and shook the whole cavern. As the plague rat crashed to the ground and wailed, Il-yang mocked it, saying that letting your guard down like that was how you ended up losing your head. Poison winds whipped around them as Il-yang pressed in, and by the time the dust settled, the plague rat's legs were shaking so hard it could barely stay on its feet. The plague rat hunched in the poison cloud, its thin body shaking as it tried to steady itself, acting like the fight was already over. Kim Il-yang's lips curl into a sharp grin as he notes that the beast has spat out everything it had, and he coolly decides this is when it gets finished. The plague rat lets out a shrill cry and bolts, turning its back in panic, and Il-yang bursts after it, laughing as he warns that anyone who shows their back to a warrior is begging to be cut down. Before the monster can take another step, a blue streak tears across its body, and the plague rat is hurled sideways with a broken cry. The plague rat's head tumbles through the foul air and hits the ground, and Il-yang watches it fall with a relaxed face, quietly certain that the fight is his. The plague rat's body lies still on the cracked floor as a teammate strolls up, praising the rookie's work, and the system flashes a bright notice showing that Il-yang has just leveled up. Right after leveling up, a new skill window drops in front of Kim Il-yang, showing calm yet deadly sword forms. The system explains that integrity is a will that never bends, a blade that cuts straight through hardship, and Il-yang can only stare as the movements burn into his mind. Il-yang tightens his fingers around the sheath, letting the new idea sink into his wrist and grip. Purple power coils around the blade as he prepares to draw it exactly the way the skill showed him. With one smooth pull, Il-yang draws the sword and lets the power ride along the edge, the air around him twisting in blue and gold. He watches the line of his own strike and calmly admits to himself that this is how the skill is meant to be used. A fresh pack of rat monsters storms across the cave, weapons raised and shrieking for blood, racing straight toward Il-yang. Their wild charge is the perfect chance for him to see what integrity can really do. Il-yang raises the short sword and calls on the skill, and cold blue wind whips around the blade like it has a mind of its own. The space in front of him goes quiet as integrity locks his stance into place. He steps in and lets his body follow the current, his sword arm steady while the other hand guides the flow. The strike carries a clean drive that does not sway, a sharpness that feels ready to slice through any pushback. As the blade cuts forward, the blue aura hugs the edge instead of spilling spilling away, moving exactly where he wants it. For the first time, Il-yang feels like the sword is not just a tool in his hand, but a partner that finally acknowledges him. The short sword from the martial world slides into place in his hand, its carved hilt shining against the dark. With integrity flowing through him, the weapon finally looks like it belongs with him, ready for whatever charge comes next. Kim Il-yang lifts the blade in front of his face, eyes steady and almost amused. With the skill wrapped around his sword, even a wave of D-rank beasts rushing at him feels more exciting than scary. Blue light whips out from his swing, drawing sharp lines through the air as the sword moves exactly where he wants it. The hunter bursts forward with a spiked mace in hand, racing straight into the front rat before it can even swing its claws. The mace crashes into the nearest beast, while a blue streak from his sword skill rips across the others, blowing a hole in their charge. Il-yang slips right up to a snarling rat and lets the blue edge pass through it in one smooth line, as if he had marked that path long before he moved. Another monster collapses behind him, while Il-yang twists his body into the next swing, grinning as each motion flows cleaner than the last. His sneaker bites into the stone floor, and he pushes off hard, feet keeping perfect time with the path he has already drawn in his head. Blue lines crisscross through the swarm, each stroke landing exactly where it needs to, until the charging rats are chopped apart and the cave fills with the afterglow of his swings. Kim Il-yang drives in with another wild arc, blue light ripping off his blade as he cuts through the swarm again, a sharp grin stuck on his face. His smile stretches even wider, like this whole mess is nothing more than a fun warm-up. From the back line, the other hunters can only stare as blue lines and white wind wrap around Il-yang, turning the rats in front of him into a blur of broken bodies. The injured woman wipes sweat from her brow and admits that Il-yang's growth scares her, saying she has no hope of keeping up with him anymore. Il-yang meets the next rat head-on, his blade flashing sideways as he cuts it down without losing that crazed, happy look in his eyes. The female hunter just stares, sweat running down her cheek, as it finally hits her that Il-yang fights more like a monster than a person. One more rat slams into the stone and stops moving, the force of Il-yang's strike cracking the ground under it. Il-yang lets his cloak settle as the final rat lies still at his feet, and a pale blue window pops up above him to confirm that the request is complete. The system chimes in with a clear notice that his level has just gone up. Blue windows stack up in front of Kim Il-yang, saying the dungeon is cleared. His level has risen again, and his strength just jumped by 2. He counts it up in his head and realizes he has leveled 3 times today, with his stats climbing hard. The hunter looks over the pile of fallen rats and thinks how generous a D-rank dungeon really is. With the clear done, his mind jumps straight to the items waiting to be picked up. Before Il-yang can move to the loot, the female hunter steps up and calls out to the newbie, clearly wanting a word. The woman gives him a sharp grin and asks what he eats to get that strong, pushing him to spill whatever trick he is using. Il-yang calmly explains that he just eats powerful roots, naming things like millennium ginseng and even rarer underwater ginseng, as if they were normal snacks. The female hunter freezes, sweating as she repeats his words in disbelief, knowing those herbs cost a fortune. Off to the side, another hunter claps his hands and says they should start collecting the items, already thinking about the cash they will make from this haul. The archer with green hair smirks and admits that this part, scooping up rewards after the battle, is what he enjoys the most. Il-yang flashes a sharp grin and steps in, like this is his specialty, already working over a rat corpse for anything valuable. To him, the dead do not need shiny trinkets, so the coins clatter out onto the ground where they can actually be used. The tunnel floor is covered with fallen rat monsters, their bodies ringed with scattered coins and gear. Il-yang studies the mess with narrowed eyes, weighing how best to strip every last piece of value from it. The female hunter wipes cold sweat from her cheek and grumbles that she almost did not make it through that fight, clearly not amused by Il-yang's dark humor. The man beside her stands stiff and uneasy, sharing the same shaken look. The robed woman meets Dasam's protest with a cool look, reminding her that this run boosted 2 of her stats at once. Even so, she trails off, making it clear that something about the way things played out still bothers her. A gleam runs across the strange ornament at Il-yang's waist, as if the item itself has reacted to what just happened. That tiny shift makes it feel like the dungeon still has one more secret to give. As his fingers brush the carved sheath at his side, Il-yang wonders when Dasum became this outspoken. In his memory, she was almost silent, more like a shadow than someone who would argue out loud. Il-yang turns without a word and starts deeper into the dark tunnel, his cloak trailing behind him. Dasum stares after him, baffled at where this strange newcomer is heading now. Il-yang steps into a narrow gap in the rock and the darkness, his face calm but focused. To the others, it just looks like bare stone, yet he clearly expects something more to be waiting here. Il-yang glances back at Mr. Ote-seok and asks for the last torch, acting like going deeper into that dark crack is no big deal. The torch flares to life, its small flame fighting hard against the thick darkness around it. Il-yang takes the torch and says he will just scout ahead and come right back. But that small smile shows he is more excited than worried. The two hunters stare at the gap with sweat on their faces, asking why he would walk back into that place and reminding each other that he barely survived it last time. Deeper inside, Il-yang walks alone with only the torch for company, his footsteps echoing off the wet stone as the tunnel swallows him. Il-yang peers ahead and mutters that it is still really dark, yet his eyes stay steady as he pushes on. Through the shifting firelight, Il-yang's gaze hardens, his instincts telling him that this path is leading to something big. At the end of the tunnel, Il-yang stops short in front of a huge metal door, the kind that only shows up before something serious, and surprise finally cracks through his calm. Il-yang pushes into the dark room and freezes as the torchlight hits a chest stuffed with gold and weapons, way more than he expected to find down here. Staring at the mountain of gear and coins, Il-yang guesses this is everything taken from the adventurers who never made it back out of this crack. The hunters behind him hurry forward, demanding to know what is happening, while Il-yang just lets a small grin slip across his face. When they step up beside him and see the chest for themselves, the two hunters can only stare at the glittering pile and mutter in disbelief. The hoard looks almost unreal, with blades, crossbows, and gold stacked so neatly it feels more like a store display than a monster's nest. Grinning wide, the big hunter jokes that the dungeon rats did all the hard work of dragging this stuff together, and his partner agrees that they should almost thank the little thieves. As they laugh over the loot, the odd sword at Il-yang's waist starts to hum and glow on its own, making him tense up and wonder what just got triggered. Il-yang studies the stacked weapons and chest with new caution, feeling that this tidy pile of equipment is not just easy loot, but the start of something else. Il-yang stares at the heap of weapons by the fire, already guessing there is something weird buried in there again. He steps forward and starts pushing blades aside, following the faint glow at the back of the cave. Il-yang grips a long, slim case he just pulled free and frowns, not sure what he is even holding. The object is a sword sheath marked with a golden bird, and Il-yang can tell right away it comes from the martial world he escaped. Il-yang remembers that gear like this should only show up as special request rewards, yet for some reason he keeps running into martial items in random places. The system labels it as the scabbard of the single-edged sword, a rare item with decent durability, but its true effect is still hidden. Il-yang grins and lifts the sheath, joking that his single-edged sword has finally found its missing partner. He pushes the sword into the scabbard, and as the metal sinks home, strange green energy flares along the blade. As the blade settles into the sheath, green light races along the metal, and phoenix marks shimmer to life. Il-yang watches without blinking, feeling the air twist as the martial energy inside the weapon finally wakes up. The joined sword erupts in a burst of blue and green light, like the whole cave just turned into a storm. With the dragon and phoenix blazing on the hilt and sheath, the weapon feels complete now, and its pressure alone could crush a normal hunter.